Later that day, the rest of the Shiba household returned, Isami among them. The moment she spotted the battered and bandaged members of the Cows Brigade, her instincts kicked in. Her aura flared, and she dropped into a defensive stance. Before she could act, the others quickly stepped in, stopping her. They explained the situation in hurried tones, calming her down, though her skeptical gaze lingered on the injured intruders as she reluctantly stood down. With the tension easing, everyone went inside to change into more comfortable clothes. Moments later, Loki arrived, covered in blood and dirt, a satisfied grin on his face. Behind him were two teenagers, faces barely recognizable beneath bruises and blood, bodies barely standing. Ah, who knew magic could be this satisfying? Loki exhaled, then looked down at the two broken figures and sneered. Know your place, trash. Chow Chow and Vala twitched at the insult, fury in their eyes, but their battered bodies refused to obey them. Tatsuya walked over and observed their condition with mild surprise. You really went all in on them? Huh, he said, then turned toward Asia. Take care of them. Without hesitation, Asia rose from her seat, walked over, and casually grabbed them by the legs. Blood trailed behind her as she dragged the groaning pair across the floor. Ugh, Valley winced. Damn it. Hearing their complaints, Asia stopped, turned back with a smile, tilted her head, and said in a sweet tone, If you don't stop groaning, I'll bury you 6 feet under. She raised a dainty fist in warning. Instantly, both boys went silent. Seeing this, their male teammates rushed forward. Don't worry, Asia-sama. We'll take them to their room. Just please help us heal them. Asia gave a nod and led them away. Once the hallway was clear, Tatsuya waved his hand, cleaning up the blood-stained floor with a bit of magic. Then he looked at Loki. Your powers are sealed again. Go get patched up. Loki groaned. Fine. He turned and followed after the group. Tatsuya sighed and stood up, deciding to check on Kaneko next. In another room of the house, Kuroka sat beside her sister, watching carefully. Kaneko was seated cross-legged, her small frame wrapped in a white aura that fluctuated wildly. Focus, Chiron, Kuroka said gently. Your aura's unstable again. Kaneko frowned deeper and took a slow breath, trying to calm the chaotic flow of energy within her. Gradually, her aura began to stabilize. Smiling softly, Kuroka placed a hand on her sister's back and began circulating her own senjutsu, guiding Kaneko's control. There you go, she said warmly. Now spread it throughout your body, slowly. Don't rush. One-ichan's here. Kaneko nodded. Her ears and tail emerged as she focused, slowly distributing the energy. Meanwhile, Tatsuya reached the door and knocked. No response. He let himself in and paused. Kaneko was asleep on the bed. Her cat ears and tail were out, and she looked visibly older, more mature than before. Her barely fitting clothes clung loosely to her new frame. Tatsuya blinked and turned to Kuroka, who sat nearby with a mischievous smirk. So, what do you think of Chiron now? She teased. Tatsuya gave her a deadpan look. You call this calming her down? She's underage and still has school, you know. Kuroka giggled and leapt on his back. Don't worry, she's not underage anymore. We spent a lot of time in the time chamber. Physically and mentally, she's fine. Besides, this form's temporary. Her senjutsu's still unstable. This'll wear off in a week. Tatsuya sighed, adjusted Kaneko's clothes with magic to better fit her, tucked her in, and gently stroked her head. Kuroka watched silently, her expression softening. Then she hugged him from behind and whispered, Thank you for helping us fix things between us. Tatsuya flicked her forehead with a smirk. Don't overthink it. The two of them left the room quietly, letting Kaneko rest. Back in the main hall, Chow Chow and Vala stood tall, albeit bandaged, their teammates behind them. Tatsuya and Kuroka entered, and immediately, the atmosphere grew heavy. Kuroka gave Tatsuya a quick kiss and stepped aside. Before Tatsuya could speak, Valley and Chow Chow bowed low and shouted in unison, Please train us. Their teammates quickly followed suit. Tatsuya didn't look surprised. Follow me. Moments later, in a separate dimensional space, Tatsuya turned to the group. What's your favorite food? They blinked in confusion. What does that have to do with? Just answer. One by one, they listed their favorites. Tatsuya nodded, then snapped his fingers. 6 identical clones appear before them, exact in appearance, power, and temperament. These are your clones. To eat dinner tonight, you'll need to defeat them in 3 hours. Before they could protest, he handed each of them a black pill. They looked at it suspiciously, but swallowed it. Immediately, their stomachs roared. Tatsuya smiled. Those pills induce extreme hunger. No victory, no food. Good luck. With a final snap of his fingers, each was teleported to a separate battlefield, with their doppelganger standing before them, ready to fight. 3 hours later, Tatsuya re-entered the dimension where he had left the trainees. What greeted him was a battlefield of groans and defeat. Valley, Chow Chow, and the others lay sprawled on the ground, bruised, battered, and crushed in both body and spirit. Each of their doppelgangers sat casually atop their chests like bored victors waiting for round 2. With a snap of his fingers, Tatsuya teleported them all back to his house. He healed them, just enough to stop the bleeding and keep them conscious, but not enough to dull the pain. Crouching beside them with a harmless smile and an innocent tilt of his head, he asked sweetly, "So, how was training?" Their half-lidded eyes locked onto him with pure, unfiltered rage. In unison, the same thought echoed in their minds. I'm going to kill this bastard. Tatsuya, of course, heard it loud and clear and grinned wider. Oh, so you did enjoy it. That's great, because dinner's ready. With a flick of his hand, he used telekinesis to lift and plant each of them at the dining table. They were bracing for disappointment, maybe more punishment. But to their utter shock, dinner was actually served. In front of each of them sat a piping hot meal made up of their favorite dishes. The smell alone made their mouths water. Their stomachs growled like starving wolves. And then they realized something horrifying. They couldn't move. Not a finger. Not a twitch. Their entire bodies were paralyzed. Their hungry eyes turned slowly toward Tatsuya, who simply gave him a thumbs up with that same smug smile. Soon, the rest of the household gathered at a second table nearby, ready to enjoy their meal. Laughter echoed as Kuroka and Loki took one look at the frozen 6 and immediately burst out laughing. Loki, ever the menace, got up, strolled to the paralyzed group, and picked up Vala's plate. He held it near Vala's face, waving the food gently under his nose. What's wrong, White Dragon? Don't you want a bite? Smells heavenly, doesn't it? He inhaled dramatically. Such rich aroma. I might just have to eat it myself. He lifted a spoonful of curry to Vala's face. Say ah. Vala's eyes twitched. His face turned beet red, not just from the embarrassment, but from the betrayal of his own stomach, which rumbled like a storm. The intoxicating aroma overwhelmed him. He tried to look away, but the scent was too powerful. A drop of drool betrayed him. I swear to every god and devil in existence, once I get out of this, Loki dies. Loki cackled and turned to his next target. Chow Chow, your turn. Chow Chow groaned internally. No, not me. Anyone but me. Loki grabbed a chair and sat next to him, casually swinging Chow Chow's plate in front of him. What's this? Not hungry? Such a waste. He did the same spoon trick, leaning in close. Chow Chow's face twitched, but he refused to give Loki the satisfaction. Even as his stomach howled in protest, he glared in defiance. But then, Loki's grin turned devilish. Oh well, if you won't eat it, I will. Chow Chow's eyes went wide as Loki slowly, theatrically, ate from his plate, chewing loudly while staring directly at him. How's it feel, Chow Chow? Loki said between bites. Your favorite food. Inches away, and yet completely out of reach. Feels miserable, doesn't it? I will destroy you. The thought burned in Chow's mind like fire. The others, though equally paralyzed, could only watch with pity and relief that they weren't in the hot seat. But just when they thought it couldn't get worse, a small girl with black hair walked over, 3 small pups in her arms. Ophis-sama, they all screamed in their minds. Please save us. Ophis tilted her head, then nodded slowly. Their hearts lifted with hope until she placed the pups on the table. The pups sniffed the air, walked over to each of their plates, and, without hesitation, grabbed the desserts and carried them back to Ophis. She sat down on a stool, placed the desserts neatly in front of her, and began eating with a blissful smile. The boys stared in silent horror. Their desserts, gone. They turned back toward their now empty plates. Cursing Ophis in their minds, they glared daggers at her, until she looked up from her sweets and climbed into Tatsuya's lap. He whispered something in her ear. Ophis turned to the paralyzed six, licked some whipped cream from her finger, and said, "Thank you for the sweets." The boys blinked. What the hell just happened? Their thoughts spiraled into incoherent chaos as they turned their collective fury back toward Tatsuya. He just smiled and pointed silently toward something. They followed his gesture and saw the three god-slaying puppies now sitting at their table, happily devouring the untouched meals. All three pups turned, locked eyes with the six miserable souls, and let out a smug snort. If one listened carefully, it almost sounded like they were saying, "Get wrecked, losers." And then they went right back to eating. The paralyzed boys could only tremble in rage.
Hey, everyone! If you enjoy my quantum audiobooks, you can support me by becoming a Patreon member. Your support helps me keep creating, and you'll get exclusive perks. You can also access my audiobooks directly through Google Drive. Check out the link in the description. Now, let's get started.
A few days passed by and the boys of the hero faction and Vala group were getting better at dealing with their doppelgangers made by Tatsuya, though they still were unable to have dinner at all for all these days. Konako, whose conditions were now stabilized by Kurika's and the other Nekoshao's help, was now back to normal. In fact, she was now feeling better as she was now able to turn to her more mature form for a couple of hours a day, and even her natural growth, which had stopped for quite a long time, was now back, and she was now growing at a fast pace, making her look a bit mature even in her normal form. Tatsuya, who was back to his normal lifestyle, was once again busy with his work, was standing in front of his house with the members of the Gremory group and his team. Miyuki looked at him and asked, "You really not coming with us, Ani-sama?" Tatsuya looked at Miyuki and nodded his head. "Yeah, I already know that they can pass this promotion test without any problems, and there is also a lot of things that I have to deal with here. Who knows what might happen here when all of us are gone? Those Cows Brigade members are looking for someone you know." Miyuki's face turned grim as she realized what Tatsuya was talking about and asked, "Then we should stay here as well after a dash." "No need for that, Miyuki." Tatsuya interrupted her in the middle of what she was saying. "You all wanted to go to the stores Venelana-san told you about, so why not go with her when you all have the chance? And while you all are there, I would be able to deal with my backlog from my trip." Hearing him mention backlog, Rosias sighed and said, "There is too much to take care of. It's piled up too much." All of them looked at the pair of boss and secretary with a pitiful gaze and nodded their heads. Tatsuya nodded his head as well and said, "Oh, make sure to not cause any trouble, unless someone is asking for it. Cersk was complaining to me that some of his hair have started to turn gray since my last stunt against the council." Hearing that, Rias facepalmed and gave a tired sigh while the rest of Tatsuya's team nodded their heads. Tatsuya gave a nod and then gave a telepathic message. "There is a chance that the old Satan faction might aim for the Underworld. If you all get dragged in some shit, then you all are allowed to go all out. All right." Hearing that, all of them turned serious and mentally nodded their heads. Tatsuya then looked towards the ones who would be taking the test and said, "Best of luck to you all as well. Isamai, if you fail then be prepared for some training." Isamai groaned in annoyance and said, "Yeah, I will make sure to get over with this shit quickly. Don't want to train with you. And make sure to remember that I will get a week off from training if I pass the test." Tatsuya shrugged his shoulders and said, "Fine by me." All of them then gathered in their respective groups and then a magic circle appeared below them. "Well, they are gone now," and then looked towards Rosias and said, "Let us get going as well." Rosias nodded her head and then started following Tatsuya back. Once they entered the house, they all were met with total silence, since even the Vala group and hero faction members were out for their work, leaving only the two of them here along with the two dragon gods. Tiamat still hasn't returned from the familiar forest and Kuromi was still in Kyoto hanging out with Yasaka and sparring with her. Somehow this silence is a bit weird. I have never seen my house this empty. Rosias looked towards Tatsuya and tilted her head and said, "Really? Well, I am a bit used to this type of silence, though my home back at Asgard was not this big, and since I was alone, I am not that bothered by it." Ha ha ha. Rosias let out a dry laugh once she remembered her days of being alone and single back in Asgard. Tatsuya looked at her and thought, "You look like you are really bothered by this." He then patted her back, making the silver-haired woman look at him curiously and said, "This also means that there is no one else except for us, and the dragon gods, here, you know." Rosias looked at him for a while and then, as if she realized something, her eyes blinked for a while and soon a bright red blush appeared on her face. "No, we can't, Tatsuya. We should not do those kind of things before we are married, you know? That's very indecent and wrong. We can't." Tatsuya looked at her with a confused look on his face and said, "What are you talking about? Indecent? What is indecent about going through our work in silence with getting disturbed by the others? Rosias was once again surprised by this, blinked her eyes in shock. Seeing that, Tatsuya smirked and said, "Heh, don't tell me, our pure and beautiful Rose is thinking of doing something indecent with me in the head of yours," and moved his face closer to her, making the silver-haired lady blush in embarrassment. She then lifted her hands and placed it in front of her face to avoid looking directly at Tatsuya, who had a smirk on his face. "And no, I am not thinking about something indecent at all. You are mistaken, yeah, totally mistaken." Tatsuya then grabbed the hands that were blocking his view and moved them aside and asked, "Then what is it that is going through your mind? Won't you tell me, Rose?" Rosias, who was now looking directly at Tatsuya, averted her eyes because of shame. Seeing that, Tatsuya smiled a little and said, "Don't worry," and then gave a kiss on her cheek and said, "Once we are done with our work, I will make sure to have a lot of skinship with you." He then stepped away from the frozen and blushing Rosias and said, "On that note, let's hurry up and finish our work. The sooner the better," and started walking away. Rosias touched her cheek with a dumbfounded expression on her face and subconsciously decides to finish her work as soon as possible. After the little show of Tatsuya flirting with Rosias was over, both of them got into working mode, since seeing the pile of papers in the room was getting too much for their eyes. Afais and Ruya, who were still in the house, went to check on them, but seeing how serious both of them were, they left the room without bothering them. Afais even left a few of her sweets behind as refreshments and then left the pair of alone. Tatsuya and his clones were busy going through the papers, and Rosias as well was doing her job diligently, though there were some moments when her mind wandered somewhere, making her blush intensely, but soon she returned back to her serious self. While all this was going on at some other place, a duo of silver-haired devils were looking at a huge crowd of people standing in front of them without making any movements and having lifeless eyes. Among the crowd, two people stood out, one being a teenager wearing a red cloak and glasses, and other being a young boy with tanned skin and white hair. The older-looking devil nodded his head with a smile on his face and said, "This seems good so far. Are the other preparations complete, Uklid? What about that bag of godly bones? He is not planning on going back on his words, right?" The younger devil lowered the bundle of papers in his hands and nodded his head and said, "No problems noticed, Resim-sama. The hero faction members are currently under our control, and the preparations to use their members to become a medium are done. Regarding Hades' Grim Reapers and that, it doesn't seem that he is planning to go back on his words." Resim nodded his head with a satisfied smile and then asked, "And what about our target? Any signs of them knowing about this?" Uklid shook his head and said, "No signs. From my sources, I can confirm that most of the members of that Basta Tatsuya Shiba's house are currently with the peerage of the Gremory heiress accompanying them for the promotion test of their members. Only Tatsuya Shiba, a Valkyrie, our target, and one other woman of unknown origin is left there with the Tatsuya Shiba and the Valkyrie working in a separate room going through some documents, and our target relaxing in the unknown woman's lap while eating some sweets." Uklid said all that with a plain voice, but Resim, who heard all that, took a few steps back and looked at his with a weird expression on his face and asked, not wanting to be rude or anything, but, "Are you stalking them?" Uklid, who heard that, widened his eyes in surprise and said, "Most definitely not. Why would I even want to stalk that fuck-off? I mean, this is just so that we can know where our target currently is. Yeah, it's not like I have anything else in my mind. I am just making sure that everything goes perfectly, not that I want to know what all he do with Big Sis there. Yeah, I am not doing it to look at them making out. I really want to kill that fucker." Resim looked at Uklid, who had veins popping out on his forehead and the papers in his hands were getting crushed between them. He gulped his saliva and thought, Uklid is scary. Uklid soon calmed himself a bit and said, "Anyway, leaving that aside, everything is in order. Now we just have to focus on how many of these are to be assigned at various places." Resim narrowed his eyes and was about to say something, but Uklid beat him to that and said, "I am thinking of sending at least 90% of these and the Grim Reapers along with that to that fuck our target's place. It will give us the high chances of killing the capturing the target. Though I would suggest that 99% of our forces could do a better job in dealing with him," and showed small smile on his face. Resim blinked in surprise and thought to himself, "Is it only me on Uklid-kun is getting dumber day by day?" Resim gave a cough and said, "That indeed sounds like a good plan, but don't forget that Underworld is our target as well, and we cannot risk any chances of him getting support from there, so we need to do things keeping that in mind as well." Uklid, who heard that, became a bit disappointed but still nodded his head and started discussing with Resim, waiting for Hades to send them the message. Back in Kuok town, Tatsuya, who was busy in his work, felt that someone was looking at him for a past few days, but was unable to find anything wrong with his surroundings, since a certain silver-haired devil was using the best spying magic there is in the world. Not even entities like Great Red and other could find the Agic signature behind the technique. Tatsuya looked around the room since he felt a bit uneasy, but was still unable to figure anything out. He called Ruya through his telepathy and asked her if she could detect something, since she was much better at it compared to him, but she too was not able to find anything wrong. Thinking that it was a bit weird, he called both of them to the same room they were before so that someone would not try anything funny with those two. He then stood up from his seat and dispelled all his clones and said, "Take a break for a while, Rose. Can't have you short-circuiting because of overwork." Rosias dropped her pen on the table and stretched her body while sitting on the chair and looked around the room. Nearly half of them are still left, huh? I will get us some coffee, and was about to stand up from her seat, but just as she said that, the door of the room opened with Ruya and Afais bringing in some snacks and drinks for them and said, "No need for that. Just relax," and placed the things on the table. Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "Thanks Ruya and Afais, thank you for the sweets earlier." Ruya and Afais nodded their heads, with Ruya having a wide grin on her face and Afais with a small smile. Rosias gave them her gratitude as well and decided to rest along with the others. All of them then sat down and started to chat with each other without knowing what was about to happen soon. Tatsuya and Rosias once again started doing their work while Afais and Ruya just sat down in the room with Ruya reading some books she got from Tatsuya and Afais sleeping using with the God Killer pups, though she don't need to sleep. Tatsuya, who was going through some papers, suddenly saw a familiar red circle appear on his desk and stopped what he was doing looked at it along with the others, with Rosias preparing for a possible attack. Soon a projection of a familiar red-headed Siskon appeared. Seeing which, Tatsuya raised his hand and said, "Yo, Cersk, how is it going? Did they pass the test?" Cersk stared silent at Tatsuya and asked, "Please tell me you are here, in Underworld." Tatsuya blinked for a while and said, "No I am not, I still Hadash. Why the hell can you not be here for the one that you are required?" Cersk clutched his head and looked at him with a frustrated expression on his face. The whole room fell silent seeing the sudden outburst from the Mu. Even Afais woke up from his shout and was glaring at the projection with the intent to kill. The pups were growling at him as well. Seeing that Afais was preparing a magic circle in her hand, Ruya immediately stopped her while Rosias calmed down the God Killer pups. Tatsuya nodded, seeing that the situation was fine now, and then looked back at Cersk and asked, "What happened that you want me to be there so badly?" Cersk sighed, and then a holographic screen appeared in front of Tatsuya showing many huge monsters nearly 100 meters tall with a human on top of each of them. There were several other monsters who were even 200 meters tall with a human on top of them as well. Tatsuya, who saw the scene, immediately called Cao and his team, and a small projection of the hero faction appeared in front of him. "What happened, Tatsuya? We are busy, you know." Tatsuya ignored what Cao said and asked, "Are these the members of your team?" and pointed towards the holographic screen. Cao and his team immediately turned around and were surprised seeing the monsters in the screen. They then spotted the people attached to the heads of the monsters and were totally speechless. After they were able to calm down a bit, Cao looked at Tatsuya and simply nodded his head. Tatsuya, who saw this, sighed and said, "Looks like your faction is being used to be the power source for the Annihilation Maker guy." He then turned to Cersk and said, "Miyuki and the others would still be there with Venelana-san. Try contacting them and hold on for a bit." About that, they along with my peerage are already at it, but since those giants regenerate and divide at a very fast pace, all of them having a bit of trouble, well except for one person. He then showed another projection with his team fighting off against the giants, but were not very efficient, since by the time they killed one, some more have been produced by the other giants. But amongst them, a certain blonde-hair green-eyes girl flying on top of a blue dragon's back was firing black energy blasts which were easily able to destroy the giants. Asia is using her anti-healing technique to cut off their regenerations and destroying them completely. Wait a minute. He then formed a magic circle near his ear and called Asia. "Hello Asia." Tatsuya-san, hello, did you want something? No, but are you alright? Yes, we are totally fine, just some giant pests hindering us. Cersk-san might have already told you about, right? Yes, he did. And I am calling you regarding this same too. You see, the people on top of their heads are from Cao's faction. Check whether they are still alive, or not, and please keep their bodies intact, even if they are dead. Oh, so these people sticking out of their heads were from hero faction? Huh. Alright, Tatsuya-san, leave it to me, but there are too many of them to take care of. Regarding that, Cersk, ask your people to force teleport those giants near Asia, and Asia, ask Isamai to boost up and transfer the power to you. Blast them all in one shot. Oh, mind their bodies though. Cersk and Asia, who heard his plan, nodded their heads in approval. Cersk then looked at Tatsuya and asked, "Aren't you going to come here to deal with the situation?" "Oh, about that, I have some company here as well." "Alright, Ruya, let them in." Ruya, who had a mischievous smile on her face, gave a thumbs up, and just as she did, purple fog started surrounding them. Cersk, who saw that, widened his eyes and said, "Kua is under attack as well." Tatsuya nodded and said, "Well, then try to survive on your end. Ask some people to head there to help you guys. Cao, call Volley and tell him that he is attacking Underworld and there might be a chance for him to be there as well. And hurry up to take care of your faction members. See you guys on a bit." And before they could even answer him, their projections disappeared. Tatsuya looked at Rosias and said, "Secure all the paperwork. We don't want to do this all over again, right?" Rosias nodded and started placing barriers over the pile of documents to prevent them from getting destroyed. Tatsuya looked at Ruya and said, "Let them in. They must be quite frustrated by now." But wouldn't that be funnier to let them wait a bit longer? Alright then, Rosias, let's finish all these papers and then we will get down to welcoming our guests." Rosias blinked in surprise and asked, "Will that he alright?" Tatsuya and Ruya just showed a charming smile on their faces which made Rosias totally speechless. She sighed and just nodded in agreement and once again started going through the papers. 20 minutes later, Tatsuya and Rosias were finally able to finish their paperwork and Rosias got ready to battle. Tatsuya stood up from his seat as well and stretched his body and looked at Rosias and Rias and asked, "You guys ready?" Rosias, who saw the giants on the screen earlier, was a bit nervous but was still eager to know how would she fare against them and nodded her head. Rias just looked at him with a smile and gave a thumbs up. Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "Well then, I have prepared everyone's favorites today, make sure to eat to your fill," and some of his clones started coming in the room with various dishes in their hands and started arranging their table. Rosias comically fell down on the ground once Tatsuya said that while Rias and Afais were shouting "Banzai Banzai" with their hands up in the air. Rosias got up from the ground and asked, "Wait a minute, isn't there something more important that we have to do?" But before she could finish, Rias looked at her and said, "Then are you telling us to leave this appetizing food behind just to deal with some small fries, Valkyrie-chan?" Afais nodded her head, asked well and said, "You are stopping me from eating the sweets that Tatsuya prepared for me just to deal with some bugs," and stared directly in Rosias' eyes. Rosias, who soon remembered the identities of the two girls in front of her, gulped her saliva and immediately shook her head. Both Rias and Afais sat down to eat their food, seeing which Rosias just sighed. She then felt a tap on her shoulder and saw Tatsuya smiling at her with a bottle of wine in his hands and asked, "Want to drink some with me, Rose?" Rosias started at him with a deadpan look on her face for a while but finally sighed and nodded her head with a helpless smile on her face. Tatsuya nodded his head and both of them sat down to have their meal as well. Meanwhile, somewhere else a silver-haired devil was gripping a monitor with all his strength and shouted, "Stop eating that delicious-looking fool, you fucker! How long are you going to let us stay here? Open the barrier already!" Seeing him like that, the older silver-haired devil who was peeking at him from the slightly opened door thought, Uklid-kun really became a stalker. What's more is that he is stalking his brother-in-law. Once they were done eating their food, Tatsuya and the remaining residents of the Shiba residence stretched their bodies to get a bit warmed up. Afais looked at Tatsuya and asked, "Are they here to get me?" Tatsuya looked at her and nodded his head and said, "Well, they are idiots, thinking that they could tame you or try to take your power. But anyways, don't think much about it. Not that big of a problem for us." Afai stared at him for a while and nodded her head and said, "I will help as well. They are here for me after all." Tatsuya patted her head with a smile on his face and said, "That would be very helpful then." He then removed the barrier that was preventing the Cows Brigade members to enter his domain, and once again the violet fog started to surround them. This time Tatsuya didn't interfere with the process and soon all of them were in a separate dimension, which was a totally plain space devoid of any structures whatsoever. In the space, countless devils, grim reapers and the giants made by the Annihilation Maker were present, and all of them immediately took their stance once they saw their targets preset inside the space. Tatsuya looked around for a while and then gave a whistle filled with admiration and said, "You certainly prepared a whole lot to meet me, ain't you? By the way, where is my brother-in-law, Uklid?" The leader of the devils, which was surprisingly Shilba, who was killed by Cersk earlier, came forward and said, "You don't need to worry about that human, just give us Afais, and we promise to kill you without any suffering." Tatsuya looked at Afais and said, "That's what he said, Afais." Afais nodded her head and walked forward, much to the surprise of the Cows Brigade members, who thought that there would be some resistance in the way. But seeing her accepting that so easily made the devils and the Grim Reapers smirk and think that their sheer number put a pressure on them, making the subject to them so easily. Shilba, who was about to laugh and mock Tatsuya for being a coward, immediately stopped once he felt a huge amount of black aura surrounding Afais, and immediately fell down on his knees. He then looked around and saw that everyone except for the giants were kneeling on the ground, and then looked at the dark aura with a terrified look on his face. Tatsuya formed a barrier around Rosias to prevent her from being in a similar condition as the Cows Brigade members and said, "What happened, Shilba-san? You wanted Afais, right? Go ahead, take her." Shilba glared at Tatsuya and wanted to say something to him, but the pressure which was coming out of Afais's body, which was getting bigger and bigger, made it impossible for him to speak anything. Soon the aura around Afais faded away, and now a huge black dragon with razor-sharp teeth and golden eyes was standing in her place. Afais looked at her body and said, "It's been a long time since I changed to my dragon form. Don't worry about destruction, I will make sure that the space don't get destroyed," said Tatsuya, assuring Afais to not hold back against the enemies. The giants made by the Annihilation Maker started moving towards the huge dragon once they sensed that the space was stable and were ready to attack. Seeing them walking their way, Afais as well charged magic in her mouth and was ready to fire at them. Tatsuya, seeing that, suddenly realized something and looked towards Rias and said, "Bring the humans on top of their heads just before her attack destroys them. I am busy maintaining the spatial field." Rias shrugged her shoulders and just focused on Afais's attack so as to not miss the moment her attack connects to the giants. Meanwhile, Afais, who had finally done charging her attack, flew up so as to get above the giants, and a huge magic circle appeared in front of her mouth. The devils and the Grim Reapers, who felt the energy inside the magic circle, started sweating and immediately deployed a barrier in hopes of not getting caught in the attack. Seeing the scene in front of him, Tatsuya smirked and said, "Hey Rose." The silver-haired Valkyrie, who was awestruck seeing the dragon god's magic circle, looked towards Tatsuya with a curious look on her face. Tatsuya pointed his finger towards the devils and Grim Reapers and said, "Nullify their barrier. You were practicing barriers lately, right?" Hearing which, Rosias nodded her head without thinking, but soon she got back to reality and her eyes widened in shock. "What? You want me to nullify all of these?" Tatsuya nodded his head with an expression which said, obviously, seeing which Rosias' lips twitched in annoyance. Ah, don't worry, I will provide the magic power to you, you just need to nullify them, that's all. That slows all my ass. And why the hell are you speaking as if this is something normal to do? She then looked at her teammates, which consisted of the 2 dragon gods who are supposedly the strongest beings in the world and a human who is actually the strongest being of the world, and massaged her temples. Sigh, I will have a drink after all this is over to relieve some of my stress, and various magic circles appeared around Rosias, whose patter continuously kept on changing. Asterisk asterisk. A very loud roar was heard by all the people who were present inside the spatial field, which was followed by a huge pillar of magic energy fired by Afais, who was looking started charging another attack in her mouth. Most of the giants which were present on the field immediately got destroyed by the blast without even getting a chance to regenerate, and those which were not destroyed completely suffered major damage and were in the process to regenerate. Most of the Grim Reapers and Devils also got caught in their attack, but because of the barriers that they deployed earlier they were able to prevent any serious injuries. Nah, this author bastard is lying. All those who got caught in the attack are hardly breathing. Heck, some of them don't even have their bodies left, said Tatsuya, staring in space as if looking at someone. What? Ah, nothing. Don't mind me. Cough cough asterisk. Anyways, the Devils and the Grim Reapers who saw the huge dragon charging another blast started panicking, and Shilba looked at the Grim Reapers and said, "There's no time. Bring that thing out. That's our only chance." The leader of the Grim Reapers who heard that nodded his head and raised his scythe in the sky and then slammed it on the ground, and immediately a huge magic circle appeared. As soon as the magic circle was formed, both Ruya and Afais stopped for a bit and widened their eyes in surprise. They certainly did prepare well to catch Afais. Gotta admit that they at least are good enough to think that far. Tatsuya nodded and said, "Well, big bro Uklid is really smart, you know. Without him the old Satan faction would have collapsed much earlier." Rosias, who was busy in nullifying the barriers, didn't ask anything but was still curious as to know what that magic circle was. Soon enough her question was answered as something started to rise up from the magic circle. A bizarre creature with the features consisting of both a dragon and a fallen angel came into view, with its whole body driven into a cross by nails and blood coming out from all over its body. Rosias was totally speechless seeing the creature and had her mouth opened wide. The Devils and Grim Reapers who saw the dragon god stop for a bit smirked, and Shilba said, "Speechless, Afais? Well, why won't you be? After all, this is your natural enemy, the dragon slayer Samael. Your doom is near you, emotionless dragon BC dash." But before he was able to finish, Samael's whole body glowed red and started compressing before it turned into a red beam of light and got absorbed in a blue and white ball with M written over it. The ball then started flying towards Tatsuya at a very fast speed and was caught by him, who looked at the ball and said, "A dragon type, huh? Well, a good catch." He then looked at Shilba and said, "You were saying something earlier, please continue." After a few minutes of mindless carnage caused by a dragon loli, a pile of human bodies was floating behind Ruya, who was successfully able to save most of the humans on top of the giants' heads, but still a few were dead with their bodies totally destroyed, making it impossible for her to recover them. Tatsuya also had a few elite Grim Reapers and Devils from the Cows Brigade in half-dead state restrained by magic, and decided to give them to Cersk so that he can talk with the skeleton god. Afais, who was done with her job, was sitting on her throne made of god-killer pups who grew their sizes a bit with a lot of sweets in her hand. Last but not the least, Rosias was busy studying the dimensional barrier they were in, since Tatsuya told her that it was impossible for even Satan-class beings to get out of here easily, which immediately picked up her interest. The rest of the corpses, there weren't any, since Afais's attack obliterated everyone on the field in a matter of few blasts. If not for Tatsuya saving the elites in their half-dead state, they too would have vaporized without any traces left behind as well. Once both Tatsuya and Ruya were done with their jobs, Tatsuya teleported at a distance away from there, but soon returned back with 2 boys, one teenager and other a child, whose bodies were shrunken so much that their skeletons could be outlined by a naked eye. "Let's go back then, everything is done here. Rose, you can study the space barrier later. This guy is the one who made it, ask him to help you later." Tatsuya called Rosias and gestured towards the unconscious George over his shoulder and then destroyed the barrier. Soon all of them were back to their previous location, and Tatsuya and Ruya immediately started putting the bodies that they brought in the underground training field, while Rosias brought the 2 almost dead hero faction members to the medical ward, where Tatsuya soon arrived once he was done dealing with the bodies and used healing magic on the 2 so as to heal their injuries. Now they just had to wait till they gained their consciousness back and have a meal to regain their strength. Once all that was done, Tatsuya and the others gathered once again in the room they were previously in. Afais, who was staring at Tatsuya without saying anything, gathered attention from all of them, and even Tatsuya and Ruya were unable to know why she was doing that, since she had no thoughts about it. Tatsuya, who was used to her antics a bit, patted her head, receiving which Afais's lips showed a small unnoticeable smile on her face. He then smiled as well and said, "Good job, Afais. I will make sure to make your favorite sweets tonight." Hearing which, she nodded her head with a slight glimmer in her eyes. Tatsuya then looked at Ruya and Rosias and said, "I will go and check the situation in Underworld, look after the people whom we have brought here," and teleported away without waiting for any response from them. "Let's go, Ratsu. Keep firing. Don't stop. Roar." Tatsuya, who teleported to Underworld at the location where he felt the presence of his teammates, was welcomed by the sight of a beautiful blonde-haired girl riding on top beautiful 10m long blue western dragon. It's just that the beautiful girl was totally covered in blood and the dragon looked more like an evil dragon shooting lightning with a ferocious expression on his face while also being covered in blood. I could somewhat guesses what is happening here, but mind telling me about it? All of them who heard Tatsuya's voice immediately turned around with a surprised look on his face. But soon that expression turned into relief as all of them immediately rushed towards him and some of the devils were rushing at an astonishing speed towards him. Tatsuya who saw them was surprised and thought, what the hell happened here for them to look this relieved on seeing me, and waited for the incoming devils to explain the situation to him. But before any of them could even reach him a magic circle appeared in front of Tatsuya and a long crimson-haired man appeared out of it and latched on to Tatsuya. Cersk? Wadash. Cersk who just now appeared in the area grabbed Tatsuya's shoulders and started shaking him and said, Tatsuya-kun. Tatsuya-kun? Please save the underworld. Tatsuya who was being shaken by Cersk with the full force of his Satan class power had some cracks formed below him and asked, what the? How much damage did those giants cause to make you like dash? No save the underworld from that golden-haired demon riding on that evil dragon, and pointed his finger towards the said figures. Tatsuya looked at where he was pointing and with a frown on his face said, that's just Asia and her family dash. Shut that crap bastard. I don't want to hear that. Do you think that I am lying? See these gray-haired strands. Do you think that I am lying? Tatsuya was taken aback by how Cersk reacted and was unable to think how to react to that. What the hell has been happening here? Why is he acting like this? Tatsuya looked at others who too were taken aback by Cersk and just before Graphia could explain a very strong earthquake occurred making all of them fall down on their butts and a huge pillar made up of black magic energy appeared where the giant whom Asia was attacking earlier was. See that punk? This happened. Boom, boom, boom. A huge dome of the same magic energy which was misfired by Asia was seen a few kilometers away. And this too. Rumble. Rumble, rumble. Suddenly the whole area got covered by black thunderclouds spreading almost 10 kilometers in all directions. Multiple lightning bolts were fired at the ground causing massive damage all over the place without any discrimination. If not for the evacuation that had already been done, then it would have been hard to tell who the terrorist amongst them really was. This as well, see this with your eyes widen open you black-haired human op bastard. Suddenly a very bright green light started to come out of Asia's body which soon died down and revealed her to be cladded in a bright golden armor. Asia looked all over her body and with an happy expression on her face shouted, yes, I finally unlocked my balance breaker, now I can kick the shit of all these bastards in a much better way, yai. On the other hand Cersk was clutching his head with both his hands and shouted, no. Asia who heard a sudden shout which was not really clear saw everyone and showed a refreshing smile on her face and gave a thumbs up. She then jumped from her familiar's back towards the last remaining 200 giant and punched her with her fist covered in black magic energy and sent it flying a few kilometers away. A few moments later a huge explosion was seen at the place where the giant was punched seeing which a certain red-headed Mu had his eyes and mouth opened wide. After Asia was done with her fight for the cause of saving the underworld, she and her familiar landed on the ground and she looked at the others with a smile. She then looked at Cersk whose mouth was still wide open because of shock and with a radiant smile on her face said, don't worry Cersk-san, those giant fuckera are now gone for good. I pummeled each of those giant walking assholes to ground and made sure that those shitheads don't regenerate again. The underworld is safe now. Cersk with his mouth still opened looked around and saw black smoke rising in the sky and the ground looking like life has never existed on the land for as far as he could see. He then looked at Asia and thought, safe my ass you adorable angelic demoness riding on an evil dragon. He then turned his head towards Tatsuya who averted his eyes as soon as their gazes met. Look at me you op bastard. Look me in the eyes and say that the underworld is safe. Phew, that was really tiring. The new balance breaker took a lot since I am not used to it said Asia as she deactivated her balance breaker and stretched her body. She then turned towards her familiar which was a sprite dragon, who was now totally grown up because of training in the time chamber, and motioned him to lower his head, to which the dragon complied and lowered his head. Good work there Ratsu, you really did a good job, there. See everyone is totally speechless by our performance today and looked towards the others who just showed the girl and dragon duo a wry smile on their faces. How about it Tatsuya-san, we did good, right? And looked towards Tatsuya with a smile on her face and with a face which seemed to be saying, praise me. Praise me? Tatsuya who heard this question stiffened a bit, but instantly expression changed and he looked at her with a charming smile and didn't say anything. This is the best choice, no need to say anything. Seeing his choice of response almost all of them wanted to retort but before they were able to say anything Tatsuya looked at the and showed a smile to them as well. Asia and her familiar who saw Tatsuya's smile were also smiling as they got praised by him and Asia said, see, Ratsu-kun, even Tatsuya-san agrees, let's do our best again when the underworld is in a crisis. No. A certain redhead who heard Asia talking to the dragon immediately shouted without thinking anything making all people to look at him with a slight surprise. I mean, Asia-kun, there is no need for you to do this much for Underworld since you are not affiliated to our faction, right? It would not look good if every time we were to rely on you if something like this happens, right? Asia furrowed her brows a bit and thought about it for a while and said, that certainly is true. Well it can't be helped. But then a charming smile once again appeared on her face and she said, "But don't hesitate to ask my help if my friends were in danger. After all, many of my friends live here. I will take care of the matter if something like that were to happen." Hearing those sweet words along with the charming smile and her beautiful voice, Asia looked like an angel at that moment. However, to a certain red-headed Mu, those words were nothing but threat. Those words said by Asia in a setting where almost everything in the surrounding was destroyed, smoke rising from various places, no signs of life anywhere nearby, and an Asia totally covered in blood with an evil dragon behind her made a perfect scene of dread inside Cersk's mind. To him the smile didn't look charming even one bit, it was like a viscous smirk to Cersk's eyes, and seeing all that, a shiver went down the Mu's spine, making him shiver up a bit. He took a few deep breaths to calm himself down and looked towards the boss of the Demoness. Tatsuya, who saw Cersk looking at him, was about to use his telepathy to know what he was thinking, but before he was even able to, Cersk grabbed Tatsuya's shoulder and threw him high up in the air, shocking everyone near him. He then took out his wings and immediately flew up in the air to catch up to Tatsuya and also transformed into his super form. Tatsuya, who was also a bit surprised by Cersk's sudden action, used his telepathy on him and sighed. He then noticed the Mu covered in power of destruction rushing towards him and didn't do anything. Cersk, seeing that, didn't even flinched a bit and punched Tatsuya's gut with his full power, to which Tatsuya just blocked it with his hand covered in magic so as to not get damaged by the power of destruction. The moment when Cersk's fist connected to Tatsuya's hand, a very large shock wave got released from the collision and an extremely loud noise was heard for over 100 kilometers. Cersk then freed his hand and turned back to his normal form and with a relieved sigh said, "HAAA. Now I feel a bit better." He then looked at Tatsuya and with a said, "Thanks for being the punching bag," but in the next instant Tatsuya punched Cersk as well, who too was able to block it without much difficulty. "Now then, take responsibility for Isakun's actions and turn everything back to normal. I have too many things to deal with right now. Tell me what happened in Kyoah later and everything you know about the incident." But just as he was about to teleport, a small magic circle appeared in front of him and a projection of Milika's appeared from it. "Father? Father?" One of the bigger giants suddenly came crashing down on council building. "Grandfather got caught in the explosion and is heavily injured. Hurry up and come here. Bring grandma and the others as well." Both Tatsuya and Cersk fell silent at the sudden news, and Cersk looked at the sky and said, "Of all places she could have thrown the giant, why the hell did it have to be the council? Your father is injured as well, you know? And sorry about her throwing the giant at the council." He then thought, "Though it is my fault since I changed the trajectory a bit to make him land near Zatifox. Why the hell were you at council, you bastard? It's your fault for the destruction of the council building." Cersk looked at him and said, "That is not that big of a problem, father, and the other older councilmen have got more serious wounds during the war times, so they are used to it. The problem here are the weaker councilmen. They are going to make a lot of complaints now, since they might think that it is a scheme from someone who don't want them to be on the council. I can imagine the amount of paperwork that would be coming to me. Not to mention that idiot magical girl will put most of her work in my pile too. Just kill me already? Stab my heart with a holy sword and just kill me." Tatsuya looked at the Mu with pity and said, "Don't yet die on me. Here, take this, it will at least ease your worries a bit." Cersk looked at Tatsuya and saw him holding his hand out with a pair of spectacles in his hand and a beautiful red-colored pen in the other. Cersk looked at the items with a curious gaze, seeing which Tatsuya said, "These glasses will let you read at a speed of 500 words per second. Hearing which Cersk's eyes widened in surprise as he carefully took the specs from Tatsuya's hands and looked at it as if he was holding the world's largest diamond in his hands. "Why, you are telling the truth, right? This treasure will really let me read at that speed," to which Tatsuya just gave an assuring nod. Cersk gulped his saliva and kept the glasses in the case which Tatsuya gave him and then stored them in his pocket. He then eyed the beautiful red pen and asked, "And what about the pen? Don't tell me, it will let me write at the speed of 100 words per second or something." Tatsuya chuckled and said, "Nah, it's nothing that great." Hearing which Cersk slumped his shoulders, feeling a bit disappointed. "It's just let you make 5 more clones of yourself when you put your demonic energy into it. Though your power gets dived equally as During the later part of sentence, Cersk was already hugging Tatsuya very tightly. Tight enough to shatter any mid-ultimate class being without any problem. "Thank you, Tatsuya-kun. You are the best. I am so happy right now that I couldn't tell you. I am a very blessed person to have you as my friend." Tatsuya, who was being hugged by a crying Cersk, just patted his back and let him be and thought, "Your dad might be dying right now." A few days after Asia saved the underworld, Tatsuya was walking along with Cersk and Azazel, who were being followed by Rosias, Tobio, and Dulio, an exorcist who turned into an angel using Michael's Joker card. He was also the #1 exorcist possessing the Longinu Zenith Tempest. "Once again, Tatsuya-san, thank you for complying with my request," Dulio said, looking at Tatsuya with a smile on his face. Tatsuya looked back at him and said, "For the nth time, stop that, Dulio-san. I already said that it was not that big of a deal to begin with. Asia also enjoys interacting with the children at the orphanage, so it's fine. I know that, but still I am glad that you decided to cook for the children at different orphanages on my request. The food you made was really excellent." The others who saw the interaction between the blonde and the black-haired boys were a bit confused as to what they were talking about. It was just Rosias amongst those four who gave a tired sigh and thought, I know that it was good thing to do for all those children, but the fan letters that have been coming in lately are too much of a hassle to deal with. She then looked at Dulio with narrowed eyes and thought, all because of that blonde angel bastard got too emotional to the point of shedding his tears when he tried his food. Azazel, who was not knowing what was happening between Tatsuya and Dulio, gave a cough and said, by the way, why are you coming along with us? Do you have some business to deal with at the place where we are going, Tatsuya? Tatsuya and Dulio looked at Azazel and soon all the gazes were on Tatsuya since none of them knew why he was tagging along with them since he was not even a part of the alliance. I haven't given you the details about Kuaha's invasion yet. Well, getting directly to the point dash. He then formed a portal in the air from which a few people dropped on the ground. Seeing the people who just came out of the portal, both Cersk and Azazel widened their eyes in shock and were left totally speechless. Even Dulio and Tobio were surprised by the people whom they just saw and narrowed their eyes. I want to ask him why a god who is part of a faction belonging to the Alliance attacked me along with the Cows Brigade. Hey, haven't I killed Shilba before? How is he still alive? Tatsuya, who heard his question, was about to answer, but then he noticed Azazel thinking about something seriously and stopped. Sephiroth Graal. To think that the Holy Grail would be in the hands of the devils, this is very troublesome. They could make foes which are defeated with great effort come back to life. Seems like that the world is really in the mood of fucking all of us. Cersk looked at Azazel seriously and then back at the unconscious Shilba and thought, it's really serious matter. If what all is known about that sacred gear is true, then all of us are in great trouble, well, except for him, of course. And looked at Tatsuya with an expressionless face. Tatsuya just put the bodies back and said, well then let's get going and see what the the Bone King has to say. All of them walked towards Hades's palace with a serious expression on their faces, ready to fight any people who might block their way. Did they seriously send all the Grim Reapers after Afais? But the fact that the whole place was totally empty without any sort of noise. The only sound which they were able to hear was the sound of their footsteps. I don't think that it is necessary, but how many Grim Reapers came to Kuah? Tatsuya looked at Azazel, who asked him this question, and then looked at Rosias, who took out a sheet of paper from her pocket and gave it to Azazel. Azazel looked at the paper for a while and nodded his head and said, yup, that explains it. No need to worry, you all ease up. This place right now is even safer than you can even imagine, and passed on the sheet to Cersk, who after seeing it nodded and returned it back to Rosias. Rosias then gave the sheet to Tobio, who was looking at the paper with curiosity, who when read the number of people that were dealt by Tatsuya looked at him with a deadpan look and asked, why is there still a plus even after numbers this big? Tatsuya looked at Tobio and said, oh that, a few of the bodies were destroyed without any traces left of them, so we're not able to add them to the list. Soon all of them came in front of a huge door and stopped in front of it. Azazel turned around and looked at Cersk and the other members of the alliance and said, now then listen up here, even if we have our suspicions on him, don't act too recklessly there so as to not FBI open up, and the door was locked open by Tatsuya. RM the alliance, why do I even try when this guy is around? Oh well. Let's go with the flow? Hands on your back where I can see them? Get away from the little lady, you bastard. Azazel also went in the room whose door was just kicked open by Tatsuya and followed his lead. The others looked at the two idiots who just went inside and were unsure what to say about this. All of them just sighed and went in the room as well. Once all of them were inside, Cersk and the other three who just came in saw Tatsuya and Azazel having a dissatisfied expression on their faces. What happened? Is something wrong? Tatsuya and Azazel looked at Cersk and said, nothing. We just realized that the bone god does not have a bone, so my earlier act is now ruined. Yeah, now I just realized this, that just like the angels he too has not experienced that since he came into existence. How pitiful. Cersk just blinked his eyes in surprise hearing what the two idiots standing in front of him just said. He was about to say something to them, but before he was able to say it, all of them heard a voice. Pluto, hide those magazines immediately. And when the hell did Underworld have a branch of them? Pluto? Oh yeah, he is not here right no dash. And soon they saw a skeleton wearing robe carrying a huge pile of magazines in his hand came out from another room. The skeleton's eyes then met with those of the others who were looking at him with a surprised look on their faces. This one as well. Yeah, this and this too. I can't believe he has such rare things here. There is one about gods as well? What kind of source does one need to get your hands on this epic shit? How the hell do you have these magazines? Forget about race. You have ones about gods from almost all pantheons as well? How the hell is this possible for someone who doesn't even have that to have all these treasures? They are of no use to you? So why? Shouted Azazel while looking at Hades. This stuff is too dangerous if it falls into wrong hands. I will make sure to keep it safe with me, muttered Tatsuya, who started to put the research books in his storage. Everyone present there looked at Tatsuya and thought, your hands are looking the most dangerous right now, you know. Azazel looked at Tatsuya, who was busy stuffing away the stuff, and said, I will help you as well, and immediately used his magic to summon all the remaining books towards himself. Tatsuya looked at the person who suddenly snatched away the treasure and didn't say anything. Azazel, who noticed him silently staring at him, didn't think much about that and stored the books before anyone could disturb him. Only the boy X-boy ones were left there. Have fun looking at those muscles and DS, thought Tatsuya while smirking internally so as to not cause any suspicion to Azazel. While the two men of culture were doing their stuff, the rest of the people who came along with those two were looking at the tied-up skeleton who was looking down in shame and seemingly wanted to hide himself in a hole. If you two are done with your stuff, shall we deal with the real reason we came here for? Tatsuya and Azazel looked at Cersk and tilted their heads with a confused look on their faces, seeing which Cersk had a few veins popping up on his forehead. TCH was all that he said before pointing his finger towards the tied-up skeleton god. Both Azazel and Tatsuya smacked their fists on their palms and nodded their heads. Yeah, now then Hades, do you know why we are here? Asked Azazel while looking at the skeleton who was tied up in a golden chain. Tatsuya snapped his finger and 6 chairs appeared around Hades, seeing which all of them looked at Tatsuya, who motioned them to sit down. After all were seated on their chairs, they once again focused on the skeleton who looked at Tatsuya with an angry expression on his face. Skull. Tatsuya smiled at him and said, hello, and waved his hand, seeing which the god just turned angrier. Just what are you here for? Said Hades, who was immediately met with glares from Tatsuya, Azazel and Cersk, which immediately silenced him. You really want to ask that, Hades? Said Cersk with a serious look on his face. Dude, it's too late for feigning ignorance, you know. Absence of all your grim reapers is already saying it in itself, said Azazel, who just sighed looking at the god. Hades narrowed his eyes and glanced at Tatsuya, who noticed it almost immediately. He then smiled and snapped his finger and several bodies started falling from a portal. Seeing the bodies, Hades was shocked, seeing his elite grim reapers in half-dead state. I will just be straight with you, we didn't come here to know why you did this. Those types of shit can be done on a later date with everyone. What we want to know is whether you are the only one who is involved in it or your whole faction, asked Cersk. Hades looked at Cersk and said, does it really matter to you who all were involved in it? Oi Hades, you do know that we are in an alliance, right? And what is the purpose of that alliance? Asked Azazel. Shut it, fallen brat. I know, and I ask once again, what is it to you or anyone else in the alliance about what I do? Cause as far as I know, neither did the alliance that we signed breached the privacy of individual members of the alliance, nor did I do anything that was against what the alliance was for. Azazel looked at him with a bit of surprise and said, how can you say that when your subordinates were working with the cow dash? But Hades interrupted him and said, are you claiming that my subordinates were working with Cow's brigade? Looks like you even suspect the members of the alliance as well, huh? Then you might have some evidence that might prove your claim, right? Because as far as I know, my grim reapers just reached there at the same time the members of the brigade arrive. Hearing his answer, everyone except for Tatsuya got angry at him and started to release their auras to the extent that the whole castle started shaking the pressure that was being released by the 5 of them. But at that moment Tatsuya said, then does that mean you were not working with Cow's brigade? Hearing Tatsuya's question, all of them looked at him with a confused expression on their faces. Hades also turned towards Tatsuya, who was looking at him with a curious expression on his face, though he totally ignored the fact that instead of his usual blue eyes, Tatsuya had a pair of red ones with 3 tomos inside each of them. What is he planning? Was the thought that came to each of their minds as they looked at Tatsuya curiously. And what will you do if I said yes, Tatsuya Shiba? I wonder about that. Azazel give a call to MT Olympus. I mean really? You are not going to blow his whole body apart or anything that will give us more headache, okay? Just wait a minute. And stop with that look. Azazel looked at Tatsuya with a stupefied look on his face and started saying things that just made Tatsuya seem like he was an unreasonable person. In response, Tatsuya just stared silently at him without saying anything, which for some reason made him stop and did what Tatsuya asked him to do. Soon a small projection of a man wearing clothes which were barely covering his totally chiseled chest appeared in Azazel's hand. If it isn't the lonely governor of the fallen angels. So what made you remember of this famous god today? Hello Zeus, long time no see. Well you see, a friend of mine had something to discuss with you, so can you spare me some of your time? Why was there a pause before you said friend? Well, whatever, fine, I can spare some time for your friend. So who is it? Azazel looked towards Tatsuya, who was looking curiously at him, and asked, why was there a pause? I want to know that as well. Anyway, it's nice to meet you, Zeus-san. I am Tatsuya Shiba, a man of culture and Azazel's friend. You see, there was a complaint that I wanted to register about one of MT Olympus's employee. After he said that, he was met with total silence from not only Zeus but also the people who came along with him and were looking at him with a dumbfounded expression on their faces. Currently in a huge hall inside Hades's castle, a few people were sitting around a table having a cup of tea along with some snacks, though the atmosphere was not looking peaceful at all. Tatsuya, Cersk and Azazel were the ones who were sitting around the table along with 3 other people who came from MT Olympus. Rosias and the other 2 were standing behind Tatsuya, and the other 2 being totally vigilant so as to make a move whenever necessary. The other 3 people who came from MT Olympus on hearing Tatsuya's complaint were staring at him intently as if trying to perceive what he was. These people were some of the chief gods from their factions, namely Zeus, who was wearing clothes which were openly showing his chiseled body, Apollon, who was wearing a chiton, and Artemis, who for some reasons was wearing an armor and was glaring a bit at Tatsuya, though she is just annoyed being in a room which have huge male over female ratio. Also the fact that this pervy fallen is not the best to hide his intentions is annoying her, were the thoughts that Tatsuya had. Cough cough asterisk. Suddenly Apollon gave a fake cough so as to get some attention, and seeing that he was successful he looked at Tatsuya with a smile and asked, so, you told us that you some complaints with one of our employee, more specifically Hades, Can you please elaborate us on that matter? All of them then looked at the skeleton who was sitting a bit further away from them without saying anything. You see that skeleton god of yours, I will put it bluntly so don't take it offensively, all right. To which Apollon just nodded his head while Azazel and Zeus just sipped on their cup of tea. He sent a few of his subordinates to kidnap a lowly. And immediately both Azazel and Zeus splurged out the tea that they just drank and started coughing violently, which only got them a disgusting glare from Artemis. Though that didn't affect them much as they soon started to laugh out loud. Apollon had his hand in front of his mouth and was slightly trembling, most likely trying his best to not laugh out loud. Cersk and Tobio were doing the same as him while Dulio was praying, muttering something like he had heard something unholy. Rosias was looking at Tatsuya and was thinking how could he say the truth in such a misleading way. Aan, what role do you play in this kidnapping? Apollon was still trembling a bit and was doing his best to hold off his laughter and asked his question to Tatsuya. The place he invaded was my territory, the house he infiltrated was mine, the girl he was aiming to kidnap is currently my responsibility. So I can say that my role is pretty huge in this matter. Apollon, who heard him, was now back to his calm self and asked, I apologize for this, but could you tell us which territory you are talking about? Kua, it is in Japan under Shinto faction. So you are affiliated with Shinto faction, huh? Yes and no, I do have some connections to Shinto faction, but I mostly stay neutral with my own group. I just borrowed the territory where I was living so as to make it up to my standards. And what relation do you have? Are you here to get my biodata or something? Just get on with the main subject here, said Tatsuya with a calm tone, though none of them were able to calm themselves a bit once he said that, as his eyes turned a bit dangerous at that instant. Aya, you are correct. Sorry about that. We have heard some rumors about him, but who is he anyways? As I can remember, Odin just said that not messing with him was the best option, but what is his background? Who is backing him? No one, I told you, right? I like to stay neutral. Huh? Did you just read my mind? Asked Apollon with a surprised look on his face. Yup, was all Tatsuya said before putting another cookie in his mouth. Isn't it a bit rude? No, it's totally wrong to read someone's thoughts. But what else could be expected of a man? Sigh. Artemis for the first time opened her mouth and started speaking her mind off openly without giving it a second thought. Leaving feminism aside, let's get to the main topic, shall we? Though she got totally ignored by the one she tried to slander and just got more pissed at Tatsuya. Zeus and Azazel high-five each other under the table with their faces not showing even an ounce of change. Take that, you feminist. Great job, brat, were the thoughts that were in the minds of two of the leaders. Sure, why not? So may I ask, how big was the scale of kidden invasion? Tatsuya nodded and turned his head to look at Rosias and nodded his head. Rosias, understanding what he wanted her to do, took out a sheet of paper and gave it to Apollon and then came back to stand behind Tatsuya. Zeus and Artemis came a bit closer to see what was written on the sheet and had their expression turned to that of surprise, which soon turned to that of shock as well. All three of them looked back at Tatsuya, who had a smile on his face, seeing which all three of them had the same thoughts. Why is that smile looking scary to me? I do hope that I would get appropriate compensation for such a huge scale invasion in my territory, right? Oh, of course, but Apollon was about to say something, but Zeus interrupted him in the middle by raising his hand and asked, did you really had an invasion on such a huge scale? Because if something of such scale happened, the information would have spread out like wildfire? It's really hard to believe. YKN-. They even kidnapped the users of Annihilation Maker and Dimension Lost, and I am pretty sure that you should know what those sacred gears are capable of. You must have also seen what they used the user of Annihilation Maker for during the recent attack on Underworld. And regarding you not believing my claim about the invasion in my territory, Tatsuya then opened a portal and soon a bumper of people started dropping down from it, and soon the huge hall was half filled with dead bodies of the Grim Reapers that came to kidnap Ophis earlier. Is this enough? These are all the Grim Reapers that he sent, whose bodies were not totally destroyed. Seeing the huge pile of bodies, both Zeus and Apollon were pretty surprised. Even though they were both pretty strong gods, dealing with such a huge number of Grim Reapers who even had some high-ranking ones amongst them would be too difficult even for them. They looked back at Tatsuya and admired him a bit and thought that what Odin might have warned them about was actually correct. To have caused this much bloodshed. And seeing that you don't have any noticeable injuries as well means that your capabilities are pretty high as well, enough to deal with them without causing such a massacre. You are really violent and brutal even for a man, but what else should I expect? All of them were dealt with by the girl whom they were trying to kidnap, said Tatsuya while looking at Artemis with a smile on his face. Artemis immediately stopped with her mouth open and looking dumbfounded at the smiling Tatsuya, but soon she looked down with an angry and embarrassed expression on her face, with her hands trembling a bit because of both anger and embarrassment. Were the thoughts of both Zeus and Azazel even raised his fist up and gave both Zeus and Tatsuya a fist bump since he was sitting in between them. Apollon was once again back to prevent himself from laughing out loud and said, it certainly seems like they invaded your territory. Yeah, not to mention that I even had to take care of the things that were wreaking havoc here in the Underworld. Yeah, you really helped us out with that one, though the destruction caused by you. I heard about that too. The news that I received was that the situation was dealt so carelessly that the destruction caused by the one who was fending those giant monsters exceeded that of the giant itself. Well, it can't be helped, men are known for their carelessness and doing things without thinking through. Both Cersk and Tatsuya stared at Artemis, who had a slight smirk on her face with her glaring a bit at Tatsuya. Tatsuya just smiled and looked at Cersk and said, "Don't worry Cersk, I will try my best to teach a little about holding back to violence to Asia so as to prevent her doing something like this again. Needless to say she is a girl." "Were you saying something, Artemis-san?" and showed a bright smile on her face, though it only irritated the already pissed off Artemis, who was itching to use her bow on the man smiling at her. Burn 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 burn, were the thoughts of the two pervs who were sitting beside each other, showing a thumbs up in Tatsuya's direction from under the table. Seeing that Artemis was not going to say anything, Tatsuya took a deep breath and said, "Anyways, since I have stated my facts and all the evidence that I had, do you have anything to say regarding this matter? Plus I would like to know whether your whole faction was behind this incident or it was just the work of that guy alone." Zeus folded his arms and said, "Our faction was not behind this assault. We can assure you of that, and since we are talking about it, Hades, is there anything you would like to say about your innocence regarding this matter? Although the loneliness in your castle is speaking for itself that you had sent all your Grim Reapers somewhere, but still." Hades looked at Zeus and then at Tatsuya and soon sighed and said, "I take full responsibility for this, and even though I despise Zeus for forging an alliance with these bats and crows, I am not insane enough to bring threat upon the entire faction just for my greediness to get my hands on her." Hearing him, all of them widened their eyes in surprise, and Azazel said, "Aren't you complying a bit too easily? Where is that 'I am not going to speak even if you kill me' thing?" Zeus nodded his head and said, "Yeah. And what about greediness to get my hands on her stuff? Did you seriously become a Lilicon? And what is it about you having a spectacular stash of those magazines that I heard from Azazel? You don't even need it." Hades and the others looked at the two idiots with a deadpan look on their faces, and soon Hades said, "It's futile knowing what that human can do, and in a situation where I can't even use my powers, it's best to not retaliate. As for your other questions, no, I am not interested in underaged girls and about my collection. Every being is interested in things that they don't have, don't you agree?" The others who heard that now directed a similar deadpan look at him, while Zeus and Azazel nodded their heads, but then suddenly Tatsuya said, "You said you were not interested in underaged girls, then does that mean you are into legal lolies?" "Huh? Nice observation, brat," said Azazel, widening his eyes a bit and then looking towards Hades, who was staring at Tatsuya without saying anything. Tatsuya looked back at him and also started staring, but soon Hades averted his eyes and looked towards Apollon and said, "Leaving those things aside, what my punishment is going to be?" "Hey, don't change the topic, you skeleton king." "Yeah, we want to know, we want to know." But everyone else ignored the two people who wanted the answers and once again started discussing. While they were discussing, Tatsuya formed a mental link with Hades and asked him telepathically, "Why are you keeping this quiet? And don't react, just think, and I will hear you." Once Hades heard a voice in his head, he was about to shout but stopped himself when he heard the latter part. Tatsuya Shibaha, "Well, even if I say something right now, the chances of them listening to me are close to none, and if I tell them the real identity of that girl that you are protecting, you will find a way to refuse that as well. There is no reason for me to dig my grave any deeper than it already is. Aren't you a really smart person? Why did you not use that brain of yours before even sending your Grim Reapers at my place? When you get to know that there is a thing that could get rid of the something that you despise, plus you have the means to get your hands on that thing as well, what do you think would you do?" A valid point, but still, why go so far to deal with the fallen and devil that you even joined hands with the Cows Brigade? "No reason, I just despise them because I despise them, and since that idiot of a leader of my pantheon signed a peace treaty with them, there was not way that could not feel agitated at that. Just think about it, who the hell is going to willingly work with someone they despise the most? And I will repeat again, I didn't join any hands with Cows Brigade, I was only using them to stall time and to stop you from doing anything unnecessary. I would have taken that girl away once their job was done. I was even going to return her back once all the devils and fallen would have vanished. But looks like my plan didn't go well at all. Well, anyway, after all this, when I don't have any subordinates and my powers are sealed, do you really think I am in a mood to do anything stupid? I already learned my lesson and I am not going for a revision anytime soon." Whatever, like you said, I would have found some way to deal with the situation if you would have told her identity or dealt it with some other way. Seems like you are smart enough to not try that. Ha ha ha, I know I may look like one, but I am not an evil god, you know. I just don't like any other races from different factions, that's all. Anyway, what punishment you are going to ask for to give me? Aren't you quite sure that I would be the one who will give you the punishment? Stop acting like that, like a person as scummy as you would not know whose side the scale is tilting right now. Act respectfully, you bone shit. Don't forget that I still have the chance to give you the punishment. Doesn't matter to me what is going to happen after this, I was prepared to face death after this anyways. After all, the one I was trying to kidnap was one of the strongest beings of the world. Leaving that aside, I saw that you kept my treasure with you earlier, huh? Oh, I almost forgot. Man, where the hell did you buy those from? Don't shout in my head, you bastard. Anyway, leaving that aside, what do you plan on doing now? Nothing at the moment. I don't have any subordinates right now, so making plans of wiping the existence of the crows and the bats is out of question. Cocytus is sealed very tightly anyway, so no need to fear about that. Oh, what happened to Samael? I released 50% of it, for your information. It is in my care, no need to worry about that. Say, I have noticed that this place is relatively cold, is it same throughout the year? I mean, yeah, there are a lot of undead like ghouls and zombies that live here, and you should be knowing that heat is not their best with, so it is always cold here. It's relaxing in a way, you know, once you get used to it, that is. Say want to work for me. Work for you. Forget it. I may take some steps that might not be in the favor of our faction, but by no means I am gonna betray them. No need to worry, it's not that kind of job. Anyway, it's not like I am giving you a choice to begin with. Tatsuya then cut off his mental link with Hades, much to his annoyance, as he still wanted to say a few things to Tatsuya. Tatsuya then raised his hand, seeing which the discussion that was going on between the others stopped as they looked at Tatsuya curiously. If you don't mind it, would you let me decide his punishment and my compensation while we are at it? There is no way we can do that. Not only are you an outsider from our faction but a man as well, there's no way that can be accepted. Rigdash. Sure, go ahead. Really, that helps us a lot, man. Before Artemis could ask her fellow gods about it, they were already done with their answers, which made Artemis stop speaking and looked at the two other gods with a look which said, "You guys are idiots or what?" Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "Then first about my compensation, I want Hades's territory." As soon as Tatsuya stated his demand, not only the 4 Olympian gods but the people who came along with him were looking at him with their eyes and mouth opened wide, not able to believe what the hell he was saying. Wait a minute, are you saying that you want the whole realm of the dead? Asked Apollon. Yes. Why? Are you planning to take his position of the god of death or something? Asked Zeus with an excited and expectant smile on his face. No, I already have my hands filled with other things. Then you just want it as a trophy for show off or something like that. Seriously, why do all of you men like to show off? Said the man-hater present in the room. Aren't you the only one amongst us who is showing off her expensive armor and bow? What's the use of those things in a meeting? It's for sell dash. And don't say anything like self-defense or that kind of shit. Like hell could a god know how to summon his weapons from afar or store them in a separate dimension? Now that you mention it, isn't it the new armor that you ordered earlier and got it delivered just a few days ago? Said Zeus, checking out the armor, her chest. Really, it does seem brand new, said Azazel, also checking out the armor, her chest. Tatsuya, who clearly understood what the two idiots were doing, sighed and checked the armor as well before giving a nod and said, "And no, I have no reason to show it off or something. It's for my business, which have been quite a bit stable for a while and can include a new outlet for my funds. We don't have any problems with that, right?" Rosias, who was standing behind him, nodded her head affirming him, but soon massaged her temples, thinking that her workload was about to increase very soon. After Tatsuya told his demand, there was some negotiation between him and Artemis, who was intent on not letting him have the whole realm of the dead, and in the end it settled with Tatsuya getting 2/3 of the land in the end. Though with this too, Artemis was not much satisfied, but once Zeus told that this was the final, she stepped down from the argument. Apollon then contacted someone in MT Olympus, telling them to prepare the necessary documents for the following deal, and once he was done he looked at Tatsuya and said, "Well then, I hope that you are fine with this. We will contact you in a day or two, so where do you want to finalize the deal?" How about Kua? Just give me call before coming, I will set up the arrangements according to that. Fine, Kua it is then. Now heading to the second part. What about him? Said Apollon and looked towards Hades. Tatsuya looked at Hades as well and said, "Since he has no subordinates right now, all of us can say that his duties are currently not needed at all, right? Since Cocytus is sealed tightly, and I too would make sure that it remains the same as well. So currently MT Olympus is not in need of his duties, right?" At this all of them looked towards Zeus, since it would be his word which will tell whether Hades was needed somewhere or not. Zeus then folded his arms and closed his eyes, thinking about something, and once he opened his eyes he looked back at Hades and said, "Nope, he is currently free from any work, and since training new Grim Reaper would take a while, I don't think that he would be having any duties for quite a while." Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "As I thought, then would it be fine for him to work under me, till everything is back to normal? Since he has both the knowledge and experience of living here and the terrain of the region, he would be quite helpful to me. I even allow him to find some new recruits for the Grim Reapers and train them for the job. He will be quite helpful to me and my business here, and you lose nothing in it as well. Of course, since he is a god, I would not make him a slave, since it would reflect badly on your pantheon's image, but his powers would be sealed and he would be working like a normal employee. Of course that means salary and living facilities as well." Hearing that, almost all of them looked at Tatsuya with a surprised look on their faces, but soon a few of them remembered that even Loki was working under him and has not been making trouble since then. The three gods then started discussing amongst themselves, and in the end even Hades was asked about this, or he wants some other punishment if he finds working under Tatsuya disgraceful. But to their surprise, Hades nodded his head, accepting Tatsuya's offer, and said, "I am going to be punished anyway, so being in a place that I am already used to is better than being in some prison or getting sealed off somewhere unknown, and since my powers would be getting sealed in either case, it doesn't matter anyway." Hearing his answer, the Olympian gods sighed and approved of Hades working under Tatsuya with his powers being sealed off as his punishment. There were some other conditions added, like Hades having no relation with MT Olympus during the period he was working under Tatsuya, so as to not let sensitive information get out and all. Once they were done, the Olympian gods stood up and said their byes to one another. Zeus even invited Azazel to go be him a tour in his region, but because of the work he had to decline the offer. Soon all of them left, and once they were gone, Tatsuya looked at Hades and removed the chains that were binding him, though a small golden chain was wrapped around one of his arms like a bracelet. "Well then, Hades, can let me get you aqua tinted with your new boss." He then looked at Cersk and Azazel, who too were now exhausted because of their own deals that they did to get their compensation for the attack in their territory, and said, "Looks like it went well for all of us, huh?" Cersk's face palmed and said, "Yeah, but we still don't have any links to Cow's brigade, and since you mentioned that they have the Holy Grail, the people who were defeated would be coming back to life soon as well. Sigh, it's really frustrating." Azazel nodded and said, "Yeah, that it is, but it cannot be helped. All we can do is be prepared. Let's hold a meet to call some new factions into the treaty. What do you say, Cersk?" Cersk gave it a thought and then glanced at Tatsuya and made a displeased expression on his face. "I think it would be good. Don't want to have help of his teammates once again. Having more allies, no, having more safe allies would be better in a situation like what happened recently. If they can do it once, they can do it again as well." Azazel smirked and nodded his head and then said, "Well then it looks like we are about to get busy. So where should we hold the conference? You fine with us keeping it in Kua?" and glanced towards Tatsuya. Tatsuya thought about it for a while and said, "Just tell me when and where, and I will look after the arrangements. Currently I don't know what would happen if there are some spies mixed in your subordinates. Make sure to check them on a regular basis as well." "Oh, you agreed rather easily, huh? Well, better for us. And yet, it is quite problematic since a lot of devils who were in support bit old Satan faction and were hiding are slowly showing themselves now. Best of luck, Cersk," and then teleported away. Seeing him teleport, Tobio did the same as well and was soon followed by Dulio, who bowed his head once again to thank Tatsuya and then went back to heaven. Cersk gave a tired sigh after recalling Azazel saying best of luck to him and slumped his shoulders, imagining how much work it is going to be to check the entire devil territory. "I will drag that hold-up green-haired genius out of his lab if he tries to ditch this work on me," and then teleported as well. Tatsuya and Rosias, who were the only ones who were left behind along with their new employee, looked at each other, and then Tatsuya threw a master ball at Hades, who soon got covered in red light and was then absorbed by the ball. Rosias saw this scene with a deadpan look on his face and asked, "Was it really necessary?" Nope, but Loki would have been upset if he found out that the one who is going to work under him is not captured by the ball. Oh, speaking of capturing, here catch dash, and threw another ball towards Rosias, who caught the ball with a surprised look on her face, thinking that she was about to be sealed in it as well, but nothing like that happened, much to her relief. She then glared at Tatsuya saying why did he scared her, to which Tatsuya just laughed and said, "There is no way I am going to catch one of my lovers like that." Hearing which Rosias immediately had a deep blush on her face. "Anyways, since you didn't have a familiar, like the other, take care of that. Samael is in there after all." By Samael, do you mean the one which you captured a few days ago?" Tatsuya just nodded his head in response, making Rosias a bit tense thinking about the being that was inside the small ball in her hand, but soon snapped out of it once she felt Tatsuya grabbing her hand and saying, "Anyway, since we are already done with this, how about we take a day off and go on a date? What do you say, Rose?" Rosias, who heard the suggestion, was surprised and started to get embarrassed, but before she could say anything Tatsuya pulled her hand and teleported away, leaving the whole Hades's castle empty. A few days passed by since Tatsuya had his deal with the gods from empty Olympus, which was followed by Rosias' state. Needless to say that it ended with them staying the night at the hotel doing indecent stuff, and no, we are not talking about hand-holding. Rosias, who had her first time during her first date, felt conflicted, since even though she felt happy about it, the fact that it happened on her first date was still a bit bothering to her. If not for the fact that both of them were enjoying so much and had drunk to the limit they could, which led them to that situation. Also the fact that she was being teased by the fellow members of the Shiba residence was not helping her out a bit. Tatsuya himself had no problems with it, but still felt that deactivating his alcohol resistance so that he could enjoy was a bad move on his part. He was confident that he had enough self-control, but it seemed like a drunk Rosias, who had taken off most of her clothes because of feeling hot, was too much for his not-so-well sanity. Also, taking the fact that she was the one who initiated the kiss which led to all that drove his desires further was also there. Tatsuya also got the necessary documents from MT Olympus about the deal that they made, which were delivered by Apollon and Artemis. Tatsuya also invited them for dinner that day, and he to admit seeing Artemis having a footgasm was the best feeling he felt since meeting her. He made sure to record that and send it to her at a later date. Currently Tatsuya was on his way to heaven along with Isamai and Zenovia. Since the day Rosias got Samael as her familiar, Isamai was made to train against the Dragon Slayer, and during those times her Ascalon got severely damaged by the Dragon Slayer's poison. Zenovia too had his sword damaged very badly when she asked to spar with Himare, who cut the external in half using her flame sword, making her feel guilty about it and continuously apologizing to Zenovia. Tatsuya, who could easily repair the swords, thought that it had been a long time since met Gabriel, and the others decided to let them deal with this while he would tour around heaven, since it was his first time going there. "Hey Zenovia, have you ever gone to heaven before?" asked a curious Isamai looking towards Zenovia. Zenovia, who heard that question, looked towards Isamai and said, "I had a few chances to go there along with my master when there were some serious missions that we needed to take, but the only places that I have seen there are the reporting rooms where I used to get the job, information, and other things like that. So my experience is same as yours." Then let's look around once we reach there. "I would like to get my external get repaired as soon as possible," said Zenovia. Hearing her answer, Isamai snorted and pouted. She then jumped towards Toddy and caught his arm and said, "Then what about you, Tatsuya? Wanna look around with me? We haven't gone on a date together for quite a while as well." Tatsuya, who looked at the excited Isami, smiled a bit and said, fine, it's my first time there as well, so sure, let's look around together. Hearing his answer, Isami's smile widened as she said, yeah, a date it is then. Zenovia, who looked at the couple forming plans about the date, remained silent for a while and said, I will just drop my sword by and wait for them to repair it, since I don't think it would be that quick. She too then latched onto Tatsuya's other arm and said, you guys don't mind me accompanying you too, right? Hearing that both of them looked towards her with a slightly surprised look on their faces. Soon Tatsuya thought about what she asked and didn't answer it immediately. He looked towards Isami, who stared at Zenovia, more specifically the arm to which she was clinging to. Soon a sly smirk appeared on her face and said, oh, don't tell me, you want to go on a date with Tatsuya as well. Zenovia, hearing that, nodded her head and with a slight unnoticeable blush on her cheeks said, yeah, I want to go on a date. Hearing her answering without the reaction she was hoping for, Isami clicked her tongue and said, act a bit shy will you, but soon her smile came back on her face and she said, but sure, I don't mind at all. A double date it is then. Tatsuya, who saw both of them having fun, smiled and said, don't get overexcited here, or you might get tired there and not enjoy to the fullest. Isami and Zenovia looked at him and Zenovia nodded her head in approval, but Isami had a teasing smile on her face and said, oh, don't worry about me tiring out. You do know how much stamina I have, right? Which immediately earned her a smack on her head from Tatsuya as he said, also, don't try to corrupt any angel there. I don't want to be the reason for the large increase in fallen angel population. Understood. Isami, who rubbed her head because of the pain, nodded her head in approval and didn't say anything. Tatsuya smiled and stopped walking once he noticed that he has arrived at the location that they decided to meet at, which was a huge church. Soon 3 people came there who most likely were their escorts on their way to heaven. Amongst the 3 of them, Tatsuya knew 2 of them as they were none other than Dulio and Gabriel. On the other hand, there was another beautiful woman who most likely was in her 20s, wearing a nun's outfit. She was someone that Tatsuya have not met earlier, but by direction of her eyes, which was looking towards Zenovia, who in turn was looking away with her face totally covered in sweat, made him aware of who might the new lady be. Once the 3 of them were close enough to Tatsuya and the other 2, Dulio immediately greeted the 3 of them, while Zenovia started to fidget around more on seeing the new woman's gaze. Tatsuya too saw something different as he noticed that there was slight nervousness on Gabriel's face. He was about to use telepathy to know what she was thinking, but she immediately said, don't read my mind, please, Tatsuya, with a slight blush on her face. Seeing that the most powerful detection ability, the women's intuition, had already perceived his actions, Tatsuya didn't use his telepathy to respect what she asked for. It was not because of the fact that the blushing Gabriel was too adorable to look at which made him stop. Definitely not. Seeing that the atmosphere turned quite awkward between them, Dulio took charge and introduced himself to the 2 new people whom he met for the first time. Nice to meet you all, and even though Tatsuya-san already know me, for the 2 ladies who are meeting me for the first time, let me introduce myself. I am Dulio Gasualdo, a reincarnated angel. Nice to meet you. Ah, where are my manners? Let me introduce myself as well. I am Griselda Kurta, a reincarnated angel as well. Also, you may have noticed it already, but I am Zenovia's guardian as well. She then looked at Zenovia and with a smile on her face said, let's have a talk later, alright? After all, it's been a long time since we met. Zenovia, who heard the sweet words coming out of Griselda's mouth, gulped her saliva and reluctantly nodded her head. After all of them introduced themselves to each other, Gabriel opened a portal to heaven and soon all of them were in front of a golden gate. Seeing the majestic golden gate and scenery around it which looked like they were above the clouds, Isami had her mouth open wide and said, it really feels like we are in heaven. It's truly beautiful. Hearing her say those words, Gabriel giggled, making Isami a bit embarrassed. Gabriel then looked at her and said, thank you for the compliment. Soon Dulio, who had gone towards the gate, came back and said, I have made their arrival registered, so we are allowed to go now. Gabriel nodded and then walked towards the gate, which slowly opened, causing a dramatic effect. Tatsuya looked at the gate for a while and had to admit that the entrance of the heaven was truly something that he had imagined that heaven would be like. He then increased his pace a bit, seeing that the others were far ahead of him. Once he reached there, Griselda looked at him and said, I will guide these 2 to the place where they could get their swords repaired. Hearing that, both Isami and Zenovia nodded their heads, though Zenovia had a frightened expression on her face. Tatsuya nodded his head and said, well then you 2, let's look around after you are done with giving your swords for the repair, alright? The 2 of them nodded their heads with a smile on their faces and then started following Griselda. Tatsuya then looked at Gabriel and Dulio but soon realized that Dulio had already gone and now it was only Gabriel and him left behind. Meanwhile, behind some building, Dulio, who was looking at Tatsuya and Gabriel from a distance, had a cup of coffee and some snacks to go along with it in front of him and thought, do forgive me for not accompanying you, Tatsuya, and that too after all that you did for the children of the orphanage. However, Michael-sama has asked me to do this for Gabriel-sama, and heaven, though that it is for the appearance's sake now that I think about it. He then formed a small magic circle near his ear and said, Michael-sama, all the preparations are done, those 2 are now alone. Good job, Dulio-kun, keep an eye on the surroundings and make sure no obstacle comes in their path. I have worked very hard to make my sister realize her feelings, without getting her fall. Don't worry, Michael-sama, I will do my best to prevent anything that could ruin this opportunity for Gabriel-sama, and then stopped putting the magic in Theagic circle, making it disappear. Tatsuya, who was left alone with Gabriel, looked at her and saw that she was acting a bit flustered. He wanted to know what was wrong with her, but knowing that she had asked him to not use telepathy on her, he stopped and asked, "Is everything fine with you, Gabriel? You are acting a bit flustered." Gabriel jolted a bit when she heard what Tatsuya said that and looked towards him only to find him looking at her with a bit of worry on her face. Tatsuya, who noticed her blushing a bit, had a wild guess about what was happening, but he decided to wait a bit until he was absolutely sure about it. "And no, don't worry about me, I am fine," said Gabriel, waving her hands in denial. Tatsuya, who saw her acting like that, was not the slightest bit convinced, but still decided to go with what she said since he didn't want to put her in a tight spot. He gave a sigh and with a small smile on his face said, "All right, if you say so. Do you mind showing me around here just like how we did when we first met?" Gabriel, who saw Tatsuya's small but reassuring smile, stopped acting flustered and started to calm down a bit. Soon a small smile appeared on her face as well, remembering the first time when she met Tatsuya back in Vatican. She chuckled, remembering those days, and with her usual innocent look on her face, moved her hand towards Tatsuya and said, "Then let's hurry up. This place is very big to explore, you know," and showed a wide smile. Tatsuya, seeing her smile, smiled as well and held her hand and said, "Let's go then." Gabriel nodded her head, feeling happy that Tatsuya was looking happy as well, though she didn't notice that there was a slight blush that appeared on her cheeks. She then pulled Tatsuya's hand lightly and started guiding him around the place with enthusiasm. Tatsuya, who was being dragged by the enthusiastic Seraph, gave a helpless smile, remembering time she did the same with him and Asia back in Vatican. He then stopped on his path and gave a slight tug to her arm, feeling which she stopped as well and looked at him with a curious look on her face. Tatsuya, who was slightly behind her, wails and stood beside her and then interlocked his fingers with her, making the Seraph a bit surprised by that action. He then squeezed her hand a bit, making her get out of her trance, and said, "There is no need to hurry up, let's enjoy all this slowly. We can just do this again at a later date if we have not explored the whole thing, all right?" Gabriel, who was a bit embarrassed by Tatsuya's sudden move, looked down and nodded her head shyly, seeing which Tatsuya forgot to breathe for a moment. He then took a deep breath to calm himself a bit and said, "Shall we continue then?" To which Gabriel replied with a smile and a blush which seemed to have appeared once again on her face. She too then held Tatsuya's hands a bit tightly and started walking around, showing him around once again. Thought this time, instead of the enthusiastic atmosphere that was around them earlier, was replaced by a sweet one which no one among the people who were looking at them wanted to disturb, and only wanted to enjoy looking at the two of them. While the Seraph and the human were walking hand in hand, they stopped at various shops that were set up in the heaven as well as at the other facilities built there. Tatsuya, who noticed that the places that they were visiting were usually empty, that it was Michael's scheme, but didn't told about it to Gabriel, who was actually enjoying such an atmosphere. If she doesn't have any problem with it, then what problems do I have? At a distance, Dulio, who had a burger in his hand, was looking at the two of them through a pair of binoculars while also informing the some other people through a walkie-talkie. "So, you guys are trying to set the two of them up?" Suddenly Dulio heard a voice and flinched, since he didn't notice the person approach him because of being focused on Tatsuya and Gabriel. He turned around and saw Isami standing there with a burger in her hand as well, which she bought from a nearby shop. Dulio also noticed Griselda and Zenovia talking to each other, though it was only Griselda who was talking, scolding, while Zenovia was sitting in front of her and apologizing for turning into a devil and not contacting her. He looked at the two of them with a sweat drop before turning back to Isami and said, "Miss Haida, yes, what you said is indeed true. So can I ask you to please give them some alone time for now? We promise to arrange the best experience for you to sightsee once this is done." Isami thought for a while and sat down on the seat in front of Dulio's and said, "I don't know, man. I need to ask this with the squad. First, wait a minute." She formed a communication magic circle near her ear and called someone. Hello, Kurumi-san. Isami here. Yeah, you see, the people here in heaven are asking me to not interfere in their attempt to set Tatsuya and Gabriel-san up. So what's the decision?" Kurumi, who was currently bathing along with the others, nodded as she heard the info from Isami. "Wait a minute dash." She then looked at the others and said, "Isami told me that the people in heaven asked her to not interfere in their attempt to set Tatsuya and Gabriel-chan. Anyone have problems with it?" Hearing that, all of them just relaxed back in the bath and shake their heads in denial. Even Miyuki and Asia didn't say anything to oppose this, as Miyuki had a favorable impression of Gabriel, while to Asia she was her first female friend. Seeing that, Kurumi nodded her head and said, "No problems here. Do as you want." Fine, bye." The magic circle then disappeared and Isami looked towards Dulio and said, "No problems on our side. I will be expecting VIP treatment, all right, Dulio-san." Dulio nodded with a smile on his face, feeling grateful for her understanding. Isami smiled as well and then held something in her hand and pointed her finger at it and said, "Dulio-san, can I get an limited edition extra large deluxe chocolate parfait?" with a smile on her face. Immediately the smile on Dulio's face disappeared and he thought, "Why do I have a feeling that my this month's salary is in a big danger?" Dulio just nodded his head with a dumbfounded expression on his face, seeing which Isami smiled and called the angel who was working as a waitress and ordered her parfait, plus some extras. Looking at Isami with his lips twitching, Dulio thought, "I will settle this with Michael-sama later." Tatsuya and Gabriel were currently in the middle of a forest made up of various types magical, consisting both common and legendary trees. Tatsuya looked around and then used his magic to search the area nearby to know where their destination might be. He then looked at Gabriel and asked, "Are we going to the lake?" Gabriel looked at him with a smile on her face and nodded her head and said, yeah, I always wanted to go there with a friend of mine, or is it that you don't like lakes? Gabriel, who was giving him with puppy eyes, made him totally speechless. He wasn't going to deny that in the first place, but her looking at him like that even made accepting it to take long. Instinctively he placed his hand on top of her head and said, it's not like that, Gabriel, I would love to go to the lake with you. So please don't make that kind of face. It's bad for my heart. She can easily rival eyes when she is in the mood of being spoiled and cutesy, and believe me, that is enough to kill all the cultured people in the whole multiverse because of excessive loss of blood through nosebleeds, thought Tatsuya. Gabriel's face brightened up once again and she clung to Tatsuya's arm in excitement. Thanks, Tatsuya. You are the best, and then once again started pulling him a bit, wanting to reach the lake faster. Soon both of them stood in front of the lake, whose water could be considered as the purest that Tatsuya has ever seen. Tatsuya walked towards the lake and crouched down near the edge and took a handful of water from it. He then stared the water in his hand and said, this lake is enchanted with purification, right? Gabriel, who heard Tatsuya answer, nodded her enthusiastically and said, yes. Father made that lake here, and just like you said, there is a purification enchantment placed on the lake itself. Not to mention this water has great medicinal properties as well. It's really effective since it let us help in healing the injured when they are a lot of people who got ikured during the battle, though that sort of situation have not happened since the Great War. Tatsuya nodded his head, listening to the info she was giving him. Gabriel then walked to the edge of the lake as well and sat down on the grass while immersing her legs in the lake. She then looked at Tatsuya and patted the ground beside her, gesturing him to sit beside her. Tatsuya folded up his pants a bit and then sat beside her. Once he sat down, his legs started to feel very comfortable as the lake started to show its magic and started to deal with the stress that has been accumulated from all the walking. Gabriel looked at his surprised face and said, it's great, right? Tatsuya looked at her, who had a smile on her face, and nodded his head without saying anything. Seeing her having a comfortable expression on her face along with the peaceful surroundings made him smile and think that Gabriel was looking absolutely beautiful at that moment. Seeing his expression, Gabriel blushed a bit, not knowing why, but still averted her eyes, and no matter how much she tried, she was not able to look directly in Tatsuya's eyes. Not understanding why that was happening, Gabriel decided to distract her mind a bit and asked, yeah, Ayano. Tatsuya, are you feeling hungry? Tatsuya, who got surprised by her suddenly yelling, was about to answer, but before he was able to, Gabriel took out a basket out of nowhere and said, then please have this, and shoved the basket in front of Tatsuya. Tatsuya stared at the basket for a while before taking it from her hands and said, thank you, Gabriel. Did you made this yourself? Gabriel vigorously nodded her head with an expectant look in her eyes and asked, will you eat it with me? Tatsuya nodded his head with a smile on his face and placed the basket on his lap and then opened the lid and asked, then recommend me something, since you are the one who took the effort in making it. Gabriel, who heard that, narrowed her eyes and placed her hand on her chin, thinking about what should she give it to Tatsuya first. After doing some very hard mental work, she finally placed her hand inside the basket, making Tatsuya sigh in relief, since he started to wonder how many things has she prepared. Soon she took out a plate which was much larger compared to the basket itself. Here, try these stuffed pockets then, and took one of the stuffed pockets from the pile that was on the plate and gave it to Tatsuya after wrapping it in a napkin. Tatsuya took it from her hands and saw her taking one for herself as well, but instead of eating it, she was looking intently at Tatsuya. Seeing her acting so passionate, Tatsuya chuckled, since this was the first time he has seen such a look on her face. He then took a bite, seeing which Gabriel gulped her saliva and waited for him to answer. Once Tatsuya was done eating, he looked at the pocket in front of it, checking out the stuffing inside it, and said, Gabriel, you used sugar instead of salt, and looked at her with a helpless smile. After Tatsuya pointed out her mistake, he was busy trying to cheer up the satin serif, which was not working at all. He then patted her head and said, don't worry, Gabriel, it is just a basic mistake that anyone can do. I mean, if it weren't for the sugar, they would have turned to be very good. Gabriel looked at him with a curious look on her face and asked, really? You are not lying, right? Tatsuya shook his head and said, no, I am not lying at all, even I had done this mistake sometimes. Hearing that, Gabriel widened her eyes and asked, even you do mistakes, Tatsuya? Tatsuya nodded his head and removed his hand from top of her, making her look towards the hand with a dissatisfied expression on his face. Even if I not look like it, I still am a human, you know. Gabriel then widened her eyes as if realizing something and said, yeah, Tatsuya is a human as well, I just realized it, and looked at him with a smile on her face. But then suddenly Tatsuya grabbed her cheeks and pulled them while asking, what do you mean by that, Gabriel? Do you mean to say that I am not a human? Na don mi the. Triple A aloi. Foiv se aoya. No, I don't mean that. I apologize. Forgive me, Tatsuya. Tatsuya then released Gabriel's cheeks, who immediately cupped them and started to massage them while looking at Tatsuya with some tears at the corner of her eyes and said, Tatsuya, you are very mean. It hurts, you know. Tatsuya shrugged his shoulders and said, it's your fault for saying that I am not a human. So just think of it as your punishment. Gabriel looked away with a pout, noticing which Tatsuya chuckled, which made the seraph look at him with an expression which said, what is so funny about it? Tatsuya then flicked her forehead, making her groan in pain once again. Hey, why did yo dash? But she stopped midway once she saw Tatsuya take something else out of the basket she gave him earlier. Soon Tatsuya took out a plate filled with sandwiches. He then took one of them and ate a bit from it and said, yup, they are good. Looks like you didn't mess up on this one. Gabriel puffed her chest and said, after all I am Seraph you know. I don't mess things up that much. Means that you mess things up on a regular basis, huh, thought Tatsuya but decided to keep it to himself. He then felt Gabriel poking his cheek with her finger and looked towards her who and noticed that Tatsuya had turned around, pulled her hand back and opened her mouth. Tatsuya looked at the beautiful Seraph who was opening her mouth cutely for a while before he brought the sandwich that was in his hand towards her mouth and thought, she won't fall because of an indirect kiss, right? Gabriel then took a bit from the sandwich Tatsuya was holding and Tatsuya made sure to look at her intently to stop her if she started to turn into a fallen. Yes they are good, said Gabriel having a bright smile on her face. She then snatched the sandwich from Tatsuya's hand and said, now my turn, open wide Tatsuya. Tatsuya without hesitating a bit took her up on the offer and opened his mouth. Gabriel then fed him the sandwich with a happy smile on her face. Once both of them were done with their lunch, which I clubbed with both of them feeding each other, except for the coffee jelly which solely belonged to Tatsuya without baby discussion about the topic, both of them decided to see some other places. Tatsuya stretched his body and asked, so, is there somewhere else you want to go? Since there was a place like this which you wanted to go with a friend, there must be other places like these as well, right? Gabriel pondered about what Tatsuya said for a while and then looked at Tatsuya and said, there are a lot of places that I want to go together with you but not many of them are here in heaven, so, will you go together with me some other time? Tatsuya stared silently at the embarrassed Seraph and once again confirmed that she had Offai's level of cuteness. He nodded his head and then moved his hand towards her, who immediately held it with a happy smile on her face. From some distance Dulio, whose wallet had suffered a major blowjo, and Isamai, who was now covered with lot of accessories made by the locals here in heaven, were looking towards the forest that both Tatsuya and Gabriel entered a while back with a curious expression on their face. Don't you think that they have taken a lot of time there? And why did someone put a barrier at the entrance to block us from going there? Isamai remained silent for a while but then looked towards the forest with a serious look on her face and said, they must be having sex. Dulio, who heard that, looked towards the brown-haired girl with his eyes widened in shock, and then looked towards the forest with the same expression. He then formed a magic circle near his ear and called Michael. Hello Michael-sama, AHH, yeah everything is fine on our end, though we might have a small problem, it looks like both of them are indulging in indak. I forget that they are coming out now. He then saw both of them coming out with a smile on their faces and sighed in relief seeing that Gabriel had not fallen. That's exactly the smile one makes after having a wonderful fucking session. Hearing that, Dulio looked at her with a deadpan look on her face and said, you need some help in your mental department. But Isamai didn't say anything and just showed him a middle finger without even liking towards him, making him twitch his lips. Both of them then looked around a bit more and then Gabriel suggested to go and meet Michael since he would be happy to meet Tatsuya Baswell. Tatsuya nodded and Gabriel formed a magic circle below them and soon both of them appeared in a huge building. Tatsuya then looked around and noticed that the building that they were in was big enough to house an entire army in there. This way Tatsuya, said Gabriel, who started pulling him. Tatsuya silently followed the excited Seraph and soon both of them came in front of a room. Gabriel gave a knock on the door and then entered inside without waiting for any response. Seeing that Tatsuya wanted for a couple of seconds before he too entered the room. In there he saw Gabriel happily talking to her brother, telling him about how both of them spent the time together. Seeing that Tatsuya has entered the room, both of them looked towards him and Michael bowed his head a bit, to which Tatsuya did the same. Long time no see, Michael. Yes, long time no see, sensei. I hope that you enjoyed your sightseeing here. Tatsuya smiled and said, yeah, my tour around here was very good and pleasant. I really liked it. Heading the praise, both the Seraphs puffed their chests proudly. Michael then looked at Gabriel and asked, do you mind brewing us some tea? Gabriel shook her head with a smile on her face and said, not at all, brother Michael. Just wait, Tatsuya, I will make the tea very very delicious, with a determined look on her face. Tatsuya chuckled seeing that and said, yeah, best of luck. Hearing which, Gabriel snorted and walked out of the room while sticking her tongue out towards Tatsuya. Once both him and Michael were there in the room, Michael immediately got in doxa and started to apologize before following them. Needless to say, it was very tiring for Tatsuya to calm down his fan who was berating himself like that. Tatsuya was able to calm down Michael before Gabriel came back with tea and snacks. She then placed them on the table and served the two men who were sitting on the sofas. She too then took her seat beside Tatsuya and looked at him with an expectant gaze. Tatsuya, who noticed her, lifted his teacup and took a sip from it and nodded his head in satisfaction, seeing which Gabriel smiled happily and sipped on her tea as well. UWAA, hot 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 hot, shouted Gabriel, who sipped in the hot tea a bit too hastily because of her excitement. Tatsuya then took out some water from his storage and made her drink it to calm the Seraph down. Geez, you really are too energetic for your own good, you know. Gabriel gulped down the water and said, I am full of energy, you know, so it can't be helped. Tatsuya looked at the cheerfully smiling Seraph and clicked her forehead, causing her groan in pain. Meanwhile, Michael used his magic to clean up the tea that was spilled by his sister and was happy to see her acting cheerfully with Tatsuya. Tatsuya then realized something and asked, what about Isamai and Zenovia? Are their swords repaired? Michael immediately paced his cup down and with a sincere expression on his face said, don't worry, sensei, their swords are still being repaired and currently both of them are in care of Griselda. You don't have to worry about anything. Tatsuya shook his hand and said, no, it is you who should be worried, and make sure to not let Isamai on her own, or there might be a possibility of sudden rise in the population of fallen angels. The room turned totally silent as Michael stared at Tatsuya. Soon he formed a magic circle near his ear and said in a serious tone, Dulio, don't let the Red Dragon Empress out of your sight and make sure to not fall yourself. Gabriel then looked at Tatsuya and asked, any Tatsuya, how will the Red Dragon Empress increase the number of fallen angels? Is it one of her abilities? Tatsuya looked towards the curious seraph and shook his head and said, it's not her ability. It's the principle of her life. Her principles are so strong that the moment she would be turned to an angel using your brave saint cards she would fall. Gabriel nodded, still looking a bit curious, and asked, but what will she do to make angels fall? Tatsuya thought for a while to explain her in a way so as to not corrupt her, and after thinking of an answer he decided to speak but still used his magic to prevent her fall just in case. She will tell other about her fantasies, and those are way too effective against you angels. Gabriel once again nodded her head but was still curious as Tatsuya didn't specify it. She just shrugged her shoulders, not thinking much about it, since the only thing that she need to know was that to keep the girl away from the angels when she is telling her fantasies. Tatsuya and the seraphs talked to each other for a while before the rest of the seraphs came in as well and started discussing matters regarding the Cows Brigade and the Alliance. Tatsuya also warned them to be careful as there might be a possibility for heaven to be attacked as well, since Underworld was attacked not too long ago and such a thing might happen here as well. The other seraphs just nodded to his warning except for Michael, who listened to him carefully since the chances of something to happen were higher if Tatsuya was the one warning them, though it was a bit of his inner fanboy which made him hear to Tatsuya's words seriously. Soon the other two seraphs went back to do their work while Michael and Gabriel were still there since they completed their work a bit earlier to not get interrupted when Tatsuya was there in heaven. Tatsuya looked at his watch and saw that a considerable amount of time has passed by and it was nearly night. Michel then looked at his own clock, which signifies the time there in heaven, and said, it's pretty late, I will ask someone to prepare a meal right away. He then stared at the couple sitting in front of him and with a smile on his face said, Sensei, why don't you two go and inform your companions about it? Might as well enjoy the night sky here in the heaven, which is a very beautiful sight if I say so myself. Gabriel nodded and stood up from her seat and stretched her body a bit. Sitting there for a long time and discussing about various things that were currently happening made her a bit tired, and she too was in the mood to get some fresh air. Meanwhile, Tatsuya just informed Isamai with his telepathy but still stood up from his seat and nodded his head. Gabriel then led him out of the huge building that they were in, and a sight even more majestic than the one he saw on the first heaven welcomed him. Tatsuya was once again amazed by how beautiful the heaven was made by the god of Bible and took some points from here in order to maintain his own dimension. WHCH was currently used by Samuel and the other familiars from time to time. Even Tiamat used that dimension to keep some of her treasure since her cave was already full. Gabriel, who was beside him, glanced towards Tatsuya and smiled a bit, seeing him a bit excited on seeing the surroundings. She then started to think of the things that they did today and felt happy that Tatsuya spent some time with her, since most of the people here in heaven were quite busy because of their low numbers, and her big status among the angels kept many of the angels to stay a bit away from her. She then slowly looked down towards Tatsuya's hands. She then looked away, trying to act distracted, and slowly moved her own hand towards Tatsuya's and slowly held it. Tatsuya, who felt his hand being grabbed by Gabriel, looked at her and with a small smile on his face asked, "What happened?" Feeling happy, and gave her hands a light squeeze. Gabriel looked at him and nodded her head with a smile on her face and said, "Hey Tatsuya." She then inched closer to him and gave a peck on his lips and said, "Thank you for today." Tatsuya, who received a sudden kiss from Gabriel, smiled as well and said, "You did the same thing back when we first met, remember?" Gabriel nodded her head and said, I remember, but this time I know that why the girl kissed the boy," and a slight blush appeared on her cheeks. "If you forgot, then it is in ch 69 near the end." Tatsuya, who heard her words, chuckled to himself and after looking at her blushing cheeks for a while thought, "Looks like I was correct to use preventive measures to ensure that she do not fall." Tatsuya then pulled her towards him and returned gave a peck on her lips as well. Gabriel, who didn't expect that, looked away since she was feeling embarrassed by what he did, but still didn't let go of Tatsuya's hands and held it even tighter. Tatsuya looked at the seraph who was acting like that and patted her back and thought, "Really cute." Comment. 19. Comment. Gabriel and Tatsuya stayed together with their hands being held by each other. Gabriel was feeling embarrassed and a blush on her cheeks and was finding it hard to start the conversation with Tatsuya. Tatsuya, on the other hand, was just smiling, looking at the surroundings and waiting for Gabriel to calm herself a bit. He had already understood what Michael's goal was and was not that surprised by Gabriel's sudden confession and just accepted it. He turned his head towards Gabriel, who was still embarrassed, and asked, "If you don't want to, then we can just stay here instead of going to have dinner with everyone, you know." Gabriel remained silent for a while but soon gave a slight nod and said in a low voice, "You will stay with me, right?" and gripped his hand a bit tighter. Tatsuya just chuckled and pulled her in his embrace and said, "Of course," and then formed a barrier around himself to prevent others from coming near them. He then formed a bench and sta down on it along with Gabriel, who was totally red from being suddenly hugged by Tatsuya. She then looked up at Tatsuya, who was looking back at her with a small smile on his face, and then once again buried her head in his chest and said in a muffled tone, "Tatsuya." Tatsuya just caressed her back in response to which Gabriel gave a slight nod. She then took a deep breath and said, "I. but was not able to finish her sentence. Don't worry Gabriel, just say it. I will wait for how much long you want to prepare yourself. Gabriel hugged Tatsuya even tighter on hearing his words and said, thank you. She then remained motionless for a few minutes with her face buried in Tatsuya's chest, who was busy patting her back while also storing away the information about the design of the heaven they were in, as he wanted to take some ideas from the place and modify his dimension accordingly. After a while Gabriel suddenly looked up at Tatsuya's face and grabbed his face with her hands and made him look at her and said, TT Tatsuya I lile oh. Gabriel, who was finally able to speak but her tongue midway and had a pained and embarrassed look on her face and immediately hid her face with her hands. Tatsuya, who was suddenly pulled by Gabriel, chuckled seeing her acting like that, hearing which the embarrassed seraph started headbutting his chest intensely. Yeah, intensely. Her headbutts were literally making shockwaves cracking the nearby floor. Tatsuya, who was chuckling while undergoing the cute headbutting session, hugged her tightly and said, don't be that embarrassed Gabriel, let me say it if you are not able to. Gabriel then stopped headbutting Tatsuya and waited in anticipation while still hiding her face with her hands. Tatsuya then pushed her out of his embrace and grabbed her hands which were hiding her face and looked directly at the blushing seraph and said, I love you Gabriel. Gabriel became motionless for a while, but soon her eyes widened in surprise and she started blinking them, after which an embarrassed expression appeared on her face and with a nod she said, I love you too Tatsuya, and then looked at him with her slightly wet eyes. She then leaned in closer towards him, seeing which Tatsuya let go of her hand and cupped her cheeks which were totally red from embarrassment. Tatsuya then started to close in as well, seeing which Gabriel closed her eyes and soon felt something touching her lips. Gabriel, who for the first time felt being kissed, was a bit surprised and thought that it felt a bit different from the time when she was the one who initiated it. Tatsuya soon let go of her lips and said, you know Gabriel, you are not going to fall right now since I am making sure of it. She nodded her head with a slightly dazed expression, not fully understanding what Tatsuya meant. A mischievous smirk then appeared on Tatsuya's face as he caressed her lips with his fingers while using his other hand to support her already powerless body. Gabriel, who felt her lips being caressed by Tatsuya's fingers, wasn't sure what he was doing, but it somehow felt both nice and hot to her. Instinctively she opened her mouth a bit and licked Tatsuya's finger, seeing which Tatsuya got slightly surprised since it somehow looked absolutely hot to him. The gap between their innocent and this state is just too much. He then once again placed his lips on top of hers and once again started kissing her, but this time instead of small and simple kiss it was a passionate French kiss which took Gabriel by surprise, making her eyes widen in shock only to melt into a pleasure a few moments later. She got so overwhelmed by the pleasure that at one point she was the one who started to take lead, surprising Tatsuya, who thought, the saying that those who are innocent on the outside are usually wilder in the bed was true, I guess. Soon Gabriel stopped kissing Tatsuya and moved her head back, clearly showing the bridge of saliva connecting their tongues and the passionate yet confused look on her face. A magic circle then appeared in her hand and immediately after that both of them got covered by a bright light and got teleported somewhere else. The next instant both of them appeared in some sort of room which from the looks of it was loudly saying to perform reproductive activities here. He looked at Gabriel with a questioning gaze which was totally ignored by the pleasure-struck seraph, who pushed Tatsuya on the nearby bed. I am feeling hot Tatsuya. I don't know what is happening to me. Brother Michael told me that if I felt something like this when you are near me then just teleport to this room and let Tatsuya treat me, said Gabriel while getting on the bed as well and walking towards Tatsuya on both her hand and knees. Seeing her like that, not even taking a moment, little Tatsuya woke up in full glory, threatening to rip off the pants that he was wearing while Tatsuya himself gulped his saliva, and the only thought that came to his mind was, looks like it is time to corrupt her innocence. He then flipped her body and now was on top of her and decided to start treating her. Tatsuya and Gabriel then decided to go and meet the other two girls who came with him and was surprised to see Isamai and Zenobia being trained by Griselda, who had a smile on her face. He also noticed that both of their swords were repaired and improved and were sparring against each other, though there was a difference between the expressions of the two girls. While Zenobia had a troubled look on her face and was drenched in sweat, Isamai on the other hand was simply playing with her opponent with a relaxed smile on her face. Drake, isn't this peaceful? I couldn't agree more to that statement, partner. No overpowered strict trainers. No old grudge-bearing hags. No training till dropping dead. This is the life. Yeah, this is the life. The Longinus and its holder were having a pleasant conversation with each other while having their fight against Zenobia. Griselda on the other hand had an appreciative look, seeing that both the girls were quite capable. Zenobia, who had her external in one hand and Excalibur destruction in the other, was attacking Isamai without any break, and feeling frustrated since she was not able to land a solid hit on her, and if not for the barrier surrounding them the shockwaves created by her attacks could have damaged a major part of the heaven they were in. Tatsuya and Gabriel wailed towards Griselda, who was looking at the fight, but once she noticed the two of them she bowed her head and greeted them. Gabriel just waved her hand and was now back to her usual self. Thought Tatsuya still decided to create some fail-safes just in case her switch gets flipped and she accidentally falls down. Being cooked by Azazel was the last thing Tatsuya wanted after all. So, what are the two of them doing for the past 3 days? Asked Tatsuya, looking towards the woman wearing the nun outfit. The two of them were waiting for you to return, but when the two of you didn't show any signs of coming I decided to train them in the meantime since their swords were repaired as well, but I have to say the Red Dragon Empress does have a skill with the sword. Haha, well it certainly took a lot of effort to teach her from scratch but still the results were good, said Tatsuya, remembering the days he trained Izumi who had tears of sorrow. Happiness coming out on being trained by him. Hearing that, Griselda looked at Tatsuya, looked at his body intently, and once she was done checking him out she nodded her head and said, "You must be quite a good swordsman yourself, seeing that your form is very complex to deal with as well." Tatsuya then noticed that Zenovia started to prepare for a big attack and started charging her energy in her two swords, making the entire field inside the barrier tremble under the pressure of her power. Meanwhile, Izumi just had a serious look on her face as she focused on the swords in Zenovia's hands and started to charge up energy in her sword as well. "Want my help, partner?" "No need, Drake. I alone would be enough." "I think so, since that amount of holy energy is indeed sending creeps in my spine." She then raised her sword as well and her sword started to shine as well and started to get covered in flames. Outside the barrier, the three people who were looking at the fight were now wearing sunglasses while staring at them, and Tatsuya asked, "Who do you think will win this clash?" Even though the Red Dragon Empress is capable, the fact that both Durandal and Excalibur are better compared to her Ascalon puts her at a disadvantage in this, and seeing how this is going on, I think this is going to be a head-on competition between their powers. Zenovia. Then, I will bet on my student. Gabriel just stood silent and looked at the two girls and thought that it has been a while since she fought someone with her full capabilities. But just shrugged her shoulders, not thinking much about it. She didn't like fighting in the first place and will only fight when it is necessary. "Ex-Durandal," shouted Zenovia while slashing her Ex-Durandal M filled with energy towards Izumi, firing and devastating beam from her sword. "We are shouting names, huh?" Then, inhale Ascalon, and fired the red energy beam along with her Dragon Slayer flames towards the incoming attack. Seeing the intensity of the attacks, Gabriel just raised her hand and formed a stronger barrier along the already existing one since it would easily break by the attacks. Tatsuya and the other two could hear the shattering sound of the barrier while the clash of the two attacks made huge shock waves and the area around them became intensely hot because of the flames. Boom. Soon a huge explosion occurred inside the barrier, destroying the entire area without any exception, but the barrier was still able to hold it in. Soon the smoke and dust started to die down and an Isam came into view with her hand which was holding the sword slightly trembling and bleeding. On the other hand, in place of Zenovia, a circular dome stood there which soon disappeared and transformed into a sword and was held by Zenovia, who immediately used her other charged sword and fired another attack towards Izumi. "Let's see how you take my Excalibur destruction head on." "Hold up, you used the mimic sword to form a protective dome around you? That's hella unfair," protested Izumi with annoyance. But Zenovia ignored her and threw her Ex-Durandal away and just took out another Excalibur fragment from it. The instant she took out the new sword, she vanished from her spot and appeared behind Izumi, who for the first time from the beginning used her gauntlet to block the slash coming towards her. Now the rapid version. "Zenovia, that's unfair." "Indeed it is, so what? Take this," and slashed her destruction sword towards Izumi, who immediately transformed into her balance breaker and caught the sword. Boost, 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 boost. Drake started boosting, trying to push back the attack from Excalibur destruction, but before they were able to finish the clash, the barrier around them broke and Tatsuya said, "Alright, match over, Zenovia wins, the hell with it Izumi, it was a sword fight, not a brawl." "Tatsuya, don't stop me, she was the one who used unfair tactics," shouted Izumi, now transformed back to her usual form while pointing a finger towards Zenovia, who was already lying on the ground taking deep breaths. Just because you were not able to predict an outcome made it unfair, looks like you need more training. I will make some time in my schedule for you." Izumi immediately fell on her knees as tears started to come out of her eyes. She was about to say something before she saw Tatsuya smiling towards her and just hung her head down, knowing that there was no escape now. She then looked at her gauntlet and said, "Looks like happiness does not last forever." "Indeed, that's how life is. My condolences to you, partner," said the dragon inside the sacred gear. "You mean to say that you and Gabriel-san went on and on for 3 days straight?" asked a surprised Izumi while looking towards Tatsuya. She then looked towards the girl in question and stared at her for a while and said, "Damn." Tatsuya looked at Izumi from the corner of his eyes and said, "Izumi, we are in a public place, in heaven at that, make sure to mind your tongue, alright? We don't want Azazel to have more fallen angels." Tatsuya, who had already made a barrier around them to prevent Izumi's Nald from reaching the angel's side as he looked at the girl in question. Izumi in turn just nodded her head in approval and after a while started muttering, "I will try to do a 4-day straight then, gotta build up my stamina for that. Looks like it's time to focus in the Tiamat-san's class. I will ask Kuromi-san as well." Tatsuya and Griselda just looked at the Red Dragon Empress with a deadpan look on their faces, while Zenovia seemed to be noting something down in a notepad. Gabriel, who was elegantly drinking tea, encouraged Izumi to do her best. Both of them then sighed and Griselda looked towards Tatsuya and asked, "Are both of them always like that?" and pointed towards Izumi and Zenovia. Tatsuya looked back at her and said, "That's not even their final form, you know." Hearing that, Griselda widened her eyes in surprise and looked towards the two girls. Tatsuya, who was done with his tea, looked towards Izumi and Zenovia and said, "Let's get going then, your swords are repaired, and you don't want to face a pissed off Sana for skipping school like this, right?" Hearing that, both the girls frowned a bit as they knew how strict Sana could be regarding these matters. "Aren't you going to be in trouble as well?" Not to mention that it is your fault that we are still here, said Isami, pointing her finger towards Tatsuya. Nah, I am not in trouble since my grades are not bad at all, and even if Sana decides to approach me regarding skipping school, well, let's just say we will have a heated discussion to settle things in between us. Both Isami and Zenovia twitched their lips at that, but soon kept that at the back of their mind and prepared to leave. All of them notified about their departure to Michael, and then Tatsuya made a magic circle leading back to Kua and teleported away along with the other two. But just as they teleported, Tatsuya felt that something was off and soon found the reason for that once he noticed that he teleported outside of Kua. Tatsuya and the girls looked at each other with surprised look on their faces as Tatsuya immediately searched what was happening. He then took a step forward and knocked his fist on something that seemed to be like a transparent wall. A barrier surrounding the whole town. Looks like someone wants to get their ass kicked, very badly at that. Tatsuya then made a hole in the barrier and went inside along with the other two and said, "Hey Isami, will you do an errand for me?" But instead of replying, Isami changed to her balance breaker and said, "Deal with the mob that are deploying the barrier, right? No problemo." Zenovia took out her sword as well and said, "I will lend her a hand as well." Tatsuya nodded his head and then telepathically sent them the location where the people were, and the two immediately left to do their job. Once they were gone, Tatsuya looked in front and took out his guns and started flying towards the school while also killing any guest he found on his way. Once he reached the school, Tatsuya was met with a huge army of mages guarding the building, and immediately Tatsuya said, "This feels nostalgic." There was a similar situation during the peace summit of the three factions. Hearing his voice, all of the mages looked towards Tatsuya, but just as they turned their heads, Tatsuya used his telekinesis to crush their skull and said, "I did the same back then as well." He then walked inside the school, saw a huge dome inside which many students were lying unconscious while the devils were busy doing something, most probably brainwashing the children. Tatsuya then got inside the barrier as well, and once all of them noticed his presence they sighed in relief, and Rosias said, "I will fill you up on the situation." Tatsuya, who had already read their minds, just shrugged his shoulders and let her do what she wanted. "Sure, go ahead, but before that?" Tatsuya looked towards the children whose bodies were floating in the air because of his telekinesis and changed their memories accordingly and sent them back to their classes, while still being unconscious. Tatsuya looked at the others who were still there and said, "Check the school grounds to search for more intruders, and some of you go and check the town as well. I cleared the people that came in my path, but there are still quite a few that are left." All of them nodded as the student council members started to check the school grounds, while the Nikoshou from Tatsuya's team decided to check the town. So let's get this straight. A huge army of magicians suddenly appeared in the town out of nowhere, but were instantly destroyed by Miyuki, after which a few moments later, an army of dragons came and you all started to engage with them, while another group of magicians appeared after the dragons and got in the town because of the distraction. Various stuff happened. You all dealt with the dragons somehow, or some of them managed to escape. Then you all dealt with magicians that were threatening the students, and during all this commotion, Konako, Ravel and Miyuki get kidnapped by them. Hearing his explanation, Rosias, Sana, and the others who were still there nodded their heads. Tatsuya remained silent for a while and then sighed and said, "Well, I pity that person who kidnapped Konako, and Ravel kidnapped Miyuki by mistake as well. He must be dead by now." Well, knowing Miyuki, she would not do something dangerous, except for when asked by you or it is something related to you. But still, that person's blood must have been frozen by now. Tatsuya looked at his teammates who were talking to each other, but then Tatsuya noticed that the barrier started shattering and now knew that Isami and Zenovia were done with their job. Just as he thought that, Isami and Zenovia came back with some prisoners in tow to interrogate them. "But why did you took so long to come back? You should have been back 2 days ago, right?" asked a curious Rosias. But before Tatsuya could say anything, Isami said, "He was busy fucking a seraph for 3 days straight. Not our fault, just so you know." Tatsuya, who was now the center of attention, decided to change the topic and said, "Well, let's get Miyuki and the other two back," and then opened a portal. Once he stepped inside the portal, he found himself in a very big space and started looking around. And just as he was looking around, his eyes fell on something that made them widen in surprise. "Tell me, dragon, who is a disgrace and a piece of shit and should just perish from the face of earth?" It's me, mistress. Grendel is the one who is a disgrace and piece of shit, Mistress Kurumi." What Tatsuya saw was a huge 9-tailed fox stepping on top of a black-scaled dragon with his whole body covered in wounds and his face being crushed by the fox's foot. What the hell was happening here? Asked Tatsuya, but none was there to answer him. Tatsuya looked at the dragon who was being dominated by Kurumi and then towards the 9-tailed fox. He then turned his head to the side and asked, "Was it really necessary to let your clone do that and show this to everyone?" On his side, Kurumi in her human form was standing and looked towards Tatsuya and said, "I mean, I won't do something like that personally, you know, though it's a different thing if you want to do that. Even if I decided to do that, which I am pretty sure that I won't, I would be the dominant one anyway, and couldn't you have just put the dragon under a genjutsu?" Kurumi blinked her eyes in surprise and then looked towards her fox-transformed clone who was looking towards them and nodded her head. The huge fox nodded its head as well as a purplish-black ball started to form in its mouth. Seeing that, Tatsuya immediately formed a barrier around the huge creatures and soon the whole barrier got covered in an explosion. Once the explosion died down, the fox disappeared in a cloud and the dragon was left motionless with a serious wound in his chest and was now put in an illusion by the fox that just disappeared. Tatsuya then bound the dragon up and then looked towards Kurumi and asked, "So, what are you doing here?" Oruya told me about the invasion and that some idiot was trying to kidnap some of us, so I just came here to deal with the situation. After all, it is my responsibility as their eldest sister to make sure that they are safe. Not to mention that you were exceeded your stay in heaven, so it basically became my job anyway. Kurumi shrugged her shoulders and asked, "By the way, what made you extend your stay?" Tatsuya looked at Kurumi and said, "Gabriel confessed to me, things got heated up, Gabriel got even more heated up, went on with her for 3 days straight, that's the gist of it." Kurumi blinked in surprise for a while and then said, "Innocent ones are really dangerous, Asia was like that as well, but still nowhere close to our record 19 days 7 hours and 23 minutes star-eyed. I am not going to ask how do you know the exact time, but still, yeah, one of the best uses for the time chamber," said Tatsuya with a satisfied look on his face and nodded his head. He then looked around and asked, "Anyway, where are Miyuki and the others?" "Oh well, where there is cold there is Miyuki," and started to look for an area covered in ice. Soon enough he found the place and saw Miyuki and the other 2 girls who were kidnapped sitting around a table with a cup of tea in front of them and the whole area covered in ice. Both Konako and Ravel were looking awkwardly at the cup and then at each other, not knowing what the hell was happening here. Miyuki then felt the presences coming towards them and said, "Unii-sama want to join us for some tea," with a beautiful smile on her face which was even complemented by the beautiful ice around them. "I am here too, you know," said Kurumi, who was walking beside Tatsuya. "Oh, Kurumi. Sorry you were not visible since you got outshined by Unii-sama's radiance. Anyway, do join us," and took out 2 cups of tea from her storage and placed them on the table for Tatsuya and Kurumi. Tatsuya and Kurumi took their cups and drank their tea quietly while sitting with the rest of them as well. Tatsuya then looked at Ravel and Konako and asked, "You two are fine, right?" Konako and Ravel nodded their heads, no longer feeling awkward as they decided to not think much about it. Tatsuya nodded and said, "It's fine then." It seems like the one they were after was Ravel, since they wanted the phoenix tears from an original phoenix to improve their artificially created ones. Hearing that, all of them looked towards Ravel as she felt guilty, thinking that it was her fault for getting everyone in danger. Tatsuya, who heard her thoughts, teleported her in his lap, much to her surprise as she immediately became embarrassed bad. Her cheeks turned red. "TT Tatsuya-sama. Is something the matter, Ravel?" asked Tatsuya with a smile on his face. "WWWH-. Oh, I just remembered, thanks for the cakes that you baked for me that time, they were really delicious." Is that so? I am glad that you liked them," said Ravel, giving a relieved sigh. But soon her eyes widened and she said, "Wait, that's not the matter here," said Ravel, looking towards Tatsuya with a slightly angered expression. But Tatsuya ignored her words as he started patting the head of blonde girl sitting in his lap, making Ravel's face immediately turn beet red out of embarrassment, making her look down in shame. On the side, Konako, who saw all that, had already broken the table near her with just clutching the edge of the table between her hands. "Calm down, Konako, Tatsuya-senpai is just doing that to calm down Ravel. Yeah, senpai has no ill intentions. Let the Phoenix enjoy right now, since she might be thinking that she dragged everyone in danger." Kurumi, who felt the emotions coming out of Konako, patted her back and to calm her down a bit. Konako looked towards Kurumi, who was patting her back, and just sighed and controlled herself a bit. Ravel, on the other hand, was totally embarrassed by Tatsuya's actions, who slowly started to whisper some things near her ear and tried to make her not blame herself for the incident. Tatsuya then looked towards Miyuki and asked, "By the way, where is the one that kidnapped you three?" Miyuki placed her cup down and soon the ice beside her started to crack up as a big box made up of ice emerged from the ground. Inside the box was a frozen Uklid Lucifuge with a panicked look on his face and his hands covering his crotch. Miyuki looked at Tatsuya with a smile on her face and said, "This foo * king piece of shit said something along the lines that he wanted to let Unii-sama know how he felt by ravaging your sister aka me. Well, let's just say, I made sure to freeze him beyond the borderline of life and death, since, not only he is Grafia-san's brother, but also there was a possibility that he might get revived by that sacred gear, right?" Tatsuya nodded and patted Miyuki's head and said, "Good job, Miyuki. I am proud of you." Miyuki nodded with a bright smile on her face on being patted by Tatsuya. "By the way, isn't this letting him off the hook too easily?" asked Tatsuya with a friendly smile on his face. Miyuki nodded with an equally friendly smile on her face and said, "Don't worry, I took all the precautions necessary. His muscles are totally frozen, so he will not even be able to move. I was just waiting to confirm things with you since he is Grafia's brother." Tatsuya smiled and said, "No need to hold back, Miyuki, we can just bring him back to life if he unfortunately dies. So do as you please." Miyuki just nodded her head with a radiant smile, and a similar smile was present on Tatsuya's face as well, which made the two siblings even more attractive than they already were. Though the other people who were sitting with the siblings had a deadpan look on their faces as they with their mouths open wide, not knowing how could they talk like that with such a smile on their faces. Later that day, Tatsuya's team along with the other devil peerages were busy fixing the town and were helped by Azazel. Tatsuya, on the other hand, decided to deal with his dear brother-in-law and called Grafia to come to his house while also explaining the situation to the other Cersk devil kings. Though he kept the matter about Uklid up to himself as he wanted to let Grafia have a talk with him first. "Tatsuya-sama, it's good to see you again," said Grafia while bowing her head and wearing her usual maid attire. Tatsuya sighed and said, "Haven't I told you that you can be informal to me when we are alone?" I feel comfortable this way, though if you really want then I will change it. No need, I am fine as long as you are comfortable, and the maid play in the bed is the absolute best, said Tatsuya and nodded his head sagely. Hearing that, Grafia blushed a bit but still smiled towards Tatsuya and asked, by the way, what was the thing that you want to discuss with me? Tatsuya didn't say anything and just gestured her to follow him. Both of them then went to the basement and then Tatsuya said, just a warning but be prepared for a surprise. Grafia nodded her head and said, knowing what kind of person you and the others are, I am always prepared for one whenever I meet you all, and looked back towards him with a resolute expression on her face. Was that a praise or an insult? Anyway, let me show you whom we caught during this attack. He then opened the door of a room and Grafia saw that the whole room was covered in ice. Both of them then entered the room and Grafia saw a huge ice block standing in the middle of the room. Tatsuya, who saw that the contents inside the block were not clearly visible, used his magic to make the contents clear for him and Grafia. What Grafia saw made her widen her eyes in shock. In front of her a man stood trapped inside a block of ice having the same hair and eyes as her, and she easily recognized him as her brother who was thought to be dead during the Civil War, though for some reason her brother had a panicked look on his face and his hands were covering his crotch. Tatsuya, with the shocked look on Grafia's face, patted her shoulder and said, he is alive and kicking. In fact, he was the one who led the attack, though he pissed Miyuki off and the result is in front of you. He is only alive because Miyuki knew that he was your brother and that you might want to clear some things between you two. Grafia, who was totally shocked by what she saw and heard, remained silent for a while and started to arrange her thoughts. Once she was done, she took a deep breath and looked towards Tatsuya. Tatsuya, who saw her looking at him, nodded and said, I will stay here as well. This fucker might try to play the emotional blackmail card on her. Tatsuya then melted the ice around the devil and made a barrier around him to prevent him from getting away and started to heat him up a bit so as to increase his body's temperature. Once his temperature returned to normal, Tatsuya forceful woke him up using his psychic power and then motioned Grafia to continue. Tatsuya made chairs for both him and Grafia and both of them sat in front of the devil who was trapped inside a barrier. Uklid, who was forcefully woken up, clutched his head in pain and after a while was able to think normally. He then started looking around to check where he was but stopped once he found her sister sitting in front of her, along with the black-haired fucker of his brother-in-law who looked at him with a smile and waved his hand. Hello, good to see you, brother-in-law, how have you been? Uklid glared at Tatsuya for a while but then looked towards his sister who was looking at him with some complex emotions containing feelings of anger, concern, anger, happiness, anger, relief, anger, and a lot more. Seeing the face of his sister, who he only saw from the screen which he used to still *** keep watch of intruders, made him feel a bit happy, though his face remained neutral like it originally was. Unfortunately for him, Tatsuya could see what the hell that brain of his was thinking, and he made sure that he will put him in a 3-way war genjutsu for a whole year, and will add a maid cosplay for him as special for him being his brother-in-law. Nice to see you, Uklid, said Grafia in an indifferent tone. Well, I would like to say it is nice to see you, Nesama. Though my situation is not allowing me to say so. Grafia just raised her finger as a magic circle appeared in front of it and a chair made up of ice appeared behind Uklid. Seeing the chair, Uklid smiled and said, as expected of Nesama, she cannot see me suffering, and sat down, but just as he sat down his whole body was covered in ice restraints, seeing which Uklid got shocked and looked towards Grafia, who was apathetically looking at him. Now, then, do you want to start the story yourself, or you want some convincing? And you better not waste our time, Uklid, we have a lot to deal with because of this stupid little act. Tatsuya, who saw the siblings looking back at each other, secretly placed a diarrhea curse on Uklid, who was currently restrained and was sitting in front of the person he liked. Now this is gonna be fun, thought Tatsuya Bass. He saw Uklid's complete emotionless face starting to show some slight and unnoticeable expressions. He then looked towards Grafia, who still haven't caught on to Uklid's situation and just took some distance from them, telling to let both of them have a bit of privacy, and took out some popcorn from his storage and started watching the show. The sight which was in front of Tatsuya was something he was never going to forget. Seeing Uklid trying so hard to not let the expressions come out on his face in front of Grafia was a sight to behold. The thoughts that could only be said a total mess were there in his head, and Tatsuya was quite amused by listening to his thoughts. Though the number of times the little brother thought about doing something with his sister, Tatsuya would improve the effects of the curse a bit, much to Uklid's dismay. Grafia, who was hardly able to get answers out of her brother's mouth, was starting to get pissed at him and thought it would be better to use other means to get the information out of him. Uklid, I am asking for the final time, will you tell us where your so-called master is and what is he planning? I told you already, even if you are my older sister, I am still not going to give any information to a traitor like you, even though you are looking at me so passionately and I love you so much. Shit. Why again is this happening? It's taking all my willpower to let me emotions not appear on my face, you know? Which asshole? No, let's not think about that. Concentrate, Uklid. You cannot let sister is in front of you. What would she think if she knew what is happening to me right now? Grafia, I think you should use some other means to get the info out of him. You can hit him as hard as you want, you know, don't worry about killing him. We have Asia, and if that is still not enough, I am here as well, right? Said Tatsuya as he stood beside Grafia and placed his hands on her shoulders. That stinking human piece of bug shit, how dare you get close to my Nesama? Get the hell away from he, though Uklid, as he wanted to clutch his stomach but was not able to because of his hands being restrained in ice. Grafia looked towards Tatsuya, who was looking at her with a soft smile and was about to say something, but Tatsuya interrupted her and asked, "Or I can do it as well, or more like please let me do it. I cannot have you hit your brother. It will not sit well with you, right? Don't worry, I won't hit him as well." Grafia widened her eyes in surprise and was hesitating a bit. She knew that it was important to get the information out of Uklid's mouth, but was still not able to bring herself to ruthlessly hurt her brother. She knew that if Tatsuya said that he will not hurt her brother, then there must be a way to do that, but still she felt like she would be asking too much from him. Tatsuya, who knew what she was thinking, pecked her cheek and said, "Don't worry, Grafia. I am asking you to let me do it, not the other way around, right? And besides, it was my territory and sister that were kidnapped by him, so I have the right to interrogate him as well, you know." Grafia, who was kissed by Tatsuya, would usually not think much about it and just enjoy that, but right now, being in front of her brother, she felt a bit embarrassed and had a slight blush on her cheeks. "Tatsuya-sama, don't do that here. Uklid is watching us." "It's embarrassing?" Hearing that, Tatsuya smirked and whispered in her ears, "Then you mean that you don't have a problem with me doing whatever I want with you when no one is watching us, right?" and slightly bit her earlobe. The grey-haired maid felt a shiver run down her spine and felt both excited and embarrassed hearing that, and with a slight blush on her cheeks looked away and just gave a slight nod. Seeing her acting like that, Tatsuya chuckled and started teasing her once again, as he felt that his maid acting all shy and embarrassed was quite cute and wanted to see more of that. Meanwhile, the other person, except for the couple that were currently flirting, has his eyes wide open with anger evident in them, and once could also see that there was some blood dripping near his fists, which were clenched tightly. Uklid Lucifuge was looking at his sister flirting with the despicable piece of human shit and had bloodshot eyes and was seething with rage. He wanted to just separate those two and tear apart the human who was so close to his sister by was being restrained. "Get the hell away from my Grafia Nesama, you fu *cur. And how dare you kiss her beautiful cheeks with that filthy mouth of yours? Let me tell you, Nesama used to kiss me as well, you know, when we were kids. She even used to bath along with me, when we were kids. Heck, she even promised me that she will become my bride, and that's the reason she still haven't married yet. This didn't happen at all. I will kill you, I will kill you." Tatsuya, who had currently stopped listening to his thoughts because he already expected that it would just be something useless, continued to flirt with Grafia for a while, who was so embarrassed and excited that she was willing to get pushed down then and there if her brother wasn't present. Tatsuya too was willing to abide by her thoughts and looked at his watch and thought, "The others will still take some time to come back, okay." He then looked towards Uklid and said, "You stay here and don't make a ruckus," and secretly increased the effectiveness of the curse for all the bullshit he may have thought when Tatsuya wasn't listening to his thoughts. He then carried Grafia in a princess carry and teleported from the room, leaving the silver-haired Lucifuge, whose thoughts were in a total chaos, alone there. A whole week passed by with Tatsuya and the other 4 girls being holed up in his room doing unspeakable deeds. Though in real world it was only a few hours since Tatsuya left with Grafia. Tatsuya, who got up from his bed, looked at the 4 girls who lasted for the whole week straight and sighed, seeing that except for Grafia, the other 3 girls, who theoretically had infinite stamina, were still awake, though were satisfied with their session. Afais, who was back into his lowly form, was sitting in Tatsuya's lap and eating a chocolate that Tatsuya gave her while being hugged by Tatsuya as well, who too was being fed sometimes by the little girl in his lap. Kurmui, who saw that, just lied back on the bed beside the exhausted Lucifuge and covered the maid with a sheet and let her sleep peacefully. The maid really tried her best to compete with literal monsters but was unfortunately defeated by the others. Kurumi and Ruya dressed back into their clothes after cleaning themselves with their make, and Ruya asked Afais, "Hey Afais, give me some as well," and tried to reach for her chocolate, only to get her hand smacked by Afais, who without any change in her expression said, "Nothing for Baka Red," and moved the chocolate towards Tatsuya's mouth, who took a small bite out of it and smirked while looking towards Ruya. Ruya looked at Afais with a deadpan expression on her face and used her magic to create an even bigger chocolate than the one Afais had, and looked at the little dragon girl with a victorious smirk. Afais, who saw that, tilted her head slightly and asked, "You don't get any sweets from Tatsuya, so you are now making them by your own since you feel lonely, Baka Red?" Hearing her innocent tone while asking that question, Ruya felt a dragon god slayer arrow piercing her heart, not knowing how to respond to that. Seeing that both Tatsuya and Kurumi looked at her and said, "Oof, burn," and immediately looked away from the dragon god who was glaring at them. Tatsuya then gave both of them some chocolates as well, while not forgetting to give a bigger one to Afais, who felt proud on receiving the bigger one and left the room after he got reminded by Ruya about his brother-in-law, who was totally forgotten by both him and Grafia a few days ago. Tatsuya came out of his room and checked the situation of the town through his magic and said, "They will still take some time. Well, it's better if they don't see that anyway." Tatsuya then entered the room where he kept the younger Lucifuge, and just as he entered the room he was attacked by a foul smell. Immediately using his magic to clear the smell in the room, he looked at the man who had no will to live, sitting on his shit. Tatsuya looked at him for a second and then nodded his head and took out some unsee eye drops from his pocket and dropped some in each of his eyes. He then took out some black glasses which will totally obstruct his vision and said, "You brother-in-law, seems like you got some shit to take care of. Should I come later if you are busy, or do you want some help?" Uklid with his lifeless eyes looked at his arch-nemesis and said, "Fuck off, you stinky no not stink. You asked no asshole either. Why yo you piece of aahh? Not shit as well? What the fuck do you want, human? Just go and see UCK somewhere else." Tatsuya just scratched the back of his head and said, sorry, I was just fucking some time ago, so currently I am not in the mood, not to mention Grafia is tired as well after all that. Immediately veins popped up on the always calm and collected Uklid as he looked at Tatsuya with an angry expression on his face and said, I swear I will kill you, Tatsuya Shiba. But just as he said that, his stomach started to grumble once again and his face scrunched up in displeasure. Tatsuya, who felt what was happening, smiled and asked, should I call for Grafia? She might help you if you are in trouble, after all she is your sister, right? Hearing that, immediately the restraints that were holding back the lucifuge broke and he stood up with an outstretched hand towards Tatsuya and said, wait, stop. Tatsuya just stood at his place and asked, why? Aren't you in quite a shitty situation? Your sister might help you if you need something, so I can just call her, or do you want my help instead, brother-in-law? Hearing those words, Uklid gritted his teeth, not knowing what to do. On one hand there was an option of asking help from the fucker in front of him, and on the other hand there was an option which made him show all this disappointment to his sister who he loved dearly. Pondering about what to do for quite a while, Uklid looked at Tatsuya with an enraged expression and said, help me. Tatsuya smiled and said, what is the word that you use to ask for help, and do ask politely. Hearing that, Uklid got even more enraged as his body started trembling in anger and he said, will you please help me? Tatsuya Shiba. That was rude as well, but whatever. I will help you, so what do you need? No, don't tell me. I already know what kind of shit you are in, so here, take this, and moved his hand towards Uklid. Uklid looked at what Tatsuya was holding and blinked his eyes in surprise and looked back towards Tatsuya, then towards the thing and then back at Tatsuya. What is this for? To wipe that off. A double-sided extra sandy sandpaper. Covered with the highest quality holy water as well. I see, like hell I will use that. My asshole will fucking bleed. Tatsuya showed a bright smile and said, but don't you need this? After all, in the current situation it is comparable to the highest quality antibacterial wipes. It's a fu*king sandpaper. But it still have paper in it, right? But there is sand, no extra sand in it as well, not to mention the holy stuff. You complain a lot, looks like I should call Grafia to deal with you, and pulled his hands back and started walking towards the door. Seeing him walking away after giving a threat, a lot of possible scenarios came in Uklid's mind in a matter of seconds, and he immediately stopped him and said, wait, you bastard. Give me that fu*king paper. And immediately Tatsuya appeared in front of him with a sheet of paper which somehow looked even more sandy and holy than the one he showed earlier. Tatsuya smiled and said, please take your time, I will be waiting outside, and handed the paper to his brother-in-law and left the room. After a few minutes of screaming and yelling that was coming from the room, Tatsuya decided to go inside when he noticed that the noise stopped. As soon as he opened the room, he saw a silver-haired man lying down on the floor with his butt perked up and totally uncovered with some smoke coming out of his butt. Looks like the holy water burned him a bit too much, his ass is totally charred by it. B then used his telekinesis to fix his posture and clothes and made him sit back on the ice chair, which immediately caused a lot of pain to the younger lucifuge as his butt has still not recovered. Fuck you, Tatsuya Shiba, and jumped up from the chair only to slip on his shit and fall down on his butt, which caused another series of screams to come out of the poor guy. Tatsuya cleaned the mess around Uklid and let him do whatever he want and said, anyway, leaving all that, are you going to tell us what we want to know? Uklid glared at him and said, you can try your worst, but still I won't tell you anything. Tatsuya nodded his head and said, well, there was no harm in trying to let you fess up on your own butt. Oh well, it's not like I don't know that the old Lucifer is in Rome or that you are trying to free Trihexa. Hearing what he said, Uklid's eyes widened in surprise as he was about to ask something, but then immediately the surrounding around him changed as he found himself in a dimly lit room with a huge bed. Where am I? Tatsuya Shiba, what are you planning? But soon he felt some trouble in his stomach once again and crouched down a bit. Shit, not again? What the fu*k did I eat that made me like this? What happened, Uklid? Are you troubled by something? Hearing a distant but familiar voice, Uklid looked up with slight shock on his face and saw his sister, or rather sisters, looking at him with the usual cold look. Seeing that, a look of fear appeared around Uklid's face as he started to get pale. Currently in the room where Uklid and Tatsuya were, Tatsuya was looking at Uklid with a slight smirk on his face and said, well, you did say to try my best, brother-in-law. He then gave one last glance to him and then left the room. Once he got out, he called Azazel to ask if everything was back in order, to which Azazel just told him how much work was done and the other matters that occurred in the town during his absence. Mainly, some vampires from Rome asking for Gaspar and Rias denying and going to Rome herself to deal with the situation. Listening to all that, Tatsuya nodded and made a clone of himself and said, I will be going then. The clone nodded and said, I will take care of things here. Tatsuya nodded and then teleported away. A few moments later, Tatsuya arrived inside a huge room and heard some noise coming from behind him. He turned around and saw Rias totally naked with some soap covering her spotless and beautiful body, with a surprised look on her face. Hello there, said Tatsuya, making the situation even more awkward than it already was. Back in Kuath, the devils from the Gremory and Citri peerages along with Tatsuya's team were finally done with their jobs and were now inside Tatsuya's home, wanting to discuss the situation and rest for a bit. Tatsuya's clone, who was present there, explained the situation to all of them about the Chaos Brigade's plan to get their hands on the real Phoenix tears and Uklid wanting to mess with Tatsuya as he was a very dangerous person for their plans. He also told them about the fact that the big boss was in Rome and that the dragons were actually the vampires, shocking all of them, especially Gasper, who was angry knowing that her childhood friend was being used. He immediately wanted to rush there and help her and Rias, but was stopped by the clone, who told that the real Tatsuya was already there to deal with all this. Wait a minute, do you mean that Tatsuya is already present where my grandfather is? Asked Vala's projection, who was specially called by Tatsuya. The clone nodded and said, yup, so I am here to remind you get as strong as you get till tomorrow, or the original bis going to deal with the old devil himself. Damn that bastard Tatsuya. Hey CAO, come meet me in the time chamber at Got Guy's house in 10 minutes, I need a training partner to get stronger. Bye, said Vali as he called CAO and teleported to Shiba residence the next instant, with his team in tow, and pulled them with him to the time chamber. Hey, what the hell are you doing, Vali? I would like to know about the same as well. Release me this instant, Vali Naya? Chiron Naya? Save your Oni-chan. But all their efforts were in vain as Arthur, Baikao, and Kuriko were pulled in the time chamber by Vali. Well, there he goes. As for you guys, rest while you can. The original will inform you if there is some need for you all, said the clone as he dissipated in a cloud of smoke, and in his place appeared a huge table with a lot of dishes present on it. Meanwhile, inside Euclid's mind, Euclid was surrounded by a huge army of Graphia all around him, looking away from him with a disgusted look on their faces as he was not in control of his body and continued shit on the place where he was with a lifeless expression on his face and kept on muttering, just let me die. Just let me die. He also had a familiar extra holy extra sandy sandpaper in his hand which had "use me" written on it with a different colored sand. Tatsuya was currently sitting in a bathtub totally naked with Rias leaning on him. So you are saying that a descendant of the original Lucifer is currently controlling the Teeps faction and is also the member of Chaos Brigade? Asked Rias. Tatsuya looked at Rias, who was looking back at him, and said, he could technically be said to be the leader of Chaos Brigade, you know. And he attacked Kua while I was not there? Asked Rias with a slight frown. Tatsuya held her head in his hands and made her look in front and closed her eyes by placing his hand on top of them and said, well, it doesn't matter that much, since you would not have contributed much, since there were a lot of dragons that were to be dealt with. The small fries were easily taken care of by Miyuki and the rest the moment they came in range. Rias, whose vision was blocked by Tatsuya's hands, remained silent for a while and then asked, are you insulting me? Tatsuya just shrugged his shoulders and said, just stating facts so as to not make you feel guilty, my dear. Rias removed the hands blocking her vision and turned towards Tatsuya and said, that was not a good way to reassure someone. Tatsuya hugged her waist and said, but this method did work on you, right? Rias, who got hugged by Tatsuya, smacked her forehead on his chest and said, strangely enough, I am now used to your crude way of treating this little ol me. What can I say? I am also used to treating you like this, because of how you used to act before, the Three Factions Alliance. Hearing that, Rias looked up at Tatsuya's face with a pout, seeing which Tatsuya smirked and said, you were a real piece of work back then, and a way too spoiled bitch, a princess. Hearing that, Rias's brows twitched as she asked, really now, that was totally uncalled for. Well, just think of this, of us remembering the old days. But still I tried my best to change, right? What do you think of me now? Asked Rias with an expectant look on her face. Well, you are comparatively less bitchy and spoiled, and not that big of a piece of work. Your attitude is a bit better though. Rias looked at Tatsuya with a deadpan expression and said, I will just take that as a compliment. You should, because that was one, said Tatsuya, which earned him a light punch on the chest from Rias. Tatsuya just laughed a bit and then leaned comfortably in the tub, which was filled with water that Tatsuya got from the lake in heaven. This situation, after weeks of night activities with beings which had nearly infinite stamina, did wore him out a bit, and the water was really relaxing for him. Rias too felt relaxed, but for some reason felt a bit uncomfortable, most probably because the water was from heaven, but Tatsuya made sure that it would not harm her. She just leaned on Tatsuya and said, thank you for slapping me back then. Tatsuya, whose eyes were closed, heard what Rias said and imagined the time when he slapped Rias during the cockabile incident and thought, that slap left a mark for a whole week. Tatsuya then moved his hand towards her butt and gave it a squeeze, earning a yelp from the redhead, and said, I can slap your cheeks again, you know. Rias then turned around with a playful angry expression on her face and pushed her chest against Tatsuya's and said, do you really want to? After all, we are not in a safe place, right now. Tatsuya looked at Rias and said, do you really think that I will not make sure of that? You seem to be forgetting who I am, my dear redhead. But aren't you tired from all that you did before coming here? Asked Rias with a provoking smirk. Wanna find that out? Why no dash, but before she could say anything, both of them noticed a magic circle appear in the bathroom, making Rias shocked since she truly didn't think that someone would be able to come there, in Tatsuya's presence. Relax, no need to worry. The only person who can come in without my permission is Dash. Suddenly Sana, Sabeki, Akeno, Isamai, and Zenovia and Irina appeared with Tatsuya's clone. Izmi finished Tatsuya and looked at his clone, who just gave him a casual salute and teleported back to Kua. Era, looks like we really interrupted Rias, said Akeno with a playful smile on her face and started unbuttoning her shirt. Tatsuya, don't forget you promised we would be king like rabbits once we were done with taking care of the town, said Isamai, who too started to strip. Wait Isami, you should and not do something like that, said Irina with a huge blush on her cheeks and covering her eyes with her hands and peeking at Tatsuya's naked body from in between her fingers. No need to worry Irina, Tatsuya did the baby making with Gabriel-sama back in heaven without having he fall and the angels supported that, you know. So it's fine to do that, it's not bad, said Zenovia who was already taking off her underwear. Really? Asked Irina with a surprised tone. See, this is what happens when you don't take aggressive approach with someone like him who is always surrounded by girls. We are already too late, Sana-sama said Sabeki who was now sitting beside Tatsuya in the tub and immediately had a blissful expression on her face because of the water. Hey, it's not my fault. It's too embarrassing, you know, said Sana who was totally red from embarrassment and was the only one besides Irina who had still not taken off her clothes. Seeing and guessing what all of them were here for, Tatsuya sighed and thought, this week is really busy, for some reason. And then used his magic to strip Sana off her clothes and pulled her to sit beside him much to her shock and embarrassment. Rias who was on Tatsuya's chest looked at Sana with a smirk and said, hello Sana, feeling embarrassed, and jiggled her breasts in front of her face making the Satrai heiress annoyed by their size. She then looked at her chest and sighed. The other girls who were still not the tub were convincing Irina and getting her prepared, seeing which Tatsuya made the room similar to the one he was in with Gabriel and placed the same magic on Irina that he did on Gabriel. Tatsuya then looked towards Sana and grabbed her boobs which easily fit in his hand and said, don't worry, I will try my best to get them big, and started fondling her chest before she could even reply, which earned moans filled with pleasure from Sana. Tatsuya made sure to record that and would use it to tease her later. Akeno was also present in the tub and was instructing Rias on how to service the little brother as both of them sat beside his legs and enveloped his cock in between their breasts. Sabeki who was on Tatsuya's other side was also getting fondled by Tatsuya and was also giving similar reactions as Sana. Isami and Zenvia who were successful in stripping Irina looked at the scene and thought, let's wait for a bit, and got in the huge tub as well. Tatsuya who was now surrounded looked towards the author and said, well, see you later, and snapped his fingers. Tatsuya then transferred all of them to his dimension and now suddenly in his bedroom. The confused girls looked around for a while, seeing which Tatsuya reassured them. Sabeki then held Tatsuya's face and gave him a deep kiss making Sana blush at her queen's act. The others too got slightly excited seeing Sabeki acting aggressively, and soon all of them got prepared to spend a long night. After spending a whole day inside Tatsuya's dimension, the girls were lying down unconsciously on the bed with their body totally naked and covered with a sheet. Tatsuya was being hugged by Rias and Sana on either side and Isami on top of his chest sleeping peacefully. After he successfully got out of the pile of bodies lying on and around him, Tatsuya went back to Rome after leaving a message for the girls. There he reheated the bath he was at yesterday and cleaned himself and made sure to deal with the remaining water from heaven as it was quite deadly for the vampires who owned this place. After taking his bath, Tatsuya made a magic circle and near his ear and said, yo, good morning. You see there are a few important stuff to deal with, so come straight to Rias's room. The magic circle then disappeared and a few minutes later someone knocked on the door, hearing which Tatsuya said, come in, and the door opened and Kiba came in. He got slightly surprised seeing Tatsuya there but soon smiled and said, seems like something serious is going to happen today, seeing that you are here. Tatsuya smiled as well and said, you don't know. Kiba nodded and asked, so, care to fill me up on the info? Wait a minute, I will do that soon. Now then let's call the others as well. Tatsuya said that, and several small magic circles appeared in the air and projections of various people appeared on top of it. Tatsuya, don't tell me that you already dealt with that old bastard, asked Vala with a serious tone. Oh, if it isn't the White Dragon Emperor. Rias's knight, and someone new here. Anyway, what happened, Tatsuya? Said Sereorg with his usual confident tone. Seeing that you have called me as well along with their white shit emperor, means that it is for the thing that I asked you for, said Cao with his sacred gear in his hand and looking towards Vali. Though there was no need for it since I am here with this bastard at your place anyway. Tatsuya nodded and said, yup, it's for that purpose and I hope that you are prepared, Vali. Vali snorted and said, don't worry, I had taken some help from some dragon gods to get myself prepared for this. So we are about to begin. There's still some people left to respond. So wait a bit. Soon another magic circle lit up and another projection appeared. I am done with the preparations, boss, said Loki, who now had his powers back and had a confident expression on his face. Tatsuya nodded and said, then let's begin, and told them about his plans. Soon all the people whom Tatsuya contacted were present in the room where Tatsuya and Kiba were, along with some of their teammates. Vala was there with Baikao and Arthur, Cao was with George and Siegfried, Sereorg was standing along with Regulus, Loki along with the three god-killer pups, Kiba with Saji, who immediately agreed when Tatsuya asked him, and Tatsuya with Rosias and Tiamat, who also decided to take part in this invasion since she had already placed all the baby dragons and dragon eggs in Tatsuya's dimension and was sure that they were safe. Rosias looked at Tatsuya and asked, are you sure that it will be fine? Tatsuya nodded and said, totally. Why? Is there some problem? Just 15 people are deciding to deal with a terrorist group whom all the factions around the world are on an edge against. Isn't that something that I should worry about? Said Rosias with a panicked look on your face. Not to mention that strategy of yours, said Rosias pointing her finger at Tatsuya. Tatsuya looked at her innocently and said, what's wrong with that? Isn't that strategy just fine? We will just be barging straight through. Yup, no problem, said Volley. I will take anything head on, said Cersk. I am a god, and even though I am a god of trickery, I have enough pride in myself to not use some worthless moves against those small fries. Not to mention, I have some debt to pay back those fuckers from Cow's Brigade that tried to trick me, said Loki, clutching his fists. I will show them that humans are not scared of those supernatural bastards, and they still have a lot to pay back for trying to take advantage of the hero faction, said Cao. Well, Aniki said it, so I am sure it will be fine, said Saji with full confidence in Tatsuya. Hearing their answers, Rosias was at a loss and was then comforted by Tiamat, who hugged her and patted her back. Don't worry, it will be fine, I will be there. Not to mention you have your secret weapon as well, right? Said Tatsuya, patting Rosias' shoulder, who looked at him with twitching lips but still nodded her head. Now just one more person, said Tatsuya, and opened a portal and pulled Isami out of it. Isami looked at Tatsuya and the others and with a sigh said, "Why me?" and looked at Tatsuya, who left a special message for her to be prepared back at the mansion. Don't worry, I won't let my servants go out there alone, said Rias, who jumped out of the portal as well and was dressed too. She then looked at Tatsuya and with a smile on her face said, "Heal me please." Tatsuya stared at her for a while and just shrugged his shoulders. I will tell the Siskin later about this, along with the fact that he is now my brother-in-law, thought Tatsuya, and said, well then be prepared for the huge fight. Isami looked at Tatsuya and asked, where are the others? Only this much. We cannot call all of them here since the other places require protection as well, not to mention that we still have their second-in-command captured in Kua. There is a high chance of an attack to take place there, said Tatsuya. What about Asia? We need a healer too, right? Asked Isami. Don't worry, I will make sure to revive you later if you died, said Tatsuya, hearing which Isami frowned and thought, Drake, make sure that I in no way want to experience dying. Noted, partner. Once they made sure that all their preparations were complete, Tatsuya made a magic circle on the ground big enough for all of them to fit in and teleported away. Tatsuya and the others then appeared in front of the Teeps faction area, and Tatsuya looked around and nodded his head. It seems like normal teleportation inside there is being blocked. Well, I can teleport us, but no need, they must have already noticed us. It's better to just push through from here rather than getting surrounded from the beginning, said Cao. Tatsuya nodded and asked, so, who is willing to do the honors, as I can feel a lot of people moving from their places. Vale immediately took a step forward and said, what about you, Hayado? Wanna find out who the better amongst the heavenly dragons is, and gave Isami a side glance. Isami, who saw him looking towards her, took a step forward and said, sure, I don't mind some warm-up. Both of them then manifested their sacred gears and yelled at the same time, Balance Breaker, Welsh Dragon, Balance Breaker, Vanishing Dragon, Balance Breaker. Both the Heavenly Dragon Emperors then got ready, and Tatsuya said, on your marks, but before he could even finish, both Isami and Vala took off at great speeds. Tatsuya looked towards the two reckless dragons and just shrugged his shoulders and asked, so shall we go now? To which the others nodded as well and started running towards the castle. Regulus and the pups changed to their true forms, and Loki was riding on top of Fenrir. The three kinks, Kiba, Arthur, and Siegfried were also standing close by, and it seemed like they were trying to compete as well. Baikao, Cersk, Saji, and Cao were also prepared, as both Cao and Saji had taken out their sacred gears, and Baikao was on his cloud with his bowstaff in his hand. Cersk was covered in toki, ready to attack. Rosias, who was now focused, was flying the air along with Rias, while Tatsuya was sitting on top of a transformed Tiamat, who too was flying in the air. Just as all of them passed through a second barrier, the surroundings completely changed as they saw a huge army of vampires, devils, and dragons prepared to attack, while the two heavenly dragons were focused on breaking through the huge wall of people. Tatsuya looked at the scene and said, he will get exhausted even before he could reach his grandpa. He then looked towards Rosias and said, Rosias, Rias, the dogs. All those who were called out looked towards Tatsuya waiting for his order, and in response he smiled and said, open fire, and snapped his fingers to make the barrier around the whole territory stronger so that everyone can go all out. All of them nodded as a huge number of magic circles appeared behind Rosias. Rias looked at the circles and said, Rosias-san, pass your spells through that, and a huge magic circle with Gremory symbol appeared in front of those circles. Seeing that Rosias understood what she was planning, and the circles tilted a bit to aim towards Rias's magic circle. Ha! Shouted Rosias as a number of beams made up of different elements were launched towards the Gremory circle. All the spell that were passed through Rias's magic circle got buffed with her destruction element, and immediately huge explosions started happening on the battlefield. Ah, shit, run. Barriers? We need barriers. Attack them together, everyone. Save your lives first, idiots. The attacks are not stopping. Seeing that the vampires and the devils were panicking and were making openings in their formation, Rosias and Rias high-fived. A god cannot stay behind mere mortals. Come on, my child and grandchildren. Show them the might of Loki, said Loki as he flew up in the air, and the god-killer wolves stood side by side and opened their mouths. 3 huge magic circles appeared in front of their mouth, while 6 magic circles appeared above Loki. The 3 wolves fired wind, fire, and ice magic towards the enemies, while Loki summoned a few dragons who started attacking the dragons from the enemy side. Oh, another Dragon King, said Tiamat with an amused tone. You wanna join? Asked Tatsuya, who was sitting on top of her head. Nope, there are just small fries here. Tatsuya nodded as he tapped Tiamat's head, telling her to move faster, and told everyone else to follow them. Tatsuya looked towards Cao and said, there are a lot of enemies who are weak against holy element here, you know. Hearing that Cao nodded as the blade of his spear started shining. Tatsuya looked at the swordsman and said, the same goes for you three. The three of them nodded and Siegfried said, Gramarye's knight? Arthur? Let's see who the best swordsman is, and summoned his third hand and held 3 swords in them. Kiba and Arthur did the same as Kiba formed 2 whole devil swords in each hand and Arthur took out his Caliban and Excalibur ruler. Ready, go. Just as Tatsuya signaled them, the 4 holy weapon wielders vanished from their spots and immediately large beams and orbs made of light and by elements started appearing on the battlefield, charring the devils and vampires without any mercy. Tatsuya then looked towards the sky and saw that the heavenly dragon wielder had somehow started their own brawl, though the enemies were still being dealt with by the attacks that were missing their targets. Baikao, extend your staff and pierce it in the butt dragon emperor's ass. Baikao looked towards Tatsuya for a while but soon a smirk appeared on his face and said, sure. Hoi hoi, and the staff started extending and successfully hit his mark. Wadash? Who the hell did that? And looked towards the staff poking and immediately glared at Baikao. Baikao, who saw Vala looking at him, waved his hand and pointed towards Tatsuya, who was pointing towards the open path. Vala saw that facepalmed, since he totally forgot his goal because of excitement. Let's go, Red Dragon, just one more push through this crowd, and rushed towards the devils and vampires. Sure, said Isamai following him, and both of them started blasting through the crowd in front of them. Tatsuya, who was the only one who hasn't done anything from the beginning, was just blocking the attacks coming towards them and let the others attack without any disturbance. Soon all of them saw the castle, which was now very close to them, and Tatsuya immediately jumped off from Tiamat's head. The others followed him and started descending. Once all of them in front of the entrance, Tatsuya came forward and said, now let's do this my usual way. Everyone who heard him say that were confused as to what Tatsuya was referring to but just shrugged it off. They looked back at the huge battlefield in front of them and saw Rosias, Rias, the god-killer wolves and swordsmen confronting all of them along with Loki's dragons. Isamai too stood behind to deal with the dragons since she had Ascalon. Vali and Cao, who just came, looked towards Tatsuya and asked, what the hell are you doing? Hurry up, Tatsuya. Tatsuya nodded and cleared his throat. He then took a deep breath and knocked on the huge castle door and yelled, FBI, open up, and punched the door with full force, sending it flying and making a very strong shockwave, and ran inside the castle. The others just stared at the huge dust cloud in front of them, not sure how to react to their captain's antic. The others waited for a bit, not sure what to do. Cao, they looked towards George and said, surround the area, make sure no one enters, deal with them however you want. George nodded his head and then purple mist started to come out of his hands and started surrounding the entrance. Vali, who was in his armor, immediately rushed in and said, hurry up, Baikao, if we are too late the old bastard would already be dead. Baikao immediately followed Vali on his cloud, after which the others started following him as well. Soon they saw Tatsuya walking in the hallway of the castle with his guns in his hands and singing something. Demo Sunnan Ja Dame. Mao Sunnan Ja Ora devils disappearing in white mist. Kokoro Wa Shinka Suruyo. Material burst, a small group of evil dragons getting vaporized by a small-scale material burst. Tatsuya then just continued walking through the hallway without caring much and singing to himself. His companions who were behind him just stayed there, taking down anyone who would come from the top. Soon the group came in front of a path that split into 4 different ones. Tatsuya stopped singing and said, I am taking this one. Choose one and go forward. If any one of you are about to die, just call, and walked towards the path that he selected. Seeing that every one of them looked at each other and discussed where they would go. In the end, Tiamat decided to go behind Tatsuya. Sereorg, Saji, and Regulus made a team. Baikao and Vala made a team. Loki and Cao made a team. Vala looked at all of them and said, if you find my grandfather, make sure to call me, and then left with Baikao. The others nodded and went to their selected paths as well. Tatsuya, who heard someone coming towards him, looked behind and saw Tiamat coming and asked, you chose to come with me. Tiamat hummed in response and said, yup, I thought that you would feel quite lonely on your own. There's no need to worry about that lizard hag, said a voice as orange chakra started leaking out of Tatsuya and materialized in the form of Kurumi beside him. So you were here as well, huh? Vixen, said Tiamat as she narrowed her eyes. Kurumi just smirked and said, yup, after all I am the one closest to Tatsuya, so it is a matter of fact that I would be with him during battles as well. Alright, talk while walking, we are not going to wait for both of you to finish your bickering, said Tatsuya, who was already quite a bit away from the 2 ladies, who just gave each other a last look before they followed him. After walking for a while, they soon came in front of 4 beings that were blocking their paths. Kurumi looked at the 4 and said, oh, look Tiamat, your kin. Tiamat nodded her head and said, indeed they are dragons, but I didn't think that they were alive as well. Seems like they were brought back to life as well, and I didn't expect to see that unsocial person here. Long time no see, Crom. Crom Kruak, who was in his human form, eyed Tiamat and said, Tiamat? Didn't expect to meet a stuck-up person like you. Well, not that it matters, actually it's better since you are here. Seems like you two have surpassed your limit. Tatsuya then raised his hand and asked, so Crom Kruak, and the mob characters, will you let us go peacefully? Huh, who did you call a mob? You human bastard? I am the great evil dragon Azadahaka, I dash. So the answer is no, huh, Tiamat, Kurumi, deal with them, said Tatsuya, not letting the mob, Azadahaka, finish his speech. Tatsuya then looked at Crom and asked, you interested in working for Cow's Brigade? I am only interested in fighting someone strong, and right now my orders are to hold you back, and it seems like you are quite strong. Tatsuya nodded his head and said, okay, here, catch, and threw a ball towards the evil dragon. Crom caught the weird-looking ball in his hand, looked at it with a curious expression on his face. What is this thing? Are you mocking me? Asked Crom in a cold voice. Tatsuya smirked and said, just press the button on the ball and you will know whether I am mocking you or not, if you are not scared, that is. Aachu. Hey, I didn't know even gods can catch cold. Shut it, mortal, if you want to live, said Loki, looking towards Cao with a glare on his face. Why do I feel like someone is going to be messed around by boss, just like what happened to me? You are challenging me. Nope. You think that I will be scared of these petty tricks of yours? Who knows, there is only one way that you can prove it to everyone, you know, said Tatsuya, shrugging his shoulders. Crom clicked his tongue and pressed the button present in the middle of the weird-looking ball, and immediately a red light covered him before he got pulled inside the ball. Tatsuya went forward, ignoring the surprised looks from the remaining 3 evil dragons and the laughing Tiamat and Kurumi behind him, and picked up the ball. Well, I got a dragon type, or a dark dragon type in this case, I guess. He then looked back at the girls and said, oh, I will be going ahead, come after you are done, said Tatsuya before he activated Kamui and just walked straight through the hallway, passing through the dragon's body. Once Tatsuya left, the 3 remaining dragons blinked in surprise for a while, and then one of them shouted, what the hell happened just now? Where is Crom? Forget that, after him, Laden. Hey, aren't you forgetting something, said someone, making the other dragons turn around. Once they turned around, they saw Tiamat in her dragon form looking at them with a smirk and said, we still have an unfinished business here, you know. Tiamat, you might be a dragon king, but don't underestimate the 3 of us, there is a reason why even dragons fear us. Kurumi looked at them and said, hey, Tiamat, let's just finish this soon and go after Tatsuya, said Kurumi as she placed her hand on Tiamat's body. Soon Tiamat's skin started to emit orange glow as Kurumi covered her body and various markings started appearing in her. I am lending you my power, so just one-shot them, said Kurumi. No need to say it twice, said Tiamat, and opened her mouth as energy started to gather in there. A tailed beast ball started to form in front of the mouth as well, whose size continued to get bigger and bigger. The 3 dragon who saw that shivered from the sheer power that the 2 combined beasts were emitting and decided to attack them while they are giving them an opening. But just as they started preparing an attack, huge chakra arms came out of Tiamat's body and held the dragons and prevented them from forming an attack. And though the dragons broke through those arms, many different arms continued to attack them, making it impossible for them to prepare an attack since they were busy dodging and blocking the incoming hands. Once Tiamat's and Kurumi's attacks were prepared, a given number of hands launched towards the dragons and held them up in the air. Tiamat pointed her head towards the 3 dragons up in the air and said, I hope this doesn't destroy the whole area. Don't worry, I have already locked the space. Attack will not spread that much, said Kurumi. Tiamat then fired her attack, comprising of a highly concentrated energy and an oversized tails beast bomb, which mixed up in the midair and blasted through the roof. But soon the beam stopped ascending as it crashed to the edge of locked space. Looks like those mobs got vaporized even before they were able to reach the top, said Kurumi as she turned back to her human form. Tiamat too turned back to her human form and said, well, they would have lost even against me. Taking you into the equation was just an overkill. Both of them stared at the beam which they fired before they shrugged their shoulders and started walking in the direction where Tatsuya went. After walking for around 20 minutes, both of them reached in front of a huge door. You think this is the place? Should be. There was no turns on the way, though there no smell nor any signs of him coming here. Well, he was in his intangible form. No way he would leave behind any scent or break through the door to go inside. Anyway, there is only one way to find out, said Tiamat as she knocked on the door and asked, Tatsuya, you in there? And a few seconds after that the door started opening, and once it opened it revealed Tatsuya standing in front of huge glass cylinder looking at something intently, while some girl was standing near Tatsuya. Oh Kurumi, Tiamat dome already. I heard a loud noise a while back. Seems like you two work together. Kurumi and Tiamat just nodded their heads in response as they looked towards the girl standing behind Tatsuya. The girl had short blonde hair and red eyes and seemed to be a few years older than Tatsuya's current teenage form. By the way, this here is Valerie Teeps, my hostage and the host of Sephiroth Growl. Valerie, these are my teammates and lovers. The one with orange hair, Kurumi, and the one with blue hair, Tiamat, the Dragon Queen, said Tatsuya, introducing the 2 parties. Valerie immediately bowed her head, greeting the 2 who introduced them as well. So, what is this hostage business? Asked Kurumi. Well, she is more or less the head of the Teeps faction, though the old Lucifer was controlling her. She is still the head, and since we are attacking her faction, I took her in as a hostage, said Tatsuya, not thinking much about it. So what's the real story? Asked Tiamat, knowing Tatsuya was just spouting bullshit. You, damn fur, speak. Valerie nodded her head and then started explaining what really happened. So, Tatsuya came and fought some people and then rescued you from your brother who was experimenting on you and then healed you, said Tiamat. Well, that's the gist of it, said Valerie. Tiamat nodded her head and then looked at the huge glass cylinder and asked, and what is it that you are doing? Science experiment, said Tatsuya, looking towards the cylinder which was filled with water and some bodies were in there. What kind of experiment? I am checking how much time it takes for different bodies who are weak to holy element to melt in a high-quality holy water, said Tatsuya. From the right, we have a Beelzebub, an Asmodeus, a Leviathan, and last but not the least a vampire. Aren't these the descendants of the original Miss? And that vampire must be the brother that the girl just talked about. Well, when I entered the room, the vampire said that he wanted to do an experiment with me, so I am doing an experiment with him just as he wished for. Kurumi and Tiamat looked towards Valerie, who looked down and said, I don't know, they were just like that when I woke up. That's fine and all, but why are you looking at him so passionately? Asked Kurumi. Tatsuya looked towards them and said, because of this, and cut his thumb a bit, and immediately Valerie latched onto his thumb, sucking the blood out of it, but a second later she said, ah. It closed again, but immediately realized what she just did and blushed in embarrassment and looked away. Apparently my blood is too irresistible for vampires, even for dampiers, but my regeneration doesn't allow them to suck much, said Tatsuya looking towards Valerie, who was too embarrassed to say anything. Here, don't shy, I don't mind since you are Gasper's friend. He is just like my brother, said Tatsuya. Ah, it seems like the vampire melts first, said Tatsuya as he noticed the vampire vanishing away in the holy water, and gave some blood to Valerie, who looked like she was in heaven and had a blissful look on her face. Tatsuya waited for a while, sitting on one of the beds there which the vampire used to experiment on their test subjects. He then looked at the bodies of the Mu descendants and noted that the Leviathan took the longest to melt because of their affinity to water. Valerie was listening to the tales of Tiamat and Kurumi, who were telling out their tales with the chest puffed up, since the young damper was looking at them with glittering eyes. Tatsuya looked at the three of them who were sitting a bit away from him having their chat while eating something, since Valerie was very hungry after the experiment. Meanwhile, Tatsuya was checking the situation with the others, especially the ones that were left outside the castle, dealing with the grunts. Though he didn't need to worry that much since the holy sword users along with George were more than enough to deal with the enemies who were quite weak against holy element. The god killers, the Valkyrie, and the heiress of Gremory too didn't have any problems as they just brute forced their way through them. But still the most impressive was Isamai, who somehow unlocked the Crimson Queen mode, and along with her Dragon Slayer magic and her sword was flying all around the field destroying the enemies without much problems. Saji and Sereorg also faced a lot of evil dragons on their way, though they were more than enough for them as Tatsuya made sure to make Saji unlock his scale mail and Sereorg was acting up as always, just punching the dragons away. Regulus did the job of dealing with the vampires and devils, not wanting to interfere with his king's fun. Cao and Loki were as expected, making the things way difficult for their enemies as a fight against a god, and the wielder of the strongest holy element weapon was way too much to deal against for the vampires and devils. Though the thing that Tatsuya was most interested in was the fight against the grandpa and the grandson, as Resim was like a typical villain, was telling his plan to his grandson, and both Vale and Baikao were listening to his plan with a serious look on their faces. The fight between the two devils then started once the old man was done with his explanations, and Baikao made sure that nobody else interfered in their battle just as Vala told him to. Resim, though, had an advantage because of his sacred gear canceller, but Vala came prepared for that as Tatsuya had already warned him about it. Black snake-like projections started to come out of Vala's body as started wrap around him, that compared with his stats that improved a lot by the training he did at Tatsuya's place along with the dragon gods made him stand just slightly below the super class devil. Though Tatsuya was surprised that Afaiz gave that much of her power to Vali, he also found out that it was just temporary and the power will fade away after a certain amount of time. So you decided to go with a temporary solution, huh? Pretty unexpected from Vali, but still, a good method nonetheless, thought Tatsuya. Vali then merged with the power as his armor appeared once again, though it was the queen version of his sacred gear, the Emperio Juggernaut drive and not the Diabolos dragon Lucifer form. Resim was shocked seeing Vali able to use his sacred gear and tried again to use his sacred gear canceller, but the next instant Vali appeared in front of him and punched him through multiple walls and then started dividing his power. Once Resim's power started to divide, Vali simply fired shit ton of demonic energy blasts at him without baby care as he was using his grandfather's power against him. Resim too didn't held back and attacked Vali in return, but Vali was easily able to dodge those attacks or just simply divided them and added it to his own power. Once he thought that the old man was weakened enough, he came in front of him and said, "Just suffer till your death now," and released some of Albion's poison on the old devil and pushed the old man down and sat on top of him to not let him escape and squirm till death. But still the old devil tried to kill his grandson with his power, but his weakened self could not damage the armor even a bit, and Vali just took out his phone and started recording the old man's death struggle. In the end, not being able to deal with his grandson, Resim pleaded to let him live, but Vali just looked at him after 10 whole minutes of pleading and asked, "Huh, were you saying anything?" making the old devil totally speechless at his words. Seeing that the old devil was not saying anything, Vali just shrugged his shoulders and held his phone and searched up some butts to use them later at night. Midway during his search the old devil died, but that went unnoticed by Vali, who was busy doing the research. It was until Baikao told him that everything was over that Vali realized that his grandfather died. He then deactivated his sacred gear and then made sure to not even leave even a speck of the old devil's corpse. Tatsuya, who saw all that, felt that everything was a bit anticlimactic, especially how Vali dealt with his grandfather, but just shrugged his shoulders and thought, well, I am awesome, so it's natural that my presence will make some awesome changes as well. Tatsuya then contacted Vali and said, "Happy now, butt dragon. I am happy, but don't use that title, you asshole, said Vala, walking back towards the entrance. My grandfather is dead, so we can go back now. I will treat you all, so let's party once we go back, said Vala with an excited tone. Tatsuya nodded his head and said, that's fine, but can you fetch the holy grail that Resim was in possession with for me? It must be somewhere around the room you just fought. Sure, what does it looks like? Asked Vala. You can just feel the holy energy that the grail must be emitting and take it, right? It must be quite a powerful holy signature. Vala and Baikao then stood at their spots and started searching for the holy signature of the grail, but we're not able to find any signature except for the CAO's sacred gear. Tatsuya, who heard that, was confused and called Valerie towards him, checked once again but still found that one of the grail were missing. Not knowing what was happening, Tatsuya tried to connect the missing grail with the ones inside Valerie and called Vali again. Is there a light glowing anywhere near you? I am trying to connect to the grail, so it must be responding and glowing. But still the answer was the same from Vala's end. Tatsuya, who was confused by what was happening himself, searched for the grail and found its signature, the dimensional gap. Immediately his eyes widened and he heard a voice. So Euclid-kun's theory was correct. Tatsuya Shiba does possess a mind-reading ability. Yahoo, am I audible? Well, I really look at my prey very carefully. Tatsuya was shocked hearing these voices, as he clearly heard and saw Resim and Euclid present in the dimensional gap with an army half the size of the ones present here. So as I told Vali earlier, let's start the plan, said Resim with a smile as he snapped his finger and Euclid started to break some seals. Seeing that there was another Resim and Euclid in the dimensional gap, Tatsuya immediately teleported back to his house in the chamber where Euclid was present, and to his surprise, Euclid was still there, currently suffering in the genjutsu that he cast on him earlier. Tatsuya immediately pulled him out of it and immediately checked his brain but didn't find anything weird with it. He seemed to have all the memories and knowledge like the Euclid should have. Hey, was there your twin brother or something like that? Asked Tatsuya. The silver-haired devil looked at Tatsuya as if he was an idiot and then glared at him for making him see that illusion he was earlier in. But Tatsuya ignored that and said, look here then, and then projected a screen which showed the scene of another Euclid and Resim along with the army. It's live, added Tatsuya, and then glanced at Euclid, who seemed to be shocked as well seeing that scene. What is this about, Tatsuya Shiba? Is this one of your illusions as well? Asked Euclid. Dude, we just killed that old geezer of a Lucifer, and the next moment I knew it, he was alive and kicking there in the dimensional gap along with that other Euclid and the army. Did you by chance foo *ked someone without protection, and that Euclid looking devil is your? Said Tatsuya. Stop. Don't say a foo *king word after that. I will tell you this one and only one time. There is no way I will do something that disgraceful with anyone, as I have pledged to give my virginity to Grafia Onisama, said Euclid with total determination. Tatsuya stared at him for a while and then said, so, you are a virgin and are planning to be one for the rest of your life. Understood, virgin brother-in-law. Euclid, who heard that, don't know why, but he felt that he took some major damage from what Tatsuya said. On to the important subject. Who is that other Euclid, then? Asked Tatsuya. I don't know, said Euclid truthfully, as Tatsuya had already checked his memories. Just as he was about to ask something else, the door of the room opened and both Ruya and Afaiz came in, with Ruya having a serious look on her face. Seeing that, Tatsuya sighed and said, so it is about to begin, huh? He then called the heads of all the factions that he knew and said, have any of you ever traveled in a flight? Hearing this question, most of them were confused as to why Tatsuya would be asking such a question. But the more experienced ones out of them felt that the situation was way Tatsuya-ish, and Azazel immediately asked, how much are we screwed? Screwed enough that having all of those magazines to be destroyed would be better than this, said Tatsuya in a serious tone. Azazel, Odin, and Zeus immediately turned serious as well, as now they felt that the situation was way too grim to be underestimated. Cersk looked at Tatsuya with a pleading look and asked, Tatsuya, it's not connected to Rome where Rias is, right? Tatsuya looked at the red-haired Siscon and said, yes and no. Rias along with some of us fought there in Rome against. Tatsuya then told them about what happened back in Rome, hearing which Cersk sighed that Rias was safe and at the same time was surprised knowing about Resim. So he is defeated, right? What's the problem now? Asked Susanoo. Well, we thought that we killed the old devil, which we actually did, but for some reason another one of the old devil and Euclid were found in the dimensional gap and are currently unsealing the beast of apocalypse. So I thought to warn you about the same and be prepared for quite a huge battle, said Tatsuya, making all the faction leaders serious. How much time do we have? Asked Michael. Tatsuya looked at Ruya, who said, 2 minutes. Tatsuya looked back at the faction leaders who were looking back at him, not saying anything at all. The silence continued for a few seconds, which was suddenly broken by Azazel, who said, all right, all files deleted from my computer. I don't want to leave any regrets behind. Hearing that, all of them focused on Azazel, who was sitting back comfortably in his chair, and said, I informed all the other factions all around the world about it while Tatsuya was explaining, so they heard about all this as well, and the Hindu, Celtic and the Chinese pantheons agreed to help. I already informed the masochist from my faction to spread the news, so as fallen angels are ready. Azazel then looked at everyone with his chest puffed up and an expression which was saying, I am way better than you idiots. Hearing that, none of the other faction leaders took any more time and went back to prepare before saying, we may be late, but we for sure will come to aid you. Now only Azazel and Tatsuya were there, and Azazel asked, if we came back alive, make sure to give me some of your files. You still have the hard copies with you? You know me very well, huh, said Azazel with a sagely nod. Suddenly Azazel's gaze fell on Uklid and said, Yo, how's you life been these days? It was fine, until this fucker decided to butt in, said Uklid while glaring towards Tatsuya. Shut it, virgin. Huh, this guy's still a virgin. You are the followed of the devil Lucifer, not the angel one. What's up with all this shit? Asked Azazel with a surprised tone. None of your business. Even Michael found a way to let the angels have sex with others and you are still a virgin. Pathetic, said Azazel with a displeased look on his face. But suddenly Azazel's eyes widened as he asked, Is there a problem with your thing? Uklid, who was getting angrier hearing Azazel's comments, glared at him and said, No it isn't. What will you do? Suck it. Huh, no I don't have tha dash. If not then just keep foo asterisk king quiet, you fallen asshole. No not asshole, you fallen bastard. Dude, just chill, no need to be that angry, said Azazel looking at a monitor checking out how the preparation is going on. He then looked towards Tatsuya and asked, Hasn't 2 minutes already passed? Yup, I have force teleported Vale and the other strong ones there, said Tatsuya. Then why are you not going yet? Asked Azazel. Knowing that old Lucifer, he must be monologuing right now, so I will go after 15 minutes, or by the time feel the power rise up considerably, said Tatsuya shrugging his shoulders. Azazel nodded his head thinking that it was fine and then asked, So who will be hosting the victory party? Who knows, not me for sure, I don't have enough space to accommodate all the factions at the same time, said Tatsuya. Neither do I. Wait, if we merge the land that you got from Hades and my faction land then it would be fine, proposed Azazel. Fine then, I don't mind, so you are the host then. Only if I returned back alive, if I die make sure to bury my body, if left, with all my collection. I will not leave anything behind, said Azazel with a gentle expression on his face. Tatsuya stared at him for a while and said, Sure, I will do that, so make sure that you die there. Nah, I will not try that. There are plenty more thing I have to do in my life, said Azazel laughing out loud before standing up from his seat and saying, Well, enough chit-chat for now, let's get going, the space has started distorting. Tatsuya too stood up from his seat and was about to go, but before he could Uklid said, Make a screen for me to project the live show. Tatsuya looked at Uklid and just shrugged his shoulders before making a screen for him and saying, Wish me luck. Uklid just snorted and said, I hope you die, after which he immediately felt his stomach making a sound. Not again, damn it. Tatsuya came out of the room he was in earlier and soon came where the other members of his team were and nodded, seeing that they were prepared in their battle gear. Tatsuya looked at them and said, You can go all out, but make sure to not get the allies get involved in your attacks. All of them nodded and soon a magic circle appeared under their feet and they teleported to the dimensional gap. As soon as they appeared, Ruya waves her hand and said, I will get the shell that I left behind, and then teleported away. Tatsuya, who saw the old Lucifer still monologuing, once again tried to read his mind but immediately felt something blocking it. But this time he didn't stop and instead broke through the mental defense of the Lucifer and said, So that's how you did that, you asshole. Feeling that someone just raped his mind, Resim looked towards the newcomers and said, Era, Tatsuya Shiba. It's not good to look into other people's mind like that, you know? I feel violated. Hearing him say that, both Vale and Tatsuya frowned and decided to just forget what happened just now. Tatsuya and the others then came beside people who were involved in the assault at the Teeps faction and Vale said, I don't know whether am I lucky or unlucky. On one hand I get to kill this asshole twice, but on the other hand why the hell do I have to kill this asshole twice? Tatsuya looked at him for a while before shifting his gaze towards Arthur and asked, Please give us the summary of his monologue that he must be giving on for quite some time. Arthur nodded his head and said, The simplest way to say that is, he had a way to make a clone of Afai's using some of her power, but that failed because of your intervention. And later he used that power of himself and the rest of his subordinates. Only this time the energy he used was that of the vampires from the Teeps faction, but still have them the memory to that point, and then hid himself with his army here in the dimensional gap, since somehow that assistant of his hypothesized that you can read minds and prepared a barrier for that on his and his leaders' minds. After that he gave a brief rundown of his plan and all about going to Otherworld and how powerless we all are in front of that creature thingy. He calls it Trihexa or something. Tatsuya nodded his head and looked at Uklid, who smirked seeing his gaze and showed him a middle finger. Seeing that, Tatsuya smiled and said, Hey virgin brother-in-law, do you want to know what happened to your body double? Hearing him being called like that, Uklid frowned, but all of a sudden his face started to turn pale as Tatsuya started sending what all happened to the other Uklid from Uklid's own perspective. Once all the info was transferred, Uklid had his head in hands and had a lifeless look in his eyes. Resim, who was beside Uklid, stared at him for a while and said, You were still a virgin, damn. He then looked at Tatsuya and said, You must have done something way intense to the other Uklid-kun. Aren't you a not kid? And looked at him with a playful smile and wiggled his eyebrows. Tatsuya looked at Vale and asked, Hey Vale, do you mind if I kill him this time? For some reason my hand is really itching. Vale stared at Tatsuya for a while and said, No. Tatsuya nodded and said, Okay, I am not guaranteeing that he will not die because of a misfire. Vale immediately equipped his balance breaker armor and said, A race to see who wins, it is then. And smirked behind his helmet. Resim looked towards his grandson and Tatsuya and then asked, I don't mind you both playing something, seeing that you two are very young and can still play, but do you mind telling me why is there a barrier around us? We are in dimensional gap, so I don't think there is a need for a barrier to prevent damage to the surroundings. Tatsuya smiled and said, that's not a protection barrier, that's a time dilation barrier. Hearing that, all of them looked at him with a confused look on their faces, not understanding why he would use a time dilation barrier. But all of a sudden Resevim's eyes widened and he said, you are one crazy mother fu * king son of a bitch, aren't you? Just as he said that, Tatsuya fired a blast of magic energy towards him, destroying his right arm in an instant, and immediately both Arthur and Tatsuya said in unison, language, while both of them covered Lei Fei's ears. Resevim looked at his right side, seeing he had one arm less, and said, that was my favorite arm, but soon a blob started to bubble up near the injured area and soon his arm came back. He then gave his arms a few practice swings and said, good as new, good job Uklid-kun, said Resevim, patting a lifeless Uklid. Soon various magic circles started surrounding them and people from different factions started appearing on there. Seeing that the fight had still not started, most of them were surprised, but Azazel looked around and said, so the time dilation idea really worked, huh? Sometimes I think, how the hell did I become such a badass genius, with a smug look on his face. So it was your plan, Uncle Azazel, said Resevim. If it ain't my nephew, wanna give your uncle a hug? I have chocolates for you, said Azazel while opening his arms for a hug. Every one of them all together decided to ignore the two idiots, and Cersk came forward and said, Resevim, as a devil and the current Lucifer, I will ask you to kindly surrender. Resevim looked towards Cersk and said in mocking tone, if it isn't the fact dash. Okay, you will not surrender, I understand, said Cersk and went back to his spot, earning several confused glances towards him. Hey, what the hell was that, Cersk-shan? Not cool at all, said Sirafal with slight angry expression on her face. Shut up, I don't want to be anywhere near that demon queen, said Cersk with a straight face, trying his best to hide his scared expression. If you forgot, reread ch 257 and 258. All of them looked at the spot where Cersk was earlier and saw Asia standing there humming a tune. Seeing that everyone was looking at her, she smiled and waved her hand. Hi. All of them stood at their spots without saying anything and then looked at Cersk, not knowing why he was scared of such a sweet girl. Seeing how Cersk was being looked at, those who already knew the reason of Cersk's deer were barely able to hold back from laughing. Don't get deceived by her outer appearance, you will regret it, you will surely regret it, said Cersk, making other think that the Mo was being crazy and decided to leave it at that. Well, I didn't get to say what I was going to, but yes, I am not surrendering, so, shall we begin? Roar? Suddenly the beast behind Resevim roared and immediately all the people became serious and ready to fight against the Cows Brigade. Resevim just smirked and said, looks like the show is about to begin soon. The battle suddenly started with all the cannon fodders from both the sides battling it out. Tatsuya was standing with his group and the same was done with the rest of the factions as well. Tatsuya, who looked around seeing who all the new people were, found one of the new factions beside him and said, hello there, I am Tatsuya Shiba. The people who were near him looked at him, at the people from the other side nodded their heads, and their leader said, I am Shiva from the Hindu faction. It's nice to meet you. Although the circumstances are not very good. Tatsuya looked at the trident-holding god, who was considered one of the strongest people all around the world, and said, indeed, I must say it is quite unfortunate to meet you in a battle like this, and then raised his gun and fired a blast forward, destroying a huge section of enemies. He then looked towards his team and said, the dragons are being a nuisance because of their defense. Isamai, Asia, Ingvild, Himmerit, and the other Nikosho deal with them. Isamai and Asia immediately activated their balance breakers and then launched forwards, followed by the others. Tatsuya then looked at the other faction heads and said, so shall we start the attack on the big guy, while pointed towards Trihexa. The faction heads looked at the giant beast attacking the others and was not damaged a bit by the attacks from the others and gulped their saliva. Tatsuya clapped his hands and said, all right, before taking him down we need to clear the area near him, as we can see only huge scale attacks are going to work and we don't want someone from our side getting dragged in those, right? So let's do that first. I will engage him during that time along with some of my friends. All of them widened their eyes and said, that is quite a good and safe idea for us, but who might these friends of yours be? Tatsuya patted the shoulders of two of the girls beside him and said, these two and the third friend must be here, now. Just as he said that, a portal appeared above them and from it the official top dog of the world appeared in all his majesty, making all the people from both the sides looked at it with their mouths open wide, except for Uklid and Resevim, who now became serious as their biggest threat appeared just now. I will go with Bakaya as well, said a monotone voice, and Afaiz got up near Ruya as well and transformed into her dragon form, making the already shocked audience, more shocked. Do you really need me to go with those two? Asked Kurumi, looking around with a deadpan look on his face. Hey, Tatsuya, don't tell me your friends you just mentioned are the world's strongest and the second strongest, asked Azazel while pointing at the two dragons. Second strongest and third strongest, I already beat Ruya, said Tatsuya, earning total silence from all the people in the dimensional gap, except for Asia, who just punched a dragon away. By the way, Ruya is great red, just so you know, informed Tatsuya. He then looked around seeing that the fight was totally stopped and then noticed the two silver-haired devils sneaking out of the zone which was restricting teleportation. He immediately got up in the air and fired a blast towards the two devils, but the attack was blocked by the huge beast, who roared back at him, pulling people back into the battlefield. Fuck it, I am too old for this shit, said Azazel as he flew forward, killing enemies on the way, and was followed by the other faction's heads and all. Tatsuya looked at Kurumi, who looked back at him before he got back in his body and said, "Call me if I am actually needed." Tatsuya just shrugged his shoulders as he saw the dragons and the beast already started the battle in between themselves, seeing which Tatsuya immediately separated the three of them in a barrier since the attacks were too intense for the nearby people. Meanwhile, in another part of the battlefield, Isami and the company were dealing with the evil dragons. Ingvild, who had taken control over many evil dragons using her sacred gear, was using them to attack their own kind. Suddenly Asia came near her and asked, "What are you doing, Ingvild-san?" Well, I don't use it much, but my sacred gear allows me to manipulate dragons, you know," said Ingvild, making a barrier to stop an incoming blast. Hearing that, Asia's eyes started twinkling and she said, "An efficient way to deal with the dragons, huh?" A magic circle then appeared in front of her and a huge evil dra cough cough asterisk her familiar appeared and roared loudly, earning the attention of many evil dragons on the field. Ingvild, who noticed the twinkling in Asia's eyes, thought, "It is not going to be something good," and asked, "Asia, just asking, but what are you planning?" Asia showed a bright smile on her face, making all those who didn't know her that much think that she was a saint, and said, "Tatsuya-san and Fai-chan once told me that I have dragon taming ability, so I am going to use that," with a cheerful tone. She then looked at her familiar and said, "Ratsu, it's your turn." The evil dra dash. The sprite dragon showed a malicious dash, grin and nodded his head and immediately fired a very powerful lightning blast towards the evil dragons, making them screech in pain. Asia then took a deep breath and with a cheerful tone said, "Listen here, you lowlives who should just drop dead. I want to form a pact with you winged reptilian shits, so who wants to cooperate?" But none of the dragon showed any intentions to do so, or more like the power of the lightning was so intense that they were unable to do so. The smile never left Asia's face as she looked at her familiar and said, "Do it," and immediately the power of the attack increased and killed all the dragons without even leaving behind their ashes. Those who saw that scene were awestruck, not knowing what to say. While this was the scene, a certain Siskon suddenly yelled, "See that? Did you finally saw the demon hiding behind that innocent smile? You regretting it now, right?" But was totally ignored by others who were busy fighting. Asia pouted and said, "Ah, those dragons must be the stubborn ones." Not even one of them accepted, but suddenly her face brightened and she said, "Oh well, there are a lot of these reptile shits here to try," and looked at another group of evil dragons who immediately tried to run away, seeing that they were being looked at by those innocent eyes. Ratsu, and once again the lightning was shot by the familiar. Asia this time got closer to the dragons who were being shocked and asked, "Hey, do any of you lowlives want to make a pact with me?" with an innocent look on her face. But the dragons, who could see the black magic energy gathered near her hands, were able to feel the dreadful feeling coming from it and immediately shook their heads in denial. Asia immediately fired her magic forwards, engulfing all the dragons in her blast, who started screaming in pain and agony as all their cells in their bodies were being continuously destroyed by the negative healing magic. Another group of mean dragons, let's go Ratsu. We will look for another group, and got on top of her familiar, and the Demon King and the evil dragon took off, making all the people who just saw the deadlines of Asia's power shiver. I'm fear, making a mental note to stay away from her. As Asia was busy doing a massac cough cough asterisk taming the dragons, the other people kindly got out of her way and were busy dealing with the rest of the Cows Brigade members. Tatsuya, who was guarding the area near the dragons and the beast so as to not let anyone get caught in their mess, was occasionally dealing with stronger of the evil dragons. He also kept an eye on the two silver-haired devils and noticed that Resim was currently stronger than he originally was, something that he thought was thanks to Uklid, who found a way to modify his and his master's body, though the said genius was still down and was not able to recover from the damage he received from getting the memories of the other Uklid. While Tatsuya was keeping an eye on the surroundings, a trident brushed past him, killing the army of dragons in front of it. Tatsuya looked at the person who threw the spear and said, "You sure are not willing to hold back and flaunt your title as the destroyer." Shiva, who summoned his trident back, looked at Tatsuya and said, "And you seems to have a lot of free time idling around here just like that?" Tatsuya, who heard that, didn't feel offended and said, "Well, I can surely deal with a lot," and fired another blast from his gun, killing a huge number of opponents at once, and then said, "I am also called the god of destruction, you know, though I prefer to be called a man of culture, so do refer to me as that." Shiva, who saw the power of Tatsuya's attack, nodded his head, feeling that the attack was indeed powerful, and asked, "Then why not take action on your own?" Tatsuya shrugged his shoulders and said, "Many reasons. First, that I am here making sure none of you get caught in between the three top powers, below me of course, but still top powers nonetheless. Second, if I dealt with all this here, the other factions might get over-reliant on me, at least the ones who are allies with me. Third, what do you think will the other faction will think of someone who dealt with a whole terrorist organization and a being which is even considered a myth amongst the supernatural factions being on par with the world's strongest creature?" Shiva remained silent for a while and thought about what Tatsuya said, and after a while narrowed his eyes and said, "They will admire and fear you, which will lead to them making an alternate alliance to deal with someone way stronger than them, which will ultimately ruin my life. On the other hand, if we let them participate and let them think that we relied on them as well to deal with such a situation, those feelings of fear and administration will not be too extreme. You must be quite knowledgeable about it, since you are one if not the strongest gods in this world, aren't you?" Shiva nodded his head in response and then with a smile said, "I see, it seems like you are a good and admirable personality as well, along with the powers." Tatsuya nodded, but all of a sudden both of them raised their weapons as they noticed a horde of dragons trying to take advantage of their distracted selves. Both the destroyers then fired their attacks towards the dragons, wiping them out without even leaving a trace of them behind. Both of them then looked up and Tatsuya raised his hand and curled it into a fist. What's that for? Why are you raising your fist like that? Tatsuya, who heard that question, widened his eyes in surprise and then thought, an innocent one after a long time, I so gonna enjoy this. It's a kind of greeting. Two people bump their fists against each other's, like handshakes, we call it fisting. Azazel, who was nearby the two destroyers, suddenly started coughing like crazy and was laughing while doing it as well. He then looked at Tatsuya with a surprised look on his face and thought, he have some guts messing with one of the world's top 10 and the head honcho of one of the strongest factions around the world. Fisting, said Shiva as he bumped his fist with Tatsuya's. He then looked at his hand and said, what do you know? You get to know new things even in a battlefield. I will tell about it to my family as well. Tatsuya nodded with a smile on his face and said, make sure to specially mention about it to your wife. Asked Shiva with a confused look on his face. Oh, nothing. Sorry, I was thinking about something else. By the way, can you stop your mind reading? It's not going to work on me. Even Great Red was not able to do it. Shiva widened his eyes in surprise and then lowered his head a bit and said, sorry, it's just that we being in battle makes me want to know what someone is thinking, especially someone who is new and have the power comparable if not greater than me. Tatsuya just patted the head of the other destroyer who was smaller than him and said, it's fine, no need to worry. Now why don't you go and deal with them while I continue my guarding duty here, and gave him a slight push. Shiva, who was surprised at being treated like a child, just followed what Tatsuya said and then left to deal with the enemies. Meanwhile, Tatsuya, who just sent the god of destruction away, felt that someone was trying to contact him and made magic circle near his ear and asked, what is it, Daiher? You finished what I asked you to do? Yes, it's done, and I have that man captured. Not that it was difficult considering he was already pretty beaten up during the attack on the Underworld. So what should I do with him? He is technically my father-in-law, would to be. Wait there, I will send a clone. You get back to your post of protecting the Underworld just in case, said Tatsuya and made a clone. The clone then saluted the original and then teleported away. Well, time for the fuckcook man to become the dead man, muttered Tatsuya while looking at Asia, who just passed by him. Hey Asia, you doing good? Asia, who was sitting on her dragon in her balance breaker, looked towards Tatsuya with a smile, and so did her dragon, and said, yes, we are fine, Tatsuya-san. No need to worry. We found an effective way to deal with them. We are trying for it to work, so just wait for a bit, and then flew away. Anyone who heard them could feel that an innocent and cheerful girl was trying her best to help them. It's just that the blood dripping from her face and fists along with the blood around the dragon's mouth and teeth made the imagination of the people who saw them turn a total 180 degrees. Tatsuya just smiled at her and used his magic to clear off the blood off her while the battle was going on. The Miss were being taken care of by the horde of evil dragons and devils. Though none of them was affected by them getting surrounded and just kept on blasting geared way through them. Cersk was making sure of not leaving any dragons near him, as he heard that the demon queen was looking out for dragons to tame them, and in his opinion having her more dragons was a recipe for disaster for the whole world, and decided to make some effort to ensure world peace. Ajuka, Sirafal, and Falbium looked at the leader of the mess and just shook their heads. It was the first time they had seen him like that and weren't sure how to deal with it, though none of them were going to say anything to him as they knew how much trouble was caused during the attack on the Underworld, and Cersk, being the in charge of the domestic affairs of the Underworld, worked his ass off to make sure everything was fine, and none of them were in the mood of switching places with the red-haired Mu. Ajuka patted his best friend's shoulder and said, just bear with for a while, I will arrange a holiday for you after this is over. Cersk looked at him with a peaceful smile on his face and said, don't worry, I have already asked Tatsuya to help me regarding that. So you don't need to do anything. In fact, I invite all three of you as well, since it would be pretty boring on my own. Is that so? Well then I will make sure to make some room in my schedule, said Ajuka, while the other two Miss just smiled, seeing that Cersk was fine, a bit. Aren't you being optimistic thinking that you would be able to live after this, you fake miss? Suddenly all four of them heard a voice and turned around to see Resim looking at them with a smile on his face. You interrupted my speech earlier, Mr. Fake Lucifer. So, was there a need for that in the first place? You would be saying something that I have heard a lot of times from the descendants of original Miss, a lot of times anyway. Aren't you being too out of line being in front of a real Lucifer? Lucifer or not, you and your ways are not something that I can ever respect, so don't think that I would spare you or something just because you are a devil like me. Huh? A devil like you? Don't make me laugh, you faker. There is no way my magnificent self is comparable to the likes of you, said Rezevim and brushed his hair. Cersk, what should we do about him? Asked Falbium. Oh, about that I would like to see what the fake Lucifer is capable of firsthand, so if you don't mind, shall we dance? Said Rezevim as a grin appeared on his face. Cersk's robe disappeared as he said, keep a bit of distance from me, and then came forward. Rezevim's smile didn't falter as he saw the crimson-haired man coming forward. The auras around both the Lucifers started getting denser, and in just a blink of an eye both of them were on the level of high Satan class. So you are holding back against me, huh? Gotta say, not very happy seeing a faker holding back against me, said Rezevim. Shut up, like you yourself are not holding back, said Cersk as he gathered a dense ball of power of destruction in his hand and fired it towards Rezevim. Rezevim dodged the attack rather easily but still looked back, seeing the ball of destruction coming in contact with a dragon and destroying it in an instant. Whistle, you sure want to deal quite a bit of damage from the beginning, said Resim, still looking behind, but raised his hand as he blocked a kick from Cersk, which made a strong gust of wind. Cersk's expression didn't change as the power of destruction surrounded his hands once again, and he fired a beam towards Resim, who covered his hand with demonic energy and flicked the beam away, though the demonic energy around his hand immediately got destroyed by the pod. He then pushed Cersk's leg away using his other end and then fired a blast again at Cersk, who easily dodged the beam. But seeing him dodge, Resim smirked, making Cersk confused as he turned and saw the beam heading towards Rias and her peerage. Seeing that, Cersk's eyes widened as he immediately rushed towards his sister and her peerage, but the next instant Resim appeared above him and said, "Ah, don't do that. The night is still young, you know," and fired another series of blasts at Cersk, who simply destroyed those attacks using his pod. Cersk then came behind Rias's peerage and then fired a beam with his own pod to destroy the attack. "Rias, are you fine? Get away from here. The intensity of the battle here is going to be at another level from now on," Cersk said while looking at Rias from the corner of his eyes and making sure to keep an eye of Resim. Rias turned around to look at her brother with a surprised look on her face, but after hearing his words a determined expression appeared on her face. Cersk didn't say anything and immediately moved his hand and said, "What is the meaning of this? Who are you?" asked Cersk in a demanding tone as he held Rias's hand, which had a dagger aimed at Cersk's. He. Hearing that, a malicious grin appeared on Rias's brace and her peerage turned around as well with a similar grin on their faces. Rias's body then began changing and soon a devil appeared in her and her peerage's place, with all of them being at ultimate class level. All of them then threw the dagger towards Cersk, who immediately released the pod, now knowing that it wasn't her sister and her peerage, and killed them in an instant. He then glared at Resim as pods started to gather around him and the aura started turning denser and said, "You are quite daring, seeing that you used my sister against me. I gotta say, you were quite ruthless there, even though that devil had your sister's appearance just a moment ago. Huh, are you out of your mind, that lowlife? Tried to take the appearance of the world's most beautiful and cutest little sister. He should be glad that his death was at least a painless one." He then fired a big wave of pod at Resim, who made a barrier to block the attack, but the barrier only stood for a couple of seconds before it too get destroyed. Resim immediately tried to dodge but was not able to do that in time and got his legs destroyed completely by the attack. Resim looked at his now missing legs and then looked back at Cersk and said, "Ha, you didn't got my balls," was all that Resim said as his legs started to regenerate back, making Cersk narrow his eye and thinking, that is not a power that a Lucifer should possess, then that means that he must have modified that body of his somehow. "You faker, let's get serious now. I still have a grandson to kill, you know, so let's hurry up," and they immediately started powering up. Cersk too started powering up and the area around them started to get chaotic by sheer demonic energy that the two of them were releasing with not intention of taking it back in their bodies. Tatsuya, who saw that, made a barrier around them and then looked back at the other god of destruction fighting destroying BTHE enemies with his trident and said, "You really are getting serious there, Shiva. Don't get someone jit caught in your attacks." Shiva looked back and said, "Don't worry about that. The title of being one of the top 10 is not just for show, you know. I can control my power and attacks." Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "By the way, did you know that there is a new term for those who are in the top 10? Huh, is that so? We don't get up to date with such kind of information back at Kailash." "What is the new term?" asked Shiva, still fighting the enemies. "Those who are in the top 10 are called Lilicons nowadays," said Tatsuya with a smile on his face. "Huh, Lilicon? So that is the new term?" asked Shiva with a curious look on his face. Tatsuya nodded his head with a friendly smile and said, "You are now a Lilicon, Shiva, so be proud of that." Shiva, who saw Tatsuya's friendly and trustworthy smile, nodded his head and with a smile on his face said, "A Lilicon, the god of destruction. Shiva, fine, I accept that new title." Tatsuya smiled and made sure to record the scene for future and said, "Yes, so go forth and show them the power of a Lilicon." Shiva, who heard that, smiled and thought, he really is a great person, cheering for someone he just met and helping someone like me who is not that up to date with the world. He then took a deep breath and said, "I will show you the might of a true Lilicon," and gripped his trident tightly and immediately rushed towards the enemies, destroying hordes of them in an instant. Tatsuya just smiled and said, "Ignorance is such a bliss." Cersk's and Resivim's power continued to surge higher and higher and soon both of them were at super class level and had changed their appearances. Cersk's looked like a humanoid creature made of power of destruction, while Resivim also looked demonic instead of being human like he was before. Uklid-kun's enhancements are there. Let's do it, faker." But Cersk didn't say anything and just casually swung his hand, firing a huge amount of pod at Resivim. Resivim immediately sidestepped her and dodged the attack and fired his own demonic energy in a similar fashion as Cersk did. Though his energy just kept getting destroyed as it reached towards Cersk, and in the end only a small amount of it hit Cersk, which did next to nothing to the pod-covered Cersk. Cersk then rushed towards Resivim and punched him. Resivim, who saw the punch coming towards him, covered his hand in demonic energy and blocked it and said, "Don't be too full of yourself," and punched him with his other hand. Cersk blocked the incoming punch and said, "I would like to say the same to you as well," and then started to release his energy, thinking of destroying Resivim in one go. But Resivim didn't even flinch a bit and released his own demonic energy, which was pushing back Cersk's energy. "Let me tell you about one of the enhancements that Uklid-kun did to my body. I no longer felt pain and kicked Cersk's abdomen. Cersk, who saw the attack coming towards him, didn't even try to dodge and instead increased his energy output, destroying Resevim's energy and engulfing Resevim inside it. After a while the energy dissipated and nothing was left of the Lucifer. Cersk then turned around and was about to go back, but then he noticed a blob of some kind appearing there, and soon it grew back into Resevim, a naked Resevim. Resevim looked at himself and then looked towards Cersk and said, "Just wait a bit, I need to cover my awesomeness." Cersk, who heard that without any hesitation, fired various blasts of pod at the Lucifer, totally in the willing to destroy him while he was distracted. In another part of the battlefield, Tatsuya was guarding the big three while also attacking Trihexa from time to time to wither it down. Soon a magic circle appeared beside him and one of Tatsuya's clones appeared with person sitting on a wheelchair with his hands and legs tied to the chair and a gag on his mouth. The clone then disappeared and Tatsuya looked at person and said, "Good to see you after a long time, Zosan." Tatsuya, as he smiled as he looked at the crimson-haired father-in-law of his. Zatifuk wanted to say something, but because of the gag was just making some non-understandable noises. Tatsuya removed the gag from his mouth and said, "Let's not beat around the bush and get straight to topic. Are working with the Cows Brigade and was the one who informed the Shiba family about Miyuki's whereabouts." Hearing his question, Zatifuk's eyes widened a bit but soon turned normal as he said, "What is the meaning of this, Tatsuya Shiba? You do know that you are treating a member of council who is still recuperating like this, right? Are you declaring a WA dash? How I do that against someone who willingly came to aid all the factions against the Cows Brigade even though you are still injured. You will be a role model for the devils of the younger generation," said Tatsuya with a smile on his face. Hearing that, Zatifuk narrowed his eyes, now knowing what the human in front of him was planning. "So were you the one who told the Shibas?" asked Tatsuya once again. "No, it was not me," replied Zatifuk with a firm tone. "Ah, he is lying." The screen turned red, said a voice from behind Zatifuk, making him surprised. Soon a person came forward from behind him and revealed himself to be the Governor General of the Fallen Angels. "Here, see, it's red," said Azazel as he showed the screen of the device that he was holding to Tatsuya and Zatifuk. "What the hell is that, and how can you blame me, Governor?" demanded the crimson-haired patient. Azazel looked at him and said, "This here is a lie detector that I developed which, as you can guess, detects lies. And before you question its credibility, I will say that both its credibility and accuracy are great, and it was even proven by a game of truth and dare that I played with Tatsuya, Vale, and Odin, in which a lot of my dark secrets were revealed. And you must know that when I am saying that those were my dark secrets, you can tell how deep and embarrassing the shit must have been. I am never doing that again." Both Tatsuya and Zatifuk looked at Azazel for a while before Tatsuya looked at the redhead and said, "Anyway, Asia." Just as Tatsuya called her, a lot of cries of pain and against were heard, and a few moments later Asia arrived on top of her dragon along with Ingvild, who was sitting on top of the dragon as well. "What is it, Tatsuya-san?" said Asia cutely with blood-stained face. "Can you, my dear father-in-law?" He was not able to hold himself back, knowing both his children are fighting here with their lives on the line, said Tatsuya as he cleaned his sweet blonde-haired nun, who smiled brightly while having her face cleaned. "Of course," said Asia as a green glow enveloped her hand and she punched the redhead's face, disfiguring it in an instant. "Oof, Tatsuya, I am glad I am not your father-in-law," and patted Tatsuya's shoulder. Yeah, you are not my father-in-law, Mr. Brother-in-law," said Tatsuya, making the fallen angel confused when suddenly his eyes widened and he asked with shock, "Don TT, tell me, why you and Gabriel?" Tatsuya smiled and said, "Let's get along in future as well, brother-in-law. I won't let my sister marry someone like you, or so I wanted to say to someone, but it looks like I would not be able to do that anymore," said Azazel. Tatsuya ignored him and then looked at Asia and Ingvild and said, "Throw him in front, big a group of dragons. Ingvild, control them. I will control him, make him fight some of the dragons for a while and let him die bravely soon after that by letting him become Dragon Chow," said Tatsuya Bass. He cleaned the blood-stained sprite dragon as well. Ingvild banned Asia nodded and then left to fetch a group of dragons while Tatsuya manipulated his body and memories to let the man die courageously, and will let Cersk and the others know about it later. He then looked at Azazel and said, "Now then, brother-in-law, you will play the main role here." "I don't like the sound of that at all. Change the way you call me back to normal." "And what is the role?" complained Azazel. "The traitor will injure the governor of Fallen Angels while the was busy dealing with some dragons and get hit by a surprise attack. Then chase after the traitor who already was far away, and by the time you reach there he is already Dragon Chow," explained Tatsuya. "Nice script, but why not you play the lead role?" asked Azazel. "How many people do you think will believe that I got injured by a lowlife like him?" asked Tatsuya with a deadpan look on his face. Azazel sighed and said, "All right, let me show you how great of an actor I really am." "Yes, and to help you I will make sure that the scene look real," said Tatsuya as he teleported away. "Wait, what?" said Azazel, but soon saw himself surrounded by a group of evil dragons. His brows twitched in annoyance as he yelled, "Fuck you, Tatsuya." "Sorry, brother-in-law, I am straight," replied Tatsuya from somewhere else. Continuing their battle, the super-level Lucifers were firing huge blasts of their demonic energy at each other without thinking about consequences. The huge beams comprised of their demonic energies were clashing against each other, trying to push the other back, but to no avail as they kept on putting more and more energy behind it. "You know, Faker, I might as well think that you are enjoying seeing my awesomeness, taking the fact that you are not letting me dress up or even cover it up," said Resevim, still naked and his hands stretched out, firing the attack. Say whatever you want, there is no way I will let someone who tried to use my sister against me let go like that, said Cersk seriously as he once again increased the output of his energy, which started pushing the beam clash in his favor. This is really straining me a lot, muttered Resim as his facial expression, which has been relaxed for the whole time, started to crack up a bit. Hey, said Resim as his aura started to grow even more and increased the power of his attack, pushing them back to stalemate, making Cersk in his pod form frown. Cersk's reserves of demonic energy were nearly half depleted because of his clash against the old man. He was pushing himself to the fullest and had even killed the man for about a dozen of times. But the Lucifer in front of him just kept on reviving, making him frustrated by this. He even dared to use Rias's doppelgangers in the fight for about 7 times as well, among which he even got hit once by them but just shrugged it off. You know, for a faker you are doing quite well. Though you swing that way, I still can say you earned a tiny bit of respect from me, said Resim with a small smile on his face. Oh, as tiny as that wrinkled up joke of dick of yours? Asked Cersk sarcastically, making the old Lucifer silent for a while. Resim took a deep breath and said, you know what, forget it, you even lost that now. Cersk snorted and said, just shut the hell up already. Fine man, as you wish, said Resim as he stopped his attack and flew up above. Cersk, seeing that, moved his hand to attack the old Lucifer, but Resim kept on dodging it. If you are trying to wear me out, then that is very low of you, said Cersk, slightly annoyed by the geezer. Oh, not at all, I am not waiting for you to wear out, I am waiting for him to cheer up, said Resim. Hadash. Cersk wanted to say something, but before he was able to, he felt an attack coming towards him and moved from his spot. He then turned his head only to see a recovered Uklid heading towards Resim. Uklid then gave a cape to Resim, who took it and wrapped it around his waist. Oh, windy, said Resim while winking towards Cersk. I really want to puke, thought Cersk as his face cringed seeing the old Lucifer's antics. Now then, faker, you will face our true power. Ready, Uklid? Uklid nodded and said, after this we are going to deal with Tatsuya Shiva as well, right? Yes, him too, though I think Trihexa would probably be done with him by that time, said Resim, thinking about the possibility. But while he was thinking, Cersk had charged a huge amount of concentrated pod in his hand and fired it towards the silver-haired duo, who just shrugged their shoulder and let themselves get hit by the orb. Cersk, who anticipated what they were probably thinking, stood at his place ready for the attack, but soon felt 2 presence approaching him. Where the hell is that dem geezer? Asked Vala, cladded in his Emperor Juggernaut armor. Are you alright, Cersk-san? Asked Isamai in her own Crimson Queen armor. You two, what are you both doing here? Asked Cersk. That's bright, Vala. Wait for a bit before it's your turn to get killed, said a familiar silver-haired geezer, again revived after death. Cersk and the 2 heavenly dragons turned their heads to see the silver-haired duo alive, and this time had their clothes on, courtesy to Uklid. Damn geezer, how dare you make me kill you twice, yelled Vala. Isamai-kun, go back or you will get caught in our clash, said Cersk without even looking at her. That won't be possible, Cersk-san. Tatsuya made this barrier in a way that you can only enter, not exit until he wants, said Isamai, ready to fight. Ask him to send you out, said Cersk. No time for that, said Isamai as she and the other 2 felt the energy increase in the silver-haired duo. Let me show you the true power of the body enhancements that Uklid-kun made, said Resim as both Uklid and Resim took a pose and a light surrounded them, with a few magic circles appearing around them. Just as the light died down, the magic circles revolved around the 2 of them for a while before it broke and revealed a different creature with 4 arms, an ash-colored body, silver hair, and 4 eyes. Now let us see who kills who, grandson, faker, said a voice which seemed to be a mixture of the 2 silver heads. They fu *king fused, said Isamai as she looked at the new, demon-like creature. But none of them responded as Resid, the fusion name, appeared directly in front of the trio and punched the super devil away. The 2 heavenly dragons didn't took much time to register what happened and punched the demon simultaneously, sending him flying. Divide boost. Both the heavenly dragon looked at each other and said at the same time, together, and then nodded simultaneously as well. Cersk, who was punched away, soon balanced himself and followed the heavenly dragons, who were already battling the fused silver heads. Get out of the way, said Cersk seriously as multiple beams of pod came out from all over his body and rushed towards Resid, surrounding him from all directions. Isamai and Vala, who saw that, immediately flew away from him. Divide, 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 divide. Boost, 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 boost. Transfer. The fused guy felt the energy inside him deplete at a rapid pace while the attack fired by the Mujust got stronger and faster. Soon Resid got impaled by all the beams that were fired at him and his body started to corrode. Ha, you think that it will defeat me? Don't forget that I can regenerate, and now 2 times at that. Power. What the hell is the Dragon Ball shit happening here? First fusion, now Bu level regeneration, said a new voice, making all of them turn their heads to see the person. Soon they noticed Tatsuya coming towards them, but he just went past them and then took out a katana and impaled it in Resid's stomach. The weapon's name is Murasame. It will give a cure to anyone who even receives even the slightest of cuts from it, and will start killing your cells. Let's see how you regenerate, just in case. Here another sword. It's an anti-regeneration and immortal sword by one of my favorite heroes of all time, Deadpool. Ah, how sweet of you. Thanks dude, said a distant voice while reading this. Tatsuya, who heard some kind of voice, looked around but shrugged his shoulders once he found nothing. He then walked away from them and said, let's go, he is done for. Vala and the other two looked at him without saying anything when Cersk said, "No matter how grateful I am for his death, that was still anticlimactic, way too anticlimactic. I mean, why the hell did fight him for that long?" He then looked at the two heavenly dragons who just shrugged their shoulders, and Vala said, "Who cares? What's done is done. Che, I only get to kill him once," and then flew away. "I will be going as well," Cersk-san said Isamai, and flew towards Tatsuya's direction. Meanwhile, in another part of the battlefield, "Tatsuya, this is getting way out of hand." "Where the hell is that traitor?" said Azazel as he kept on attacking the evil dragons. "Stay away from me," said Azazel as he dodged a tail coming towards him and then cut it using his light spear. "Azazel, it's starting, action," said Tatsuya as suddenly Zyticus came towards him and slashed his back, making Azazel groan in pain. "That foo asterisk king asshole, he really did hit me," thought Azazel as he struggled to fly for a bit. Zyticus on the other hand tried to run away, but just as he was about to go away, a dragon appeared in front of him and ate him in an instant. "And cut? Asia? Heal him. Ingvild, take them away." Both the girls nodded and did what Tatsuya told them, and then looked towards the giants and said, "Now only the beast is left, and the cannon fodder." Tatsuya, who was now alone with Azazel, patted his shoulder and said, "Good acting. Good acting, my ass," said Azazel as he shrugged Tatsuya's hand off his shoulder. "Whatever, it's done now, and the silver-haired duo are dead. Do you know that they fused?" "Huh, for real? Gross. I am not into exhibitionism, not to mention YAOI. Looks like that virgin devil took my words to heart and decided to lose his, by sacrificing his ass," said Azazel. "You do know that the one whom you told that is still trapped at my home, right? Oh, so, he willingly gave it to him. Damn, such loyalty." He then looked towards Barakil and the other fallen angels and said, "I am so glad that my boys are not that loyal to me." "Forget boys, even the girls that were once in your harem were not loyal to you," said Tatsuya. Azazel held his chest as if something pierced him, and he looked at Tatsuya and said, "I should have known that it was bad to use my lie detector to play truth and dare with you freaks." Tatsuya shrugged his shoulders and said, "So you fine now?" Azazel moved his arms and body a bit and then said, Mostly recovered. What about others? How's the situation?" "Well, I made Cersk busy fighting with the moose so as to not let him see our shoot. Once it was done, my clone went and dealt with them. I let go of my captured Crom and let it deal with the main evil dragons, saying that if he dealt with all the dragons here I will fight him. As for the cannon fodder, well, the others are dealing with them, but it won't take much time," said Tatsuya. Azazel nodded and then gave a tired sigh before his glance went towards the three giant beasts fighting against each other and said, "So I guess only that one is left." Tatsuya nodded his head as he silently weakened the barrier, which started cracking up, making all the people in the gap look at it with shock. Soon the barrier broke, making a cracking sound, and the aura and the power of the beast spread across the whole field, making every one of them tense. Azazel looked at the sight for a while before he facepalmed and said, "I will go and command my subordinates. I really miss the good old days when the strongest person I had to fight against was my father. It wasn't that bad," and then flew towards his subordinates. Tatsuya telepathically called his team, which soon assembled near him, and all of them took some distance from the fight between the beast. "So what are we gonna do now?" asked Himare. "Hit him with everything you all have got. No holding back. Join with the other factions. Cannot let them feel that useless now, can we?" said Tatsuya half-heartedly as he informed Ruya and Afaiz about what he was planning to do. All of them nodded as Tatsuya slowly got up into air, gathering attention from all the factions. Well, not beating around the bush, the leaders of the Cows Brigade are taken care of, and now the only thing that needs to be dealt with is that thing. So all of you can stop holding back and thinking about preserving energy and let it all out on him. And just let me tell you that it can regenerate, so don't be a cheapstake at attacking. That would be a problem," said Tatsuya. He then gave a fake cough and took in a deep breath and yelled, "So give that who know what it is everything you have got. Fire in the hole." On his command, everyone from his team, Rias's and Vala's group and the faction leaders started firing their strongest attacks. Seeing that their leaders started, the subordinates started attacking as well. "Yeah, that's the spirit, don't hold back. Use violence. Use the foo asterisk king violence. If it is not working, it just means that you are not using enough of it," said Tatsuya as the attacks phased through his body. After that he came back to his team, who were busy attacking. Seeing that, Tatsuya smiled as he fired some magic attacks as well. Ruya and Afaiz immediately got out of the way as the attacks connected with the beast, making it roar in anger. After a while, once the attacks slowed down a bit because of a lot of people getting out of magic, they saw that the wounds on the beast's body healing up in no time. Seeing that their attacks were not doing much, they became shocked as the attacks started to slow down even more as hopelessness started to appear at the faces of the people. "Well, it's time then," thought Tatsuya Bass. He glanced towards Azazel, who nodded his head and said, "Hey Tatsuya, can you do something about it? It's getting annoying and dangerous." Tatsuya nodded his head and said, "Pull everyone back, you might not be willing to get caught in this one." Hearing him, every one of them, even Azazel, frowned a bit, thinking about what kind of attack was Tatsuya planning to do. All the faction leaders started to pull back along with their subordinates and looked towards Tatsuya with curiosity. Seeing that the attacks have stopped, the beast started to charge its attacks as well, seeing which Tatsuya used his telekinesis to hold the beast in its place. He then took out a huge blaster and pointed it towards Trihexa. "Sorry big guy, just sleep for eternity now, okay," said Tatsuya as his aura started to get dense and the space around them started to shake, making all the factions tremble. A slight greenish glow came out of Tatsuya's body as he charged the magic in his blaster and thought, "Should I call out the name Kurumi? Sure, go for it. It is first time for a lot of them to see your attack, replied Kuromi, who was inside of him. Tatsuya gave a slight nod, and then multiple magic circles started to appear in front of Tatsuya, which got absorbed by the blaster. He then pulled the trigger and released all the energy that he stored in one go and said in a monotone but audible enough voice, "Material, burst." Just as he said that, Trihexa got engulfed in a huge glowing orb of energy which started to expand more and finally stopped just in front of Tatsuya. The beast that was caught inside the blast roared in anger and pain but was unable to move because of being held by telekinesis. It tried to split apart, but that too also failed, and in the end only relied on its regeneration, which was not quick enough to cover for the damage that was being done to him. After 10 minutes of continuous damage, the ball of energy started to shrink down, showing no signs of Trihexa's existence. Tatsuya then turned around and said, "It's over, I guess." Why yeah, and immediately the whole crowd started yelling in happiness. Tatsuya smiled and walked back towards his group and was commended by a lot of people from different factions. Tatsuya just thanked them and let them go and expressed their gratitude to their own faction members who participated in the battle. Tatsuya waited for a bit for the dragon gods to return, and once they returned, Afaiz immediately came and stood in front of Tatsuya, who just patted her head with a smile on his face. Afaiz just stood there with her eyes closed, feeling blissful and totally ignoring everyone. Everyone looked at them for a while, seeing for the first time that someone interacting with whom they supposed to be the top of the power levels like that. Tough that attention from them suddenly disappeared when one of them said, "Hey Odin, you are still a Lilicon just like me, right?" Hearing that, everyone turned their heads to see a young god of destruction looking at the head of the Norse mythology with a prideful smile on his face. No need to be humble, I can see that you are the same as before. Well, let's meet again soon, said Shiva as he waved his hand and teleported back to Kailash, leaving behind a crowd who was looking at Odin with a deadpan look on their faces. Seeing that, both Tatsuya and Azazel started laughing, not knowing what to say, but still made sure to record the whole ordeal for future.
Hello everyone! As we wrap up this video, I want to share a quick note. I have a Patreon account. If you'd like to support me and enjoy on-demand audiobooks, you can become a Patreon member. Alternatively, you can check out my Google Drive link, which has 500+ novel audiobooks available through my Ko-fi or Patreon shop. I appreciate your support.